Kenjaku had just released 10 million cursed spirits in order to prepare the barriers for the Culling games, as Yuji activated Flowing Red Scale, attempting to rush at Kenjaku as fast as possible to try and get Gojo at the last moment, to try and get Gojo from the prison realm, but he failed. They were unable to save Gojo. Kenjaku's plan was a complete success. This ended up forcing a split in the group. After all, Kenjaku had escaped and not everybody had the same intention of what to do next. Kamo and Megumi both had people they needed to check up on above all else and move in order to get them into a safe location away from all the chaos that was to come. Panda was also in a similar boat. Nanami still needed to recover as well after everything that had happened from Shibuya, and Maki was going to go with Nanami, mainly because she needed to get more weapons and she still felt a need to get stronger, so she was figuring out a way in order for her to do that and what to do next in her own plans. The other members of Kyoto High other than Todo himself were planning to go with Maki in order to regroup and plan. However, right now Yuji felt an immense desire to eliminate as many curses as possible. After all, he still felt responsible for all of this, and he wanted to help as best as he could. Choso was of course going to stay with Yuji, after all he wanted to back his own brother up. Todo was in a similar position, and Nobara was also joining them, making a joke that she wasn't going to let Yuji get ahead of her in this, almost making it a little bit of a competition. Of course, Yuji wasn't really in the mood right now, but this was more so Nobara just attempting to try and cheer him up a little bit. And with that, the group ended up splitting off, with Yuji, Choso, and Todo as well as Nobara heading deeper into the city. However, as they walked, Nobara decided to ask a question that had been on her mind this entire time. As Nobara asked, "Who the hell is this guy?" pointing at Choso. After all, she had no idea who Choso was. She kinda was just stuck in the moment and just assuming Choso was an ally after everything, so she didn't really have much time to question it originally, but now they were on a little bit of a wait time and just walking right now, she figured now was the best time to ask, with Choso responding that he was Yuji's eldest brother, as well as the eldest of 8 other brothers. Now this one caused both Nobara and Todo's eyes to widen. After all, while Todo did know that Choso was Yuji's brother, he didn't know that Yuji had 8 other brothers. As Todo couldn't help but think about the fact that he did have 8 other brothers, and he really wanted to see what they were like. Nobara was in a similar state to Todo right now, but more just shocked at the fact that Yuji had 9 brothers, because in her mind, Yuji always seemed more like an only child type of person. And Nobara was about to try and tease Yuji about this, but she could see that Yuji was right now very deep in his thoughts, so she decided not to do that, as she then asked where they were going right now, and that was to meet up with their other brothers, as well as their 2 other allies they had recently made, Mimiko and Naniko. And right now Yuji was in the worst mental state he had ever been in his life. No longer did he have rage towards Mahito to distract him from what had happened in Shibuya and all of the lives that were taken in his body. No longer did he have the object of rage in front of him that was Kenjaku. Hell, even Sukuna was being rather quiet right now, mainly just letting Yuji think about this on his own. After all, Sukuna could tell Yuji's mind was going to be a far greater threat to him right now than anything Sukuna could hope to say. Yuji needed something to fight, and that was why he was so focused right now. He wanted to find something that could distract him right now from this overwhelming amount of guilt that was flowing through him, as well as something that could fulfill him. Yuji wanted to feel like his life had meaning and he was doing good, but after so many lives were taken because of Sukuna taking over his body, he couldn't help but wonder if he should die right here and now, and if that would be the best thing that he could do for the world. After all, it would avenge all of the lives that were taken by Sukuna in his body in Shibuya. It would avenge all of those lives that were lost because of that, and most of all, it would take out 15 fingers worth of Sukuna's power with him. Hell, other than Gojo, he wasn't sure if there was anyone alive who would be able to take him on if Sukuna took over his body again just right now. Of course, Yuki might have a chance, but even then he wasn't too certain, especially considering how little Sukuna seemed to be trying in that. Sukuna had only been using Flowing Red Scale throughout that entire fight. They had access to Flowing Red Scale stack, and they just weren't using it because they didn't feel like it. Not because he couldn't, just because he didn't feel like it. Not just that, it didn't help as well that he knew he was a weapon of Kenjaku's creation. He had no idea why he was made or what intention they had with making him, but he just knew he was a weapon and just getting stronger and stronger. And now it was almost like Yuji could hear the screams of the people that Sukuna had killed in his body, the screams of them all echoing in his head, in the faint background, but all of them still present and there, being a constant reminder for the demon that was inside of him. Yuji had completely blamed himself for all the actions that had happened in Shibuya. Sure, it was Sukuna who took those lives, but it was Yuji's responsibility to make sure that Sukuna could never manifest, and yet Yuji tried testing fate. Yuji tried to consume as many Sukuna fingers as possible without letting Sukuna have full control over him. And it was because of Yuji's own inadequacies as a warrior that Mahito was able to defeat him and forcefully feed the fingers into him. All of these actions were his fault, both because he wasn't strong enough and also because he tried to dare fate too much, or if he even just consumed half as many and didn't get as greedy as he did, then there was a pretty good chance Sukuna never would have taken control. He even knew that Nobara, Todo, and Choso would have arrived as well eventually to back him up, and Yuji would have just needed to hold out for a little bit longer against Mahito. Of course, he remembered what Sukuna had told him as well, about how the what-ifs don't matter and this is the reality of the situation, and while that was true, he couldn't change the past, at the same time he still felt guilty for even causing the past to happen. As the idea began to pollute Yuji's head more and more, that it would be better if he was dead, that it would be better if he just let himself die, maybe not to one of the curses, but to one of the sorcerers that would be hunting him. Then he would no longer have to be a weapon that could be used against those he cared about. Then people wouldn't be at risk of Sukuna taking over a body like Yuji with the versatility that he showed with blood manipulation. Yuji was desperately hoping for something to fight, something that he could use to distract him from all of these emotions, something that he could fully focus himself on. Whether it was a weak curse spirit or a strong one, he just wanted something to fight, but nothing was coming. All he was stuck with was his own thoughts. And even though negative emotions were the source of curse energy, Yuji right now wasn't able to convert them as well as normal. That was how deep he was steeped into negative emotions. Before Yuji took a breath in and a breath out, making a decision to himself that he was going to keep getting stronger and make sure Sukuna would never get control over his body again, and that he would eliminate every single cursed spirit in sight, just as his way to attempt to make up for all of the pain that had been caused in his body by Sukuna, for the thousands of lives that were taken by those blood arrows. But even with that vow, Yuji wasn't really living for himself anymore, and if he was being honest, there was a small part of him that felt like he might let himself die if he were to fight against a sorcerer that wanted to kill him. If he were to fight against a sorcerer that was trying to kill him, he felt that he might end up letting himself die in that moment in order to say that at least then his life might amount to something better for the entire world. And Yuji knew that he was going to need to get stronger for that, and he knew exactly where to start as much as he didn't like it. While he was able to pick up a few of the moves that Sukuna had used in his body, he wasn't actually able to pick up all of the blood manipulation techniques right off the bat just off of muscle memory alone. So Yuji knew he was going to need to use those experiences as well as battling against curses to pick up on all those techniques. And he also felt that it was likely now he could finally understand how to use his brother's abilities. After all, Yuji was near certain that he did have access to all of his brother's abilities now, and he felt that he might be able to learn all of them if things go well. As now there were two sides of Yuji that were rising. One side of him that wanted to get stronger, that wanted to get as strong as possible so he could continue to execute curses until he died, and the other side that felt it might be better if he let himself die to another sorcerer to take Sukuna down with him. But he decided to suppress that side down for now in order to focus on killing curses and executing as many of them as possible. Yuta Akotsu found himself walking through the wreckage of Shibuya, particularly the area which Sukuna destroyed in his battle against Mahito, as he would be able to see the countless amount of corpses that were on the ground caused by Sukuna. He looked at this with disgust in his eyes. How could someone kill that many people and just not feel anything about it? The number of lives that were taken by Sukuna were exactly 8,722 when he had taken over Yuji's body, and while that was a big number, it really hit him when he saw each of the corpses, each of the people who had their own lives to live, that had their own potential they could have made. But no, all of that was taken in one fell swoop for one man's entertainment. However, as he was walking, he ended up finding the body of Naobito Zenin. It would seem he was able to find it before anyone else from Jujutsu Society was able to find it. And while under normal circumstances he wouldn't touch a dead body, Yuta knew right now more than ever that he was going to need as much power as possible in order to handle the threat that was Sukuna. And he already knew he wasn't going to like this, but he decided he might as well. So he had Rika consume Naobito's body in order to gain projection sorcery. He was hoping he would find Yuji before any of the other sorcerers hunting Yuji down would find him. That way they could potentially avoid conflict, but if someone else did find them first, he would have to fight against Yuji. However, as he was walking, something would attempt to attack him from behind. A cursed spirit that had manifested that was killed by Satoru Gojo, that being Kurorushi, now reincarnating. No longer being a cursed spirit that was bound to Kenjaku, instead being a cursed spirit of its own free will. It had been feasting on some of the blood that was caused by Sukuna's destruction. However, when it did try and attempt to rush at Yuta, Yuta was quick to react, immediately pulling it in and releasing a large amount of RCT through its entire body, killing it in one shot. Kurorushi had picked the wrong person to attack today. However, before their body could burn up and fade away, something else consumed the rest of it and copied their curse technique, that being Rika Orimoto. Now, Yuta Akotsu wasn't fully sure what their curse technique was, and that was something he was going to have to figure out on his own, but he felt that he might as well add that to his arsenal just in case. However, while Yuta was continuing to prepare for his hunt, he did see someone else who was walking around Shibuya. No, we saw a group of people that were still relatively injured, but they had managed to deal with their own injuries and bandage themselves. They were now just wandering around trying to find a place to get food or water. Yuta then approached the group and told them where they can go in order to evacuate properly. However, before they left, he did make sure to heal all of them. While this wasn't the optimal move for keeping curse energy hidden, Yuta figured that it wouldn't be long until everybody knew about curse energy, considering the show that Sukuna put on with his curse technique. It wasn't going to be long until people figured it out, so he might as well help with the powers that he has access to now. As he then continued on his hunt in order to find Yuji Itadori, with Naoya also on the hunt for Yuji Itadori in order to find him and use him to lure out Megami. The group of four would have eventually made it to an abandoned building, this building being a hotel. This was also the location where Choso had sent his brothers off in order to stay safe, with Mimiko and Nanako also being here. They did have the address from Yuki to head to her location, but it was pretty clear Yuji did want to stay for a bit longer to try and execute as many curses as possible. However, when they arrived, they saw several humanoids outside. Each of them were made out of blood, as there were a total of 5 of them. However, the clones did have some notable features to them. They were quite buff, but they also appeared to have some cracks in their body. Their texture was more similar to stone than it was to actual flesh. Finally, they also had wings, but the wings had several holes in it, showing that they weren't actually functional. They also were quite big, each of them being twice the size of Todo. Nobara and Todo would have been shocked if they were normal people, but considering they were Jujutsu sorcerers and spent an entire night fighting against Mahito's weird transfigured humans, in truth this wasn't all that weird for them, as Yuji said, "Oh, so Shoso's scouts are out," he would say with a tiny smile rising onto his face for a moment before it went back to the neutral face. Yuji was happy to be able to see his brother again, even more that he was able to see all of them again as well. But with everything that happened, all the screams that were caused from Sukuna's execution, the entire battle against Mahito, Sukuna, and Jogo and Kenjaku, and his complete failure to be able to stop Kenjaku, well, all of that was still rampant in his mind right now. As a result of that, Yuji didn't really feel like he had the ability to be happy. He didn't feel like he earned that yet. And in truth, he didn't know if he was ever going to feel worthy of being happy again. Though after the group got closer, they saw another group of 3 people begin to approach them. The first person they saw was a human girl that everyone in the group aside from Nobara recognized. This being Nanako, one of Geto's 2 daughters. She also worked with Yuji, Todo, and Shoso in order to take down Jogo, which ended up having an undesired effect of Kenjaku taking them, but at the same time none of them blamed her for that. If anything, this was something that Yuji blamed himself for. After all, he did not stay behind to make sure that Jogo was dead after making him get hit by his own attack. If he just went back to make sure that Jogo was dead, then Kenjaku wouldn't have been able to add Jogo to his arsenal. But that was simply the past and there was nothing that Yuji could do about it, other than making sure he'd be more cautious next time. The second was a man that both Yuji and Choso recognized, which was in the shape of a gargoyle. Not just was it in the shape of the gargoyle, it was also similar to all of the blood clones that were currently standing around them, other than the fact they were a bit smaller. Shoso was by far the tallest of the brothers, and was only a little bit taller than Todo. A light of excitement spawned in Todo's eyes as he realized that this was going to be one of his new brothers, and he realized the other person that was with them was also likely going to be one of his other new brothers. Nobara, on the other hand, found Shoso to look pretty cool, though a part of her was also wondering why Shoso took on a design like this in comparison to Choso, who was much more human in terms of their appearance. Finally, there was a third person that looked more like a red and black knight, made out of hardened blood. This was Kotsuso, the 8th brother, who was primarily good at using blood armor. In fact, he had a mutated version of the technique, where their mutated version allowed them to create bone-like structures within the hardened blood in order to amplify its durability even further. Now, underneath the blood armor, they had a much more squishy form, which is why they usually use the blood armor in order to protect themselves 24/7. When it came to using blood armor in order to defend themselves, he was by far the best of their brothers, but he was only able to use that technique, making him automatically a close quarters based fighter. Right now they were also using a total of 2 swords that they ended up stealing from a random sword that was abandoned. But he didn't feel too bad about it. After all, the city was abandoned and he could always just blame it on a cursed spirit, no one would know. Nobara was actually a bit more intrigued about this brother, mainly because of the much more human-like design they took, as well as the fact they looked like a knight in armor. Now of course Nobara wasn't aware of what they truly looked like and was just assuming that this knight appearance was actually their real physical body, so she wasn't exactly getting the full picture here, but she had never been one to care about looks. She found them both rather interesting, as well as the forms they had taken for combat. Choso would have then taken the moment to properly introduce them, as he said, "These 2 are our brothers. They also have different applications of blood manipulation. Our brother Kotsuso is much more of an honorable warrior knight type, while our brother Shoso is much more of a protector, and as you can see their forms reflect that. At least I believe that's what their forms are made to reflect, though at the same time I don't fully know. The only 2 people who really knew the answer to that was going to be Kenjaku and Mahito, and well, one was dead and the other he had no intention of ever talking to again. Even if Mahito was still alive, he also had no intention of talking to him ever again either, but Mahito was dead. Both Todo and Nobara were able to notice the clear amount of pride in Choso's voice as well when they spoke about them. They could tell the love and pride that Choso had in both of their brothers. This only made Todo more excited to get to know his brothers and what they were really like. As the group began to split off, with Choso, Todo, as well as Kotsuso talking with each other, Kotsuso getting to know Todo pretty well. In fact, the two of them were able to bond quite fast with each other right off the bat, right after Todo asked Kotsuso a question about what his type in woman were, and Kotsuso giving the same answer that Yuji did, resulting in them immediately bonding as siblings. Choso still really didn't understand how this works, but considering the two of them were insane like that and were just going to immediately bond, he decided why not, he's not one to get in the way of people's fun. Nanako and Nobara both gave them a rather unimpressed face as they could overhear this, while the two of them began to start talking themselves. Both Nanako and Nobara were happy to have other girls around, considering everybody else here had been a man so far, and Nanako's only other person that was a girl that they had around was her own sister. And Nanako didn't really have any issues with the Jujutsu sorcery world, only humanity itself. After all, she originally was living by Geto's will, but now she only cared about one thing, which was being able to put that body to rest. She wanted to let her father figure properly rest, which is why she was allying herself with Yuji and everybody else. And while this wasn't something Nobara could properly understand, she would know that if someone took over the body of her friend like Sayori and then ended up masquerading it around, she would likely feel the exact same way, so Nobara just decided she was going to help them no matter what to put him down as well. Granted, she knew that she was going to have to help with that anyways, mainly because he was the one who sealed away Satoru Gojo and was a threat to the world, so she knew as well as the rest of them knew that he was going to need to be put down, whether it was for revenge or whether it was for the sake of the world and humanity itself. With Yuji and Shoso also talking with each other. As Yuji brought up something to Shoso which was a surprise to him, that Sukuna, when he was in control of his body, was able to pull off Shoso's technique, as well as being able to pull off Tanzo's technique, and while he was able to use some of the techniques that Sukuna had used just off of muscle memory, he felt that there were other techniques that he needed some practice with and some tutoring with, but he now had some idea of how to use them. He just wanted to ask Shoso for some help with that, which Shoso was more than willing to give him. He had to admit he was rather proud of his brother and how far they had gotten. After all, his brother was rather talented. This was something he had always known, but once they became a Jujutsu sorcerer and finally got a proper teacher, his talent was really able to shine, which he couldn't be more than happy about. As the group walked inside of the hotel building in order to properly get themselves some rest. As Shoso decided to ask Kotsuso where the others were right now, with Kotsuso saying, Mimiko's asleep right now, recovering from the fight. Sanzo was also recovering. Shouso, Tanzo, and Naranzo went out to go hunting for cursed spirits and to get some more supplies. As Kotsuso then recommended that all of the groups rest for now. After all, they had a long day in Shibuya and been fighting all day. They were going to need rest more than anyone considering how long they've been fighting for and what they've been fighting against, both physically and mentally, especially mentally. Nobara, Todo, as well as Choso all agreed, with Yuji hesitantly agreeing, but he wasn't fully sure if he was actually going to be able to get some rest after everything that had happened. As Choso, Todo, as well as Nobara all went to sleep, in order to prepare themselves for the cursed spirit hunting they were going to need to go through tomorrow. As Yuji lay down on his bed and closed his eyes, trying his best to sleep. But when he closed his eyes, he could hear the sounds of people screaming all around them. Hundreds, no, thousands of screams echoing throughout his head. All the sounds of people getting impaled, the sounds of people being in pain, as he could see around him was a world of bodies. A world of bodies that Sukuna had killed in Yuji's body. Each one of those faces were painted into Yuji's mind, being a face he would never forget. And in the center he saw a shadowy silhouette, one that had the exact same body as him, other than having a few differences. There were red tattoos echoing throughout his body, those being the tattoos that belonged to Sukuna. It had red glowing eyes staring at Yuji. What they were seeing was the image of what everyone saw Yuji as before they were executed by Sukuna. But something else that Yuji was worried about was if he could become like that, if he could ever become like Sukuna and that uncaring about life. As the entity slowly began to walk towards Yuji, each step echoing as they stomped on each of the bodies in its way. And right before they could reach out to Yuji, Yuji's eyes opened. He forced himself awake. As Yuji barely had gotten any rest, he was going to figure out a way to rest himself some other way. He did have access to reverse curse technique, so that might be able to help him. As Yuji decided to make his way up to the rooftop in order to sit down and just simply think while staring at the night sky. Yuji had a new fear that had been placed in his mind, a fear of becoming like Sukuna, one that he had never had to consider before. He always considered Sukuna to be some type of monster, but in truth he had to acknowledge the fact that there was a potential chance that he could become a monster like Sukuna did. After all, why did Sukuna become one other than his amount of strength? If Yuji got too strong, would it be possible that he could become something like Sukuna? But he rejected that possibility soon after because of one man existing. One man who was kind despite the fact that he was the strongest, being Satoru Gojo. Gojo had the intention of making a world a better place for everybody else, and yet he was also the strongest. Was Gojo the exception to the rule, and would everybody else who became strong become like Gojo, or would everyone who is strong just become like Sukuna? What reason does Sukuna have for taking away the value of others' lives? Why did he enjoy it so much, and why was he able to do it so freely? Why did they not have any value to them? Mahito he could understand. As much as he hated Mahito and his nature, he understood it at the end of the day that it was simply in Mahito's nature to eliminate other people. Maybe if they were a human, things would be different, but because of the fact that Mahito was this type of curse, they were always going to go down this path, just as he was certain if Mahito ever came back, he'd kill him again. But is it the nature of the strong to trample on the weak, or is it the nature of the strong to try and help and protect the weak? Was Sukuna the example and norm, or was Gojo the example and norm? He had no idea. He needed to be able to answer this question for himself. He wanted to become more like Gojo, but now there was a part of him that was afraid the stronger he got, the more he become like Sukuna. However, this was when he felt a hand on his shoulder, that hand being from Shoso. As Shoso then told Yuji, power only amplifies who you originally were as a person. Power doesn't change you. He had overheard Yuji talking to himself and saying his thoughts out loud, and he could tell that was what he was thinking about. Even if Yuji didn't say it out loud, he would be able to recognize those thoughts. As Shoso then took a seat down next to Yuji and continued to speak. Ryomen Sukuna, even if he wasn't the strongest, would have always been an awful and ruthless person. It's just he would no longer be able to exercise that will through his power. Power only amplifies who you originally were and the person that you are becoming. While the saying absolute power corrupts exists, I don't truly believe in that saying. Instead, I simply believe that absolute power brings out your true colors and forces you to change for the better or the worse. It shows what you would be like with that power. You, my little brother, have power. You're strong. You're incredibly strong and by far the strongest of us here. But that power will not corrupt you. That is something I am certain about. As Yuji decided to lean a little bit closer to Shoso in that moment, that was something that he did need to hear, and it did help a little bit with that fear, though he was still feeling it partially alongside all of the other negative emotions that he was feeling as well. As Shoso then said something that Yuji needed to hear, which Shoso said, "You did your best, little brother. You should get some rest." And that caused Yuji to go silent. While he had tried his best to win, tried everything he could to stop Mahito from taking over his body, he knew at the same time he couldn't accept that. He felt if he just trained harder, if he tried to learn all of his brother's techniques or just did something different, maybe if he was just a bit more talented, maybe if he trained his entire life hard, he would have been able to kill Mahito and be strong enough to handle those fingers of Sukuna. And while Yuji did hear that, he needed some time in order to properly accept that. He had already accepted that the past had happened, but he had still blamed himself for it nonetheless. And Shoso could see it well. He could see all the thoughts going through Yuji's head, as he wasn't too sure what to say himself other than what he had previously said. This was a hard situation and one that Shoso wasn't fully prepared for, but Shoso did what he could do best right now, which was pull Yuji into a hug, which he knew wouldn't help too much, but he felt it might help a little bit, or at least he hoped it would. He hoped it would offer a little bit of comfort, as Yuji slowly gave in, hugging him in return. And he couldn't fully give in. He couldn't fully let go of all the guilt that he was feeling. Not until Kenjaku and Sukuna were dead. Not until Gojo was free. Not until he made up for all of his mistakes. After the group had gotten some rest, they were all preparing their different duties for today. And while Yuji wanted to go out there and fight against some cursed spirits, his brothers did not allow that to happen. After all, Yuji had not gotten enough rest today, and Yuji still needed to recover from the battle that had happened. And before Yuji could get the chance to argue against them, Nobara interrupted him, telling Yuji not to be stupid. After all, Yuji had barely gotten any rest at all, and if Yuji were to be sent out now, he would not be at the top of his game. So what would be better? Taking a bit of time to rest so you could execute curses even better later, or not taking time to rest and being sloppy in the way they kill curses? And while Yuji wanted to disagree with that, he knew that was true. This is also when Shoso added in that he could stay behind with Yuji in order to help him work on his blood clone technique. That way they would at least be getting some progress in working on curse techniques. That was when one of the other brothers spoke, which looked to have their entire body covered in a blood mist other than a small mask that was poking out with glowing red eyes. This was the brother that had access to the blood mist ability, the sixth brother known as Tanzo, as they also agreed to help Yuji out with their training so they could figure out their technique better. As Todo, Nobara, and Shoso also decided they were going to go out in order to help deal with cursed spirits and executing as many as they could. Eso and Ketsu were going to stay behind as well in order to guard the place more properly. Mimiko was going to go with Choso, Todo, and Nobara, while Naniko was going to stay behind as well. Naranzo, the fourth brother, whose entire body was covered in blood that was burning everything it touched, also decided they were going to stay behind, mainly to help out with Yuji with their technique. With each of the brothers having different applications of blood manipulation, they knew they were going to have to stay behind to try and give some tips and pointers for Yuji. However, they knew they couldn't have too many stay behind, as they didn't want to accidentally overwhelm Yuji's brain with information and knowledge. The other brothers were still tired from yesterday, so they decided they were going to continue to rest for now. However, Nobara did have one more thing that she wanted to mention, as she said that the next time that Yuji was going out, that they were going to go together to hunt cursed spirits down, just like good old times with some of the earlier missions they had gotten. Up first would be Yuji's training with Tanzo. Yuji had already figured out how to heat up his blood, though he only really knew how to do it through one of his applications, being Slicing Exorcism. He didn't actually know yet on how to use his blood in order to make a giant wave of mist to hide himself. But considering he already used the application of heating up his own blood, and he could feel the muscle memory of using it when Sukuna used it, it didn't take him long at all to figure out how to use it properly. And after they figured out how to use it, Tanzo began to explain properly how to use it in combat. The blood mist would best be used in order to catch opponents off guard in order to make sure they didn't know where you were coming from, as there was one massive advantage that the blood mist did have. Not just was it a hot place to stay inside of, but it also had the user's cursed energy all over, which made it much harder to sense them, since it would look like they were all over the place if they tried. For example, they then decided to create a massive amount of blood mist, as they told Yuji to try and sense where they were, and it was impossible. And while Yuji could hear their voice, actually telling where they were was nearly impossible, and if Yuji could figure out a way to make it so he wouldn't be making sounds either, this could lead into a perfect attack in order to catch somebody off guard. After all, most sorcerers were able to focus curse energy towards spots of their body to defend themselves if the attack looked too dire. But the blood mist would force people to have to only rely on the curse energy they have surrounding their body naturally, rather than allowing them to force their curse energy to block hits. And Yuji understood, and he wanted to practice this tactic as soon as possible, but he would need to wait until they were going out to go curse spirit hunting. After all, he didn't really want to hurt his brothers. So the best he really could do right now was practice moving through the mist and practicing making the mist. Though he also knew this was going to be the easiest of the free techniques to learn, especially with Sukuna already using it in his body. Up next was training under Shoso, who in comparison to his brother had a much more difficult application of blood manipulation. This was because his application of blood manipulation allowed him to make clones. Now these blood clones weren't actually able to assist in fighting, they were primarily stationary and made to act as decoys so the main person could attack. It was also the reason why Sukuna never chose to use one in order to hit Mahito. Currently they are just being used as scarecrows in order to scare off any cursed spirits that might be coming towards their base, as well as being used as lookouts in order to sense what was happening nearby. Yuji creating a blood clone of himself was much more difficult. After all, in order to create a blood clone, he needed to have an accurate measurement of himself. However, Shoso did give one piece of advice that might be very helpful for Yuji, which that piece of advice was that the blood clones that Shoso made himself were actually hollow on the inside. Due to the fact that they wouldn't be assisting Yuji in combat, he didn't actually need to make them as full-on blood clones. They didn't need to be fully accurate to his body with internals included, just needed externals, which would allow Yuji to massively reduce the amount of blood he needed to use in order to make one of these clones, since he would only need to make a shell of himself rather than filling it with blood completely. Though even with that in mind, it still was going to take him a while to be able to properly make a blood clone, especially doing that on the fly. So he instead started working piece by piece. He was going to start out by working on his head, thinking that would be the easiest part to mimic, and then just start going down his body until he could eventually get the full body down. However, the hardest of the free blood manipulation applications that Yuji was going to try and learn today was going to be Naranzo's application of blood manipulation, as Naranzo's application of blood manipulation made his own blood be rather acidic. And since this was adding a new trait to his blood manipulation, Yuji was quickly finding that he was actually kind of stuck on this version of blood manipulation. It made it more difficult that Naranzo was basically able to do it on instinct. So figuring out how to make his blood acidic and then figuring out how to apply that to other blood manipulation techniques that he could use was going to be a hard task. And despite the fact that he trained for a couple hours in order to try and achieve that level, he was not able to succeed in it. Still, he felt he made some overall progress in his control of his own blood manipulation and the unique abilities that his body had access to. Noritoshi was making his way back to the Kamo clan household. He had some things he needed to get and he had some people he wanted to check on. However, as he made his way there, he saw someone in front of the household that was waiting for them, and someone he did not expect. This person was Suguru Geto, a man who had stitches all across his forehead. The same man who was responsible for the attack on Shibuya, as well as causing so much strife and pain. As Kenjaku then said, "You're late." No, perhaps it's to be expected. After all, Tokyo's transportation infrastructure isn't working right now, Noritoshi. As Kamo then activated Flowing Red Scale, he wasn't going to use Flowing Red Scale stack yet because he was still getting better at using it and he was only going to really use it in bursts. as Kenjaku then raised up her hand and said, whoa, I'm not really in the mood to fight, you don't need to die. As Kenjaku then began to explain exactly why Kamo was coming here, he was trying to get influence from the conservative faction in order to make sure the actions of trying to remove Satoru Gojo's seal wouldn't be used against him. Where he was planning to use Gakuganji's influence within the conservative faction to assist within that. As Kenjaku then began to explain that he already killed everybody in the faction who announced that Geto was alive and had an execution order on his head, as well as the people who decided to make Yuta Kosu Yuji Itadori's executioner. With Kamo realizing the hope that he was clinging to right now was all just a part of this guy's plan. However, this was when Kenjaku decided to say something else. There was a way to repay you for teaching my son how to use blood manipulation even better and making him an even more suitable vessel. I'll allow you to get your fangs. And a recommendation that you should probably head out of Japan as soon as possible. After all, with what's going to happen soon in the future, you really don't want to be here. As much as Kamo wanted to fight against Kenjaku and try and kill him, he knew that he would lose that fight, so right now he just went to his room in order to get some items. The first thing that Kamo got was a necklace that had a grey jade on it. This was a curse tool that Kamo had gotten before Shibuya. He didn't see much use for it in the Shibuya incident, but he felt that it might be useful now. And finally he stopped by the Kamo clan library picking up a few books. These books being some ancient teachings on blood manipulation. As he was curious to see if he missed out on anything, he felt a need to get stronger. With his student growing so much, as well as meeting Choso, he just felt this overwhelming desire to get as powerful as possible. But most of all, this was to protect his family. He needed to make sure that his mom was going to be safe. And he remembered something that he heard about from the battle against Mahito, where Mahito was able to create secondary appendages in order to chant as well as to make hand signs. Normally most sorcerers wouldn't chant or make hand signs, as it would be too slow for their curse techniques. It ultimately wouldn't be worth it in most situations, and while Kamo didn't see a way in order to make sure that he didn't need to chant anymore since he didn't have an extra mouth that he could spawn out of his body like Mahito could, he did at least see a way that he might be able to bypass the hand sign requirement if he did enough research and tried enough. And after equipping himself with a few more arrows to add to his arsenal, he finally left the Kamo clan household, deciding to leave it all behind and leave that family behind once and for all. He had nothing left there. A part of him wondered if he should communicate with his mom for a moment, but he decided not to. He felt like his mom had already moved on in life. So instead he wanted to burn away at his life for something. Maybe he could burn away at his life in order to help out the people close to him, but then he shook his head on that as well. After all, he still had a friend that was going to need as much help as possible, that being Yuji Itadori. Considering everything that Yuji had went through, Kamo just throwing away his life and throwing away the embers of his life that was left was definitely not the best move. He knew Yuji still cared about him and he didn't want to put him through that pain. As Noritoshi left behind the Kamo clan household once and for all. Later on, after Yuji had finished up his training, everybody else would have also returned home, and they would have sat down together in order to get some food. After all, fighting against cursed spirits was definitely a rather hard task, especially because of how many was littered throughout Shibuya. Especially because of how many negative emotions were released as a result of how much panic and chaos were going throughout Shibuya. Not to mention how many cursed spirits were directly released by Kenjaku. However, they have been pretty successful in their hunt today, taking out a great amount of grade 4, grade 3s, and even some grade 2 cursed spirits. Nobara in particular decided to brag about the fact that she had to fight 3 grade 1 spirits back to back and ended up winning, making a comment that she might get a reputation soon like what Toto got from the night parade of 100 demons. That was until Toto reminded her that he took on 5 grade 1 cursed spirits and the special grade and only needs to use his curse technique on the special grade cursed spirit, which very quickly deflated Nobara's building ego. However, that ego was replaced with determination, as she was going to make sure that she was going to do double of what Toto was capable of doing. However, that ended up bringing up a question for Yuji, as Yuji decided to ask them if they had seen any special grade cursed spirits around in Shibuya or sensed any. Toto, Choso, and Nobara all shook their heads no. They actually hadn't been able to sense any so far, which that was a relief to Yuji. After all, they had all learned how powerful those special grade cursed spirits could be. Even someone like Jogo, who while Yuji was confident he could take on his own at the start of Shibuya, let alone now, he wasn't confident that he could do it without taking quite a bit of damage. Mahito, on the other hand, was an absolute beast. He honestly wasn't sure if he was able to beat Mahito if it wasn't for the damage that Sukuna had caused him, as well as all the transfigured humans that Sukuna had killed in their battle. Even Hanami, who wasn't anywhere near as strong as Mahito and Jogo, was significantly more durable than anyone else here other than Yuji himself. And Choso uses his blood armor as well. And he honestly wasn't sure if anyone here other than himself could beat Hanami. Of course, he did also know that special grade cursed spirits could vary on level. After all, the finger bearer was also considered a special grade cursed spirit, and he knew it wouldn't matter how many finger bearers there were, they would all lose to Jogo, let alone Mahito. But the more terrifying thing in his mind about those two was he wasn't actually sure how old those two cursed spirits were, as he couldn't help but wonder to himself, what if Noritoshi Kamo had a stronger special grade than either of those two combined and released it into Shibuya? That was when Nobara gave him a confident smile and assured him that if there was something like that, then they would be able to take it out together this time. And this did help Yuji a little bit. After all, while he was still feeling really bad about himself and everything that had happened, it was at least nice to know that he wasn't completely alone, and that he didn't have to handle everything on his own. After all, he knew if he didn't have Todo and Nobara with him when he was battling against Mahito, it would have been a harder fight against him since Mahito would have had access to both of the transferred humans that Todo and Nobara killed. This also went to Choso, Mimiko, and Nanako as well, as they all allowed him to be able to fight against Jogo and win, since they all had done their work in order to make sure they would have the best chance against him. Even his own other brothers were now helping to teach him, and it always really helped to teach him. As Yuji was now starting to realize that he had missed something, in the amount of power he had gained, he was starting to believe more and more that everything was his burden. Even right now, the way he was thinking was very individualistic. He wasn't really thinking about how he and the group could take down cursed spirits, but just rather he himself could have gotten stronger to take down cursed spirits. He kept thinking things like if he was stronger, he would be able to beat Mahito and none of this would have happened, or if he was stronger, then he wouldn't have been able to beat Sukuna, but he was starting to lose what he had realized was his greatest strength, the allies that he had around him. Sure, he was stronger than all of them, but when they were fighting alongside him, it was truly when he was at his best, which that was shown to him when they were fighting against Kenjaku as well as Jogo. As he was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, he had been taking too many things just on by himself. Maybe he should try and open up and allow the others in his life to help him. And with the two of them finishing, both Yuji and Nobara would have left in order to continue going cursed spirit hunting, while everybody else continued to recover and rest for now. Nobara had also recently invented a new variation of how to use her curse technique that she really wanted to show Yuji. This made Yuji a bit more intrigued as he wanted to see how his friend had managed to improve since they had fought in Shibuya, which led to an odd mix of him both hoping and not hoping they would end up against a strong cursed spirit just so he could see what they could do. So he was more so hoping that they would get a strong cursed spirit for Nobara, but one that Yuji could handle just in case things did go wrong. However, as they were walking and when they got pretty far from the main base, Nobara decided to bring something else up to Yuji. As Nobara explained that she couldn't really understand exactly what Yuji was going through. After all, Yuji's circumstance was so unique to him considering how many lives Sukuna had taken in his body. But she explained to him that no matter what, she would be there to help him out and be on his side. If Yuji needed a beacon of support, she would serve that role. And most of all, she was going to become strong enough to be a very good ally for Yuji on the field, so he wouldn't feel such a need to take everything on himself. That last part made a surprised look enter onto Yuji's face. After all, he was actually kind of surprised that Nobara could read that about him, that was what Yuji was thinking. However, seeing that clear amount of determination in Nobara's eyes, it honestly made Yuji feel like he wasn't alone anymore. He felt like he had someone he could rely on. Even just a little bit, and that feeling of not being alone anymore was really helpful for him, as it was reinforcing the thought that he had earlier, that he had been trying to take everything on too much by himself, and instead he should be trying to open up to his allies and comrades. And as a large cursed spirit was about to try and bull rush Yuji from behind to try and bite him, Nobara smacked one of her nails right into the creature's mouth, before she then snapped her fingers and activated Hairpin. This was a new variant that she called Crucifix. This variant ended up making several small cursed energy spikes rise all throughout its body, killing it in one blow. Now this cursed spirit in truth wasn't a threat to Yuji. After all, this cursed spirit was around level of a grade 2. But even then the message was clear. It was to show that Nobara was going to have his back no matter what. And with that being said, no more words needed to be exchanged between the two of them as they began their hunt for cursed spirits. Fortunately for them, though, some cursed spirits decided they were going to try their luck and approach both Yuji and Nobara. Most of them were curses similar in shape to the fly heads, which led them to believe that those were grade 4 to grade 3 level curses. However, those weren't the only curses present, as a large bird the same size as a house landed on one of the rooftops, this cursed spirit being around the level of a semi-grade 1 curse. And on the other hand was a scorpion that was the same size as that bird, that was staring down at Nobara, as Yuji and Nobara realized who they were going to have to go after. With Yuji having wings, it made a lot more sense for him to go after the bird and for Nobara to go after the scorpion. However, up first Yuji decided they were going to deal with the fly heads around them, as the blood wings extended from his body, with Nobara at the same time lifting up a couple of her nails before smacking each of them with her hammer. As out from Yuji's wings, a large amount of blood arrows were released, and Nobara had her nails each release a large wave of curse energy, and the combination of the both of them were able to eliminate the multiple fly heads that were all around them. As in a burst of speed, both Yuji and Nobara rushed at their respective opponents, Nobara jumping straight onto the scorpion's head, with Yuji rushing towards the flying bird, flying even faster than the bird could propel itself away from Yuji. As the bird cursed spirit attempted to flap its wings to send a large gust of wind towards Yuji in order to send him back to the ground, but Yuji was able to fly right through it and fly past the cursed spirit. However, while he was flying through it, a thought entered into his head, that this cursed spirit was around the same level as the cursed spirit that him and Megami fought the first time they met. And what was even more impressive was the fact that Yuji could barely affect that cursed spirit before him when he was using Flowing Red Scale, and he is using Flowing Red Scale stack when he could barely use it. Yuji was now realizing just how much he had progressed from when he had just entered into Jujutsu High. He had gotten quite far, because right now Yuji wasn't even using Flowing Red Scale, he was fighting in his base form. He felt like he'd be able to defeat a finger bearer pretty handily now without even needing to activate Flowing Red Scale or Flowing Red Scale stack. However, Yuji also learned better than to toy around with his opponents. He had learned from his battle against Mahito that the best course of action would be to finish off his opponents as soon as possible. After all, if he had just finished off Mahito rather than punching him for every single life Mahito had taken in Shibuya and trying to crush him to death, then Mahito definitely would not have been able to be captured by Kenjaku on time. But that was a simple mistake that he was going to make up for, as the bird attempted to turn around in order to rush at Yuji, but Yuji clapped his hands together and fired a piercing blood right through its skull, killing it in one shot. As we now return back to Nobara, who Nobara currently jumped onto the scorpion's back and smacked it with a hammer. A single smack from the hammer was enough to cause cracks to form in its very shell. This also ended up putting the cursed spirit in pain. As Nobara smiled a bit more, she realized she had also improved quite a bit from her respective battles. However, Nobara was able to catch the scorpion trying to use its tail to stab into her side, just narrowly dodging, primarily because she was caught off guard and had to dodge the last possible second. But even that wasn't a struggle for her, as mid-air she took out one of her nails and threw it right towards its tail, having it activate hairpin and slice right through its tail as well. The sparks of competition between Yuji and Nobara had ended up pushing Nobara to achieve some new heights. After all, for this entire time, Nobara felt massively behind Yuji. Every time Nobara had made a step, Yuji had made several to improve himself, so Nobara was just constantly trying to catch up to his level of power. Where normally cursed spirits that were at the semi-grade 1 level would have been an issue to her previously, her training ended up pushing her to achieve these new levels of heights and power. As Nobara then landed, ducking underneath one of the claw swipe attempts, before smacking her hammer against it, causing even more great damage towards its body. However, Nobara did not want to spend that much time on this cursed spirit. After all, she could tell it was a small fry. So she rushed directly for its head, dodging another one of the claw swipe attempts before landing on its head, taking out two of her nails and smacking it down on the cursed spirit's head, as she activated hairpin once more in the brain, killing it in one shot. As Nobara and Yuji looked over to each other, seeing how fast they finished off each other's cursed spirits. Though Nobara was still a slight bit annoyed, after all it only took Yuji one move to handle their cursed spirit, and it took Nobara 2 nails as well as several other hits in order to handle hers. She still was able to handle it with relative ease, but not in comparison to the ease that Yuji could. As Nobara then picked up the nails that she had utilized against this cursed spirit. But Nobara knew that she'd have more chances to grow and more chances to show herself. She would just need to continue to push herself in order to achieve those levels. However, Yuji on the other hand was able to see just how much Nobara had grown in power. He could see that Nobara was really trying her best to catch up to Yuji and the others. In truth, he was being honest, he felt like Nobara might catch up to Choso's level pretty soon. However, they were interrupted as they could see another large wave of grade 4 cursed spirits coming towards them. As Yuji and Nobara then looked towards each other, neither of them having a single hint of fear or intimidation on their eyes. Instead, they were filled with confidence. Another day would begin as a duo of brothers were sent out in order to begin cursed spirit hunting, this duo of brothers being Yuji, Itadori, and Aoi Todo. And considering how effective they were, especially when working together, there was really no cursed spirit that was here that would be a threat for the two of them. However, as Yuji and Todo finished off another cursed spirit, Todo decided now was the time to bring something up. Of course, Todo had seen Yuji's mood, but he was waiting for the time and chance to talk to him about it. Which he believed now was the best time to talk to Yuji about his mood, his emotional state, and what was going on in his head. Which led to Yuji contemplating for a moment on whether he wanted to tell Todo or not, but considering he knew it would be better to not handle everything alone, Nobara's words, knowing that he wouldn't be alone, he chose to be honest and tell Todo what had been going on in his head, his thoughts and grief about all the people Sukuna killed in his body, the fact he blamed himself for ending the lives of all those people, his self-blame for not being strong enough to beat Mahito, but most of all his internal debates on whether he should let himself die, if he should let a sorcerer end him in order to take out the 13 fingers of Sukuna present in his body. And of course consuming the other 2 fingers to take them down with him as well. Upon hearing that though, Todo moved a hand onto Yuji's shoulder and squeezed it. While he couldn't really help much with the self-blame, he did have something to say about that final part, as he shook his head before saying, "Brother, I can't say I can understand the pain you're feeling right now, but I can understand that you are in pain." As Yuji looked down for a moment, if Todo understood that, then maybe Todo was about to say that he was right. He wasn't too sure. He opened his mouth for a moment before closing it as he did want to hear the wisdom of his brother. That, and he honestly had no idea how to respond. So he really wanted to hear what Todo had to say, because Yuji was debating on it all, still debating even now if he should end to take those fingers down with him. As Todo then continued, "You think ending your own life would make up for all the death you cause, or prevent more death from happening. Maybe if you never became a sorcerer, then none of this death would have happened," he would say before his grip on Yuji's shoulder tightened. "But none of that matters anymore. We all as jujitsu sorcerers have negative consequences. Yours are deeper, I'll admit that. But to end it all now, to let yourself die would be the greatest insult to all of those people." Yuji would have blinked in surprise upon hearing that. He hadn't even thought about that while he looked up to Todo. How? How would his own life ending be an insult? He killed those people. He let Sukuna take control. Wouldn't he just be avenging their deaths by letting himself die? Those were the thoughts that were going through Yuji's head right now. However, before Yuji could retort, Todo continued, a passion being gained in his voice. All those people were ended by your inability to control Sukuna, but those people's lives are consequences because of that inability. Letting yourself die would be taking the easy way out, excusing the consequences and making their lives lose that value they have left. Jujutsu sorcerers and people die. But if you grieve over them for too long, wonder what could have been, the meaning those people had in your life can be forgotten. The meaning of people who died because of you would be forgotten. So don't forget these feelings or memories, but don't let yourself die either. Just use them as fuel in order to get stronger and prevent more people's lives from being taken. As Todo had made it clear in Yuji's mind, if Yuji just let himself die, all of those people who were lost because of Sukuna's actions would be for nothing. He needed to live for them, to make up for them, a life where he would have to shoulder less pain, one where he would have to keep fighting, not taking the easy way out. And Todo could see the light returning into Yuji's eyes, the light and sparks of hope and determination, the spark of a man who wanted to give people a better life and better death. It caused Todo to smile once more and gained a look of happiness, before he moved his hand off of his shoulder as he said, "Good, you understand it. This is the pain you must suffer as the cage of Ryoma and Sukuna. But remember, those people's lives have meaning. Make sure to help prevent something like that from happening again. Just as I, as your brother, and all of our other brothers will make sure to do our best to make sure something like this can never happen again." And with that light returning back to Yuji's eyes, Yuji and Todo continued to fight. Yuji now being fueled by the pain that he had caused. A desire to get stronger in order to continue to protect innocent lives, in order to make sure that he could get all the fingers of Sukuna and eventually take Sukuna down with him. That was the task of his life, and he was going to succeed in that no matter what. And with that fuel of determination, Yuji and Todo's cursed spirits amount that they killed spiked tremendously, leading to the most effective day of hunting down cursed spirits so far, with the elimination of over 1,000 cursed spirits being done in one day by Yuji and Todo. November 8th. The group had been hunting down cursed spirits for quite some time now, as they had been hunting them down for a total of 8 days. 8 days had passed since the fateful day happened at Shibuya, and this group of sorcerers were eliminating curses on overtime. However, even though they were working themselves to the bone in order to eliminate curses, it didn't look like they were going to lessen or eliminate all of them anytime soon. However, over this time they have been able to eliminate several thousands of curses, and some of them not being small fries either. In particular, the ones that had managed to eliminate the most cursed spirits were Yuji, Todo, Choso, and Nobara, who Nobara was coming rather close to Choso and Todo. Yuji was in a completely different league from all of them in terms of eliminating cursed spirits. However, one day while Choso, Todo, and Yuji were out hunting cursed spirits, they ended up sensing a rather massive cursed spirit, one that had just recently erupted from the earth, which had taken on the appearance of a massive centipede. Todo, Yuji, and Choso all looked at each other and nodded. They were able to immediately figure out what their plan was going to be in order to take out that cursed spirit, as Choso began to move backwards and going up one of the skyscrapers, preparing a piercing blood, while Yuji had blood wings grow out from his back in order to fly high into the air. Todo, on the other hand, approached the centipede cursed spirit head-on, and while the cursed spirit was strong, it was pretty clear it wasn't sentient. As Todo beckoned for the cursed spirit to come at it, the cursed spirit taking that challenge head-on, as it began to rush towards Todo. And this is when Todo started running, heading towards the direction where Choso was currently planted, preparing to fire off the piercing blood. And as Todo was running, he would see several compressed blood orbs in front of him, those orbs being supernovas that were created by Yuji. Their plan was a rather simple one. They were going to lure the centipede cursed spirit towards a landfield of mines in order to do some minor occurring damage as well as slow it down. And the moment it arrived at its destination, Choso would snipe its already weakened body. And it was pretty safe to say that this plan went without a hitch. This cursed spirit, despite its massive size, wasn't actually that powerful, around the level of a semi-grade 1 curse. They actually were expecting something more from something of that massive of a size, as Yuji landed next to Todo with Choso going down the building in order to join them. However, as they were talking and preparing to go for their next target, the same building where Choso had fired the piercing blood from, all three of them heard a voice call out to them, one that reeked to the brim of arrogance. This voice belonged to Naoya Zenin, who was currently hunting down Megumi Fushiguro. As Yuji, Choso, and Todo all got on guard, they could tell that this man was not going to be an ally. As Naoya then said, "What are you two doing? You totally stand out. Don't you want to run?" And Yuji looked a slight bit confused by this, but at the same time he was able to figure out pretty fast why, with Naoya gaining an even brighter smirk. Correct, without Gojo around, the higher-ups want you dead, especially considering it was you who eliminated Naobito Zenin, and well, the monkeys that were living in the town, but that's kind of irrelevant. However, the amount of respect that I would gain from the Zenin clan if I were to eliminate you, and then eliminate Megumi to become the leader, that would be quite tremendous. However, as Naoya was about to continue trying to taunt them, suddenly he felt a wave of bloodlust, something that caused an immediate shiver to go down his spine, but it wasn't coming from Todo and it wasn't coming from Choso. It was coming from Yuji Itadori. Not just did he disrespect everybody who died in Shibuya and basically call their lives nothing, but he also told him that he was planning to kill Megumi. Of course, he didn't care about the fact that Naoya threatened his own life, but the fact that he threatened his friend's life, that was something that he couldn't accept. And while Yuji's bloodlust was the most palpable and strongest because his rage was the deepest, Choso and then Todo were right behind them. After all, he had threatened their brother's life, and there was no way in hell that they were going to let that happen. Naoya was much more on guard against Yuji than he was against Choso and Todo. Of course, he knew exactly how strong Choso and Todo were, but at the same time, it was Yuji who was much more terrifying considering everything that he had heard about them, including him being able to execute a special grade cursed spirit completely single-handedly. As Naoya was starting to realize that maybe, just maybe, he should have brought along the other Zenins with him rather than going completely on his own. And right as that thought passed, suddenly the distance between Naoya and Yuji was closed, but not by Naoya. As cursed energy surrounded Yuji's fist while he activated flowing red scale stack, he was going to kill Naoya right here and now. Other than Sukuna and Kenjaku, for the first time ever, he felt justified in taking a human life. However, Naoya activated his curse technique and evaded Yuji's punch at the last moment. Naoya could tell just off of the intensity and feeling that Yuji was given that this was a blow that he'd want to avoid and not one that he'd want to actually let hit him. And right as Choso was preparing to follow up with his own counterattack on Naoya, suddenly all four of them felt an overwhelmingly powerful as well as creepy force of curse energy. With only one person here being able to recognize that curse energy signature right off the bat, it was one they'd never be able to forget, and that curse energy signature belonged to Yuta Akotsu. With Yuji thinking that it was Gojo and Choso thinking that it might have been Sukuna. There might have been another Sukuna vessel out there, but no, it was neither of those things. As they all looked up to see Yuta Akotsu standing on another rooftop, preparing to jump down in order to face off against them. As Yuji tells Todo and Choso to handle Naoya and take him out, Yuji's going to stall against this guy for as long as possible until they can come to back him up. Both Choso and Todo hated this. They didn't want to leave their brother alone to fight against this demon, but at the same time they knew it would be better for them to beat Naoya and then come back up Yuji, instead of having to deal with both Naoya and Yuta at the same time. So reluctantly, the two of them accept their task. As Yuta then landed next to Naoya, causing a large crater to form in the ground as he properly got himself up and dusted himself off. And their respective battles then began, Yuta versus Yuji, as well as Naoya versus Choso and Todo. And I'm going to skip back Todo versus Naoya and Choso, primarily because of the fact that Choso was already able to win on his own, and while it was partially because Naoya was underestimating them, with the genius level intelligence that is Todo, I'm just going to skip past that part. Especially because with Todo around, it would be rather easy to get the blood poison on them. But with that out the way, let's begin. Yuta Akotsu versus Yuji Itadori. Yuta rushed towards Yuji, not holding a single bit of speed back. There were two main things that he knew about Yuji that he was warned about. The first was Yuji's immense physical strength, as his information told him that even without curse energy, he was considered superhuman by most standards. This was also consistent with all the rumors that he had heard about Yuji so far. And the second thing that he knew about was Yuji's skill and his technique. While Yuji was primarily a hand-to-hand fighter, he still had skill in all ranges, especially thanks to his teaching under Kamo. He was able to use all ranges well, not to mention the fact that he had inhuman levels of blood. This was due to him being a mutation, or at least speculated to be a type of mutation among the Kamo clan. Now in truth, the higher-ups didn't actually know that Yuji was a death painting yet, so they just believed that Yuji was some type of mutant. All of this though told Yuta Akotsu one thing: Yuji was not someone he could risk underestimating, so he couldn't let himself hold back, so he was attempting to catch Yuji off guard and stab at his chest right off the bat. However, his blade was met by another blade formed by Yuta Akotsu, a knife made out of blood being Blood Edge, as he glared at Yuta before saying, "That one has to die. You don't. Don't make me hurt you." He really wanted to avoid fighting between the two of them, as the markings on Yuji's face began to shift. Yuji was trying his best to make it clear that Yuta did not need to die, Yuta did not need to get hurt, and he just needed to target Naoya, as the mark shifted to prepare to activate flowing red scale stack. As both Yuji and Yuta hopped away from each other, Yuta could see something in Yuji's eyes, that fierce determination and desire to protect those close to them, the power that Yuji had gained to back it up. However, for Yuta's plan to work, he would need to kill Yuji, so backing down just wasn't an option. In truth, the desire was also why Yuji was trying to give him a chance, why even now he wasn't planning to kill Yuta. Naoya was a threat to those he cared about, to his friends, however Yuta was not. Yuta had a connection to Gojo, connection to the other students, and while a small part of him did have to wonder if it would be better if he was dead or not, with Todo's words from earlier, that thought has almost fully shut down, being turned to nothing more than small whispers in his head. Yuta then took the offense, releasing a barrage of slashes onto Yuji, as his body was surrounded by an overwhelming amount of curse energy near perfectly. This is a tactic from Yuta where he took advantage of his large amounts of curse energy to make it harder to telegraph his movements. However, Yuji knew better, as he was focused on Yuta's body in order to follow his movements instead, as in his other hand he formed another blood-edged knife, before extending both of their sizes a bit more to match against Yuta's blade. Yuji then began to deflect each of the slashes coming at him, staying on the defensive at least for now. However, during one of the slashes, Yuji used only one of the knives to redirect his blade, while his other hand moved fast in order to slash at Yuta, but at the last moment Yuji hesitated, causing him to slow down just a little bit. Yuta was just barely able to dodge out the way of this slash by jumping backwards, a small part of his jacket being cut by the slash, but no skin contact had been made yet, as he landed next to a car before picking up the car and throwing it at Yuji. The massive amount of CE being put into his reinforcement allowed him to do such inhuman feats. Yuji blinked in surprise, as never in his life did he expect someone else other than himself to be able to throw a car. Maybe Toto, but not this guy. As he focused his curse energy reinforcement towards his feet in order to allow himself to jump over the car and dodge it, the attack was made to be a feint by Yuta as he climbed up the car and slashed upwards at Yuji, but Yuji was able to lower both his knives to block the attack. This is when Yuta moved to hold his blade, with only one hand and focused curse energy towards his fist, punching Yuji in the chest and launching him backwards. While the blow was certainly a strong one, it didn't do much damage to Yuji at least, as Yuta hopped off the car and rushed down at Yuji. All of this happened before the car could hit the ground. Just on time, Yuji lifted up one of the blood edges to block Yuta's strike, as the ground broke beneath the both of them rather hard. Yuta then noticed that Yuji was only using one of the blood edges in order to block the blow, as Yuji then had the other blood edge compressed down into an orb. The orb then exploded, being a point-blank supernova to launch Yuta away from Yuji. Yuta was quick to get up as he looked towards his opponent. He had to admit Yuji was much stronger than he was expecting right now, as he thought to himself, and he is still holding back a bit. That hesitation from earlier to kill me, it might be an advantage I have. However, once he looked back towards Yuji, he would see a blood-red mist begin to form. In the center of it was glowing red eyes that remained only for a second before fading with the mist, as the mist was beginning to overtake the entire area. He was thankful to Tanzo for teaching him how to do this, as he was going to put this ability to good use. Yuta began to look around the blood mist he now found himself in. It was rather hot as well, but not hot enough to burn him. He tried to sense of curse energy, but it didn't work. No, it wasn't that he couldn't sense Yuji, but it felt like Yuji was everywhere now, as he focused curse energy around his blade at the same time he was now preparing Rika as well. He knew he couldn't handle this alone. He then heard the sound of a car horn that was coming at him, blinking a bit in confusion before realizing exactly what was about to happen as he jumped to the side, avoiding a car railing towards his direction, one that speed was amped up using several supernovas. The moment he landed though, he felt a hard punch land on his back, as Yuji had made his way behind him, using the car as a distraction for him to land this blow, as Yuta was launched forward, and when he turned around, Yuji was already gone. Yuta would have then began to focusing on his 5 senses rather than using curse energy sensory. He was trying to see if he could pick up any changes, hear anything, see anything, even feel anything. Detecting those small advantages might give him an advantage that he needs right now in the mist. And with that focus, he was able to notice at the corner of his eye a barrage of hardened blood arrows coming towards his body, aimed directly for his side. This time though, something else rose out instead to block. This was a massive arm of a cursed spirit, the arm of the Queen of Curses, Rika, as the full spirit began to partially manifesting in a rather large form. A soft smile did form on Yuta for just a brief moment before it turned back to the neutral face, as Yuta said, "We are going to need to do another plan. Destroy everything in the mist." If Yuta couldn't detect Yuji in the mist, he would simply destroy and disperse the mist himself. Rika understood the command as she began to rapidly slam her fists all over the area, using her massive physical form to hit everything she could. This was a rather successful move as it generated enough wind to completely disperse the mist altogether. However, instead of finding Yuji, they found several floating red orbs in the air that were all compressed. Furthermore, Yuji was high in the air with a pair of 4 blood wings right now, as he looked down towards his opponents, to Yuta and Rika, as Yuji then said, a Shikigami user like Fushiguro, before waving his hands as all the supernovas began to explode rapidly like a minefield. Yuji was slightly impressed by the massive curse energy supply that was present in her, but that wasn't going to deter him either from defeating them. Yuta was just narrowly able to avoid all of the supernovas. Rika did end up getting hit by a few of them, but the damage was rather minor. As he looked up to Yuji, seeing him flying in the air, he realized he couldn't afford to hold back, so Yuta decided now was the time to take it up a notch, as he took out the ring and placed it on his finger. As Yuji, Choso, and an almost defeated Naoya would all feel a massive wave of curse energy erupt from Yuta Kotsu, as Naoya took advantage of the fact that they were both distracted, using that chance to run away. Yuji in particular was able to get a grasp of how powerful it was since he could feel it and was closer. Yuji up to this point had been using only non-lethal techniques, primarily because he only wanted to knock out Yuta and not kill him, but he could tell right now he would need to use lethal techniques in order to fight against Sakotsu. Yuta would have then placed his hand onto the ground as he launched out a large wave of cockroaches towards Yuji. They were moving and flying rapidly towards him, as a wave of cockroaches that each had a small Rika face on them. Rika at the same time would go from above in an attempt to slam their massive fist onto Yuji. And Yuji was now face to face with this wave of cockroaches, focusing for a moment. He knew slicing exorcism would be his best move here, but not the shuriken variant that Kamo taught him. He needs to use the string variant that Choso used, though he knew he could. He did use it against Mahito, so he knew he had it in him, as his blood wings flapped in order to push Yuji out the way of Rika's punch, before he then waved his hand, releasing a large wave of thin blood similar to that of a spider web that cut through each of the cockroaches. After they were cut through, they were turned to ashes as suddenly he saw Yuta rushing towards him. Yuta now activated Projection Sorcery in order to amp up his speed. Thanks to Yuta's CE, he could technically move at speeds faster than Naobito and Naoya. This was because he could reinforce his body to a much higher level, allowing him to handle moving at those speeds. However, despite him being able to achieve much higher levels, he wouldn't be able to fight competently using those higher levels. After all, he was still much less skilled than Naoya and especially Naobito in using that technique. Projection Sorcery was a technique that required quite a large deal of skill in order to wield, and this was Yuta Akotsu's first time using Projection Sorcery. As a result of that, it allowed him to move at a speed slightly faster than Naoya, but not at the same level that Naobito could move. Yuji would have blinked, being completely caught off guard by that moment of speed as he focused flowing red scale stack to his eyes in order to amp up his perception, as at the last moment he flew out the way while activating Supernova in order to evade Yuta's attack, which was a slash attempt. As he blinked while looking towards Yuta, he did not expect such a sudden speed increase from him like this. As Yuji then thought to himself, I can't let Akotsu out of my sight, as Yuta landed on one of the buildings, going right through it like a railgun before stabbing his blade into the building in order to stop himself in his momentum. He should have gotten more adjusted to a complex curse technique like this, but he was going to have to make it work. Even with the fact that he consumed the full body of Naobito, he still didn't have enough data on how to use this curse technique properly. Complex techniques were just a pain to utilize properly. However, as he looked up, he would see that all four of the blood wings that Yuji had grown out from his back had grown in size quite massively, growing around the same size of Rika's arms each. Yuji had grown more and more efficient with this application over the 9 days he trained while eliminating curses, as all four wings flapped before releasing a barrage of heated blood arrows at Yuta's direction. This was a new variant of his blood arrow where instead of hardening his blood, he was using Tanzo's technique in order to heat up each of the arrows. Though Rika wasn't done yet either, as she rushed towards Yuji from below, throwing several cars at Yuji's direction before rushing behind the cars, trying to use the cars as a distraction to enter into hand-to-hand with Yuji. And now that Rika was fully manifested, she was even stronger than she was before, as she had full access to her curse energy reserves. Yuta's eyes would have widened as he saw the volley of blood arrows launched towards his direction. This was something he had reported to him that was similar to what Sukuna did in Shibuya. Of course, it was in a much smaller scale, but these were a bit different, as each of these arrows had steam coming off of them, as Yuta then jumped to the side, starting to rush away by heading in that direction, just narrowly avoiding them all other than one small cut to his leg. Yuta internally curses inexperience with that technique. Now Bito and even Naoya would be able to guide themselves through the arrow and use it in order to attack Yuji, but no, he still needed to get adjusted to it. He had ended up not perfectly dodging that attack and got cut by one of the arrows, as Yuta healed off the wound, having his curse energy being refilled due to Rika already being out. Yuji then opened up both of his hands, having two of the four blood wings turn into blood discs, each of them having a high amount of steam coming off of them before he threw them, slicing through each of the cars. However, the moment they reached Rika, they ended up exploding, turning to normal blood that attached to both of Rika's arms, as the liquid blood wrapped around Rika's arms and clung onto them hard. Rika was trying to shake the blood off, but it was to no use. However, Rika did notice he was actually doing no damage to her, and Rika entered into a barrage of hand-to-hand attacks on Yuji, but none of them were working. Not just was Yuji excellent at defensive maneuvers, but at the same time he was using the blood already around Rika's hand in order to slightly slow him down at the moment of impact, allowing him to have a little bit more leeway in order to dodge the attacks. However, during one of Yuji's defensive maneuvers, he took advantage to counterattack, as he moved closer to Rika and lifted up his hand, releasing a supernova at point-blank range, getting even more damage on Rika and sending her a little bit away from him. However, Yuta then saw his opening as he activated Projection Sorcery before flying right behind Yuji. Now, under normal circumstances, he wouldn't have resorted to this fast. However, he wasn't actually too sure that he could kill Yuji in 5 minutes, and he didn't want to risk that chance, especially because he knew that if he ran out of his 5 minutes, then he would lose to Yuji. Of course, other than his trump card, as he activated his domain expansion. Yuji looked around the area, seeing swords in every part and corner of this domain, and as he was about to try and move to attack, he suddenly felt cuts land all over his body. As Yuta then said, I would recommend not moving. The more and more you move, the more cuts that will land, so long as you're not following my movement. As steam came off of Yuji's body, but this was a different steam than the one Tanzo had. No, this was the steam of RCT as he healed off the wounds that had just been left. Yuji had a simple plan. He didn't have a domain expansion nor the skills to pull off one on the fly, but he did have reverse curse technique. And if it was just pain, it wouldn't stop him. However, Yuta then told him that the two of them just needed a moment to talk. Hearing that did confuse Yuji, but considering Yuta was choosing not to attack and not to continue fighting him right now, he decided to take him at his word. As Yuta explained what his plan was and that he needed to fake Yuji's death. However, he couldn't give the impression that he was on their side, primarily because of the fact that Naoya was still alive. And they couldn't just eliminate Naoya or else that would get them in even more trouble with the higher-ups than they already were. So he explained that he was planning to fake his death like he did back at the detention center, and then he attempted to use RCT in order to heal his heart, thus bringing him back to life and faking Yuji's own death. And at first Yuji was debating on if he should trust this, however he felt a little bit more inclined to trust this. After all, there was one reason and one reason alone. If Yuta wanted him dead, if Yuta really wanted him dead, then he would be dead already. He was inside of Yuta's domain expansion and Yuta was intentionally choosing not to attack right now, trying to take the easy way out. If he didn't care about Yuji, if he wasn't an ally, he wouldn't have gone out of his way to do this. Yuji did agree to this deal, however there was one more thing that he wanted to do before they went through with this. Yuta nodded as he told him that the sure hit of his domain was no longer targeting Yuji. As Yuji then ripped out a small part of his hood before having some of his blood write on the hood that Yuta Kotsu was an ally. As that blood then dried right after. He knew very well that his brothers might end up attacking Yuta because of this, and he didn't really want an extra fight to break out if he didn't have to. So he handed that over to Yuta and closed his eyes, preparing to fake his own death. As Yuta then stabbed Yuji through the chest, killing Yuji. All 9 of the death paintings could suddenly feel Yuji's death, as a massive amount of worry entered onto them before Yuta's domain broke. Choso and Todo were rushing towards Yuji's direction, as Choso immediately fired a piercing blood right at Yuta, before Rika's hand rose out in order to shield them from the attack. Todo was also preparing to attack as well, until Todo recognized the steam of what was happening. Yuta Kotsu was healing Yuji, and he told Choso to stop. As Yuta then had Rika give over the piece of the hoodie to Choso, and Choso read it out, realizing that Yuta Kotsu was an ally. And after the 3 of them returned and explained it to everybody else, they all prepared to move out to head towards their next location to get a potential new ally. However, Yuta did make a temporary stop before they could all continue, as he went over to where Naoya was. Naoya was still quite injured from the fight against Choso and Todo. Not to mention, Choso's poison was taking a toll, before Yuta arrived and decided to heal Naoya, as he told Naoya to tell the higher-ups that Yuji Itadori was dead. As Naoya nodded in agreement, understanding the order before leaving. All the while, Yuji found himself in the dreamscape once more. However, this time Yuji found himself standing on a raft. And as he looked down, he would see what looked like a river, a massive river made completely out of blood. Not just any blood though, his own blood. As the raft then set sail, Yuji would awaken in a river made out of blood. Currently, he was sat upon a raft. As he recognized what this was one of the nightmares he had seen so often. As he began to look around, looking back into the river, he saw something that was bone-chilling. Hundreds, no, over 1,000 faces made from the blood of Yuji's river. During the time that Sukuna was in control of his body, he ended the lives of a lot of people, and each of these faces were a person that Yuji killed. However, because of the fact that it was Yuji's own blood that killed them, he was able to recognize each of these faces. Their faces were forever engraved in Yuji's mind. And all of these faces, every single last one of them, were all staring up at Yuji. It was then Yuji felt a hand made out of blood grab his hand, as well as a tendril made out of blood grab at his leg. Yuji quickly looked behind him to see where it was coming from to see a familiar body, but not one that Sukuna killed, but it was one that Yuji still blamed himself for the death of, which the body was a replica of Junpei's body, but fully made out of blood. With glowing red eyes, they slowly rose out from the river. As the voice then spoke, saying, "What's the point of going back? You're only going to cause more deaths of people close to you, just like how you killed me." His tone was dead and cold, as now they were trying to pull Yuji into the river, as Yuji would have began to resist against it. He didn't want to give in fully. He still had people he needed to live for. He couldn't die yet. Then he felt another hand grab him as well. This time it was the grip that belonged to a sorcerer. However, the hand and texture felt rather old, as an old man with a beard and mustache made completely out of blood conjured behind him, this being a conjured version of Naobito that was also trying to pull him in. As he then heard several voices from the river say, "You are a curse on the world, so let yourself be taken. Don't go back, as you will bring nothing more than pain and strife like you already did." Yuji couldn't just let himself die yet. He still had things to live for, people to live for that he would need to go back to. But these were thoughts that were still present in his head. He knew all of this was happening in his head right now. He just needed to not give in, before feeling another hand grab onto his neck from behind, to begin pulling him in, or at least trying to. This hand was also notably familiar to him as well, as it was the hand of one of Yuji's biggest failures. A familiar voice echoed as they said, "The longer you live, the more mistakes you'll make. You could have stopped the Culling games from happening if you just killed me, but no. You wanted to put your own sense of justice, which truly was revenge in, which led to all the consequences." It was a blood version of Mahito that was also trying to grab him and pull him into the river. "Let yourself die and never cause any pain again." As several, no, all of the people that Sukuna had killed in his body began to work to start pulling away at Yuji, hundreds of hands each trying to pull him in at once, Yuji activating flowing red scale stack in order to try resisting against that hold and continue to live on, but it was to no use, as he was pulled right into the blood. This was also causing some issues in the real world as well, as Yuta could feel his RCT's effects starting to get a bit weaker. Yuta then explained, reverse curse technique on others is harder because of several aspects. One of these include if Yuji refuses the treatment, and everyone there's eyes widen in shock and worry. As Todo then realized what was going on, as he looked over to Yuji before saying to them, he is debating on whether coming back to life or not is worth it. This wasn't a surprise to any of them. Even Yuta was able to tell through his battle against Yuji was debating on if living was worth it or not, because there were a few times where Yuji hesitated because he was debating on if his life and staying alive was worth it. Everyone was now beginning to think on ways they could potentially help Yuji. One of them had to come up with an idea, and this was when Nobara came up with hers. Through the 9 days they were training with each other and killing cursed spirits, she found out quite a bit about the death paintings, including how they shared dreams. So she thought that maybe if they fell asleep, they'd be able to go into Yuji's dream and help him, since he was unconscious right now. And while that was certainly a good idea in theory, Choso shook his head as he looked to his brothers before looking back to Nobara. Recently, we haven't been able to connect to Yuji in his dreams. We don't know if it's because of his mood or because of Sukuna being powerful enough to shut it down, but we haven't been able to connect. And it was pretty clear they all hated this. They didn't know how to help Yuji or how they could even try and help him right now. The only thing they could do was put their faith in Yuji that he would be able to do this. Yuji was now starting to resist. He was trying to fight back and tussle against all of the hands pulling him down, but it was too many. Too many were trying to hold him down and pull him down as he felt himself starting to lose breath. He was getting closer and closer to his final breath. And as Yuji looked up, he would see another entity, but this one was different. Unlike the others, it was made from dried blood, being almost pure black in color, other than glowing red eyes as well as fists covered in that same red. But most notably, he recognized exactly who this was. This was him. The same Yuji from those nightmares and what he was afraid of becoming. A threat to everybody around them, a monster of power, a weapon to be used by their enemies as well as a ticking time bomb waiting to be unleashed. As this creature got closer to Yuji, gripping onto his arms rather tightly, almost like he was trying to push Yuji down into the river to force him to continue to drown. He didn't want to accept it, not now, not after everything that had happened, as the whispers that existed in his head were turning into shouts that were all shouting to let himself die. Yuji's own head was his own worst enemy right now, until words echoed through his head, words of one man whose death he didn't feel guilty about. The words of his grandfather, which guided him on his life, which guided his goal of being able to give people good and satisfying deaths, as well as to help people because he was strong. It was all clear in Yuji's head now. He was trying to fight back against this for so long. He was trying his best to not become what he was afraid of, but he had been approaching this wrong. The only way that he could continue to help others was by accepting the fact that he could become a monster and taking it as his own. It would be him who would control his fate. He was a man-made monster, but it would be him who decides how he uses that power. As the blood river stopped, before erupting with all the people who were trying to grab at Yuji being sent backwards, before returning back into normal blood in the lake, other than one. The other Yuji as they stared down towards Yuji before they began to shifting to a red liquid that surrounded Yuji's body. However, it wasn't trying to hurt him. Instead, it was becoming one with him. Yuji still felt guilt from everything Sukuna did and not being strong enough to stop him. That guilt would never leave him, but the desire to let his own life end to no longer be a threat was silenced once and for all, as Yuji began to reawaken once more, looking around to try and figure out where he was. And when Yuji woke up, he would see all 10 of his brothers nearby, worried for their brother, as Yuji was embraced in a rather big group hug by all of them. Up to this point, they had all been incredibly worried for Yuji. They thought that he had died, as Yuji looked around to see what type of area that he was in, and he was in a ruined building with what looked like a bonfire in the center. He was confused about where he was as everyone let go after in order to let Yuji properly wake up and just adjust to everything. Alongside his brothers, he would also see that Mimiko, Nanako, and Nobara were all here. After having a couple more moments, Yuji finally told his brothers what had happened, the dream he had, and his new purpose, which hearing that did make everybody happy, especially Todo due to having this talk with Yuji a day before, but also had another side effect. All of them were gaining even more motivation from seeing that spark of fire and determination in Yuji's eyes. After everyone finished getting caught up with each other and things began to calm down, Yuta decided now was the perfect time in order to start explaining why he was attacking Yuji and what their plan was, as well as explaining that to every other sorcerer here present. While he could have interrupted earlier, he honestly didn't have the heart to do so. As Yuta first started by explaining why he was here, which was because Gojo had trusted over them to watch over the rest of the students if something had happened to Gojo, which Yuta figured the best way to watch over them would be eliminating the threat that was the higher-ups. And that did make a lot of sense with Yuji as well, which would be a good reason to explain why he allowed Naoya to live in order to report that back. However, he then heard the voice of a man who he had recognized, another friend and ally of Yuji, Megumi Fushiguro. As he then went on to explain the Culling games, how his sister was ensnared into it, and that he needed Yuji's help in order to save his sister, Yuji nodded. He was going to make sure that she would be saved no matter what. As both Yuji and Megumi felt an arm wrap around their shoulders as a familiar face came in between them, that one being Nobara Kugisaki, as she told them that it wouldn't just be Yuji's strength that would be helping, but Nobara's as well. Sure, Yuji might be ahead of them right now, but that was only for now. All three of them were going to work together to save Tsumiki. As Yuji then made another choice before looking over the Todo and asking for an odd request, to give him the 2 fingers that he hadn't consumed yet. Yuji knew by this point his body had fully adapted, and he was near certain that if he were to consume both of those fingers at once, he would be able to make sure Sukuna didn't take control over his body, though he was still planning to make sure to space them out between days just in case, just to make sure that Sukuna didn't have a chance at all to take over his body. Which led to Todo nodding in agreement and passing the 2 fingers over to Yuji. Yuji then consumed one of the fingers while having the other remain in his pockets, the tattoos rising out for just 1 moment before vanishing. He didn't twitch. Sukuna didn't even have a chance to take over this time. However, Yuji internally could feel that smirk of confidence and intrigue on Sukuna. Yuta in particular was impressed. He had faith in Yuji, but to actually see it was something else. Megumi and Yuta then began to explain their plan to everyone in the group. First, they needed to head back to Jujutsu High in order to get to contact with Tengen. Furthermore, Yuki was already there waiting for them to arrive, which could help them to find out even more about Tsumiki. They needed to find a way to get Gojo free and fix the Culling games. The issue was they had no idea how to actually get to Tengen. Or at least they didn't until Choso added in that he might have actually had an idea on how to get there. During the Goodwill Festival, Mahito had a way to bypass the doors of the barrier. Fortunately, Choso had overheard the way and could explain to them how to do so. And with that, the group of 17 sorcerers would all make their way to Tengen's base. And once they arrived to the location, they did see some familiar faces. Nanami Kendo, who had also been healed, but was covered in bite marks from Dagon's domain. He unfortunately was unable to heal his eye, but other than that, he was actually doing pretty fine. But considering the high amounts of death that happened in Shibuya alone, getting off with only losing an eye was definitely better than most others. Yuki Tsukumo and Maki Zeni were also here, which was a shock to Yuta, as he had actually expected Maki to have left by now, but Maki explained that she wanted to wait until they had a proper plan before heading to the Zenin clan household in order to try and get her weapons back. Finally, and what was the biggest surprise, was Kamo Noritoshi, who was wearing a necklace and reading up on a book right now. Most people here didn't recognize the necklace other than Yuji Itadori, who sent a nod over to Kamo, realizing exactly what that necklace was, which did cause a soft smile to rise on Yuji since those were nice familiar memories for him. As Yuji moved over to Nanami to talk with him for a bit and catch up, he had missed him since Nanami was his first official teacher. With Kamo being his main teacher, he talked with the two of them. As both Kamo and Nanami told Yuji they were proud, he had done well and had surpassed both of them. They knew if they had to fight Jogo, let alone the beast that was Mahito, they would not stand a chance, but also they told him they were proud of Yuji for being able to overcome his demons. But that was when Maki crossed her arms as she looked over at them and said, "Surprised to see Geto's 2 kids are here." As she sent a glare over to Mimiko and Nanako, Maki had recognized them on the spot. Yuta did as well, but he didn't feel a need to call them out about this, with Maki making a comment that she thought that they would be allied with Geto and not be allied on their side. However, their response was rather simple as Mimiko said, "That bastard is not Geto," returning the glare back to Maki as Nanako then said, "We're here to help kill him. You're welcome for help taking out that other curse." There was a clear amount of tension between the three of them that was likely not going to fade away for a while. This is when Yuki lifted up her hand as she told them to calm down. This tension is exactly what Naruto Shikamo, the old one, wants. They needed to put this behind them for now. If they wanted to kill each other after, they could do so later. The three of them decided to agree to that for now. Though it was also pretty clear that Maki was still suspicious of the two of them. After that exchange though, Maki looked over to the other people there. She had recognized Choso but not the others. She also still had no idea who Choso was, which led to Yuji explaining that these were his siblings, also having Yuji have to explain that he was a deaf painting and that he was half curse, half human. and upon hearing that news, a look of surprise entered onto the sorcerers that were already here before Yuji and his group arrived. Excluding Yuki Sukuna, of course, who was already prepared and had met them back in Shibuya. After all, she was the one who actually told them and explained to them where to stay in order to make a small refugee camp if they were going to stay in Shibuya for longer. The group then entered into the Tomb of the Star, needing to split into 3 groups to go to the elevator. This is primarily because they had a group of 21 sorcerers, including several who were much larger due to being more like cursed spirits than humans in shape. They almost needed to take 4 groups of people, but they managed to figure out a way to do it with just 3 groups of people. And once they entered the barrier, all they would see is a white void, and they were confused. But before they could exit and think this was just a waste of time, they heard a voice stop them that said, "Leaving so soon, child of the Zenin, child of the Kamo, Michizane descendant, death paintings, and vessel of Sukuna," which caused them all to stop in their tracks and look over to the person who was talking to them. This person was Tengen. This then leads into most of the meaning with Tengen going very similar to how it would in canon, such as finding out that the real name of their opponent was Kenjaku. The one that was currently present and possessing Gaido's body was Kenjaku, which did also help with the name distinction because they had to make it clear all the time which Kamo they were talking about, since both Kamos were named Kamo and Aratoshi. They also then come to know that Tengen is immortal, but they still do physically age, which is why they look the way they do, with Kotsuzo making a joke to Todo that Tengen kinda looks like a thumb. And while they did definitely want to learn more about Kenjaku's objectives and how to open the prison realm, to get that information, 2 of them would need to stay behind, between Yuta, Kotsu, Yuki, Tsukumo, and the eldest death painting. It was a surprise that they didn't ask for Yuji, but the reason was because of the massive risk that was keeping Sukuna near them despite the level of strength that Yuji had. This also does lead into some confusion rising among them as well. After all, based on what they knew, Tengen was immortal. Why would they need guards? This led to Tengen explaining Kenjaku's plan to turn themselves into the merger in order to awaken jujutsu sorcery all across Japan. Also leading to them explaining how fate had gotten broken by Toji Zenin so long ago. They knew they needed Gojo back. Gojo was the key to solving this issue and ending the Culling games once and for all. That was the thought that echoed through all of their heads aside from Yuji and Yuta. Yuta felt a need to be able to become strong enough to deal with this entirely on his own. He didn't want to have to put this burden on Gojo. Yuji was in a similar boat, but he didn't want to be the only person with that strength to deal with it. He felt that he needed to help all of his friends and comrades become strong enough to be able to take on this burden with him. However, both Yuji and Yuta were similar in one aspect. They wanted Gojo back due to Gojo being their friend and mentor, so they were going to make sure that Gojo was saved. However, they could all see how massive a threat this was, and considering this was basically their only option in order to get Gojo back, Choso and Yuki agreed to stay behind. Choso because he wanted a better chance to kill Kenjaku, and Yuki because they still had things to talk about with Tengen. Eso, Kechizu, Naranzo, and Tanzo decided to stay behind as well, to try and offer any support they could. Tanzo's ability of Blood Mist was going to be useful as well as Naranzo's Acid. Nanami also stayed behind, as he felt this might be a better way to help rather than going out. Finally, while Mimiko decided that she was going to stay behind in order to help, Nanako was not. Nanako felt she owed a debt to Yuji, as without Yuji she'd have been killed by Jogo, but she also was able to help him with another aspect. Yuji did not have a domain expansion, but Nanako was very good at making sure domains didn't activate through preventing them from making hand signs. So she felt that her curse technique being used in tandem with how strong Yuji was would definitely be very beneficial for him. Then she was certain that her technique and strategy would not work against Kenjaku. After all, Kenjaku did watch that entire fight happen and had Jogo under their control. There was no way that Kenjaku was going to fall for the same tactic with that amount of knowledge under his belt. Especially considering they wouldn't have the surprise factor on their side either, since Kenjaku would very much be on guard and prepared for their existence. Tengen did give them one more bit of info in order to help them. There was someone who could potentially help them with freeing Gojo from the prison realm. Because while Gojo did seal away or destroy every single cursed tool that could help and potentially nullify this cursed technique like the inverted sphere of heaven and the black rope, there was a sorcerer that was reawakened in the Culling games that would be able to help. This was a sorcerer known as the Angel, who had the ability to extinguish barriers, extinguish cursed spirits, as well as nullify cursed techniques. That was going to be who they were going to have to go after. Now the hard part was they actually didn't know what she looked like, but they knew they were going to have to find her if they wanted to free Gojo. So going into the Culling games, they had a total of 2 objectives. The first objective was to overall get 400 points in order to add in the 4 rules that they wanted to add. And the rules that they wanted to add were rather simple. One rule was to allow the players to leave the Culling games, and another rule was to allow the transfer of points between players to be possible. However, Yuta then brought something else up as well, that they still had one more ally that they wanted to get. One that according to Yuta Kotsu was just as strong, if not stronger than he is. Because while they weren't short-handed, having as many allies as possible would certainly be good for them. This person being Hikari Kinji, the third year that was expelled during the Night Parade of 100 Demons. This led to them deciding that the people that would be best to send after them would be Megami and Nobara in order to go recruit Hikari, where they meet up with Panda during their time there. Originally, they were planning to send Yuji as well, but with the destruction that Sukuna caused and the fact he did it with Yuji's technique as well, they decided it would be too risky to send Yuji in because there was a pretty good chance Hikari might end up recognizing them. And if Hikari recognized them, there was a pretty good chance that Hikari might think they are working with the higher-ups, which would likely end any connection with them. Nobara was basically an unknown coming from a normal sorcerer family, so it was very unlikely that Hikari would recognize them. After all, it wasn't like she was famous or anything like that. Though that comment in particular caused a glare to rise from Nobara, however, she just had to accept that for now. It was an advantage that she was going to have. However, she knew for a fact that once this was done, she was going to become famous. She was going to be one of the greatest Jujutsu sorcerers of all time. Sanzo and Shozo decided that they were both going to go with Megami and Nobara in order to give them some backup as extra muscle, which did lead into Megami asking what their curse techniques were, with Shozo explaining that he was able to create blood clones of himself. However, the blood clones were stationary and more so made to be diversions rather than actually assisting in fighting. As Sanzo, the silhouette looked a lot more like a skeleton wearing a bunch of normal clothes, explaining that his technique allowed him to create several limbs made out of blood, with Shozo explaining that he was the 5th brother and that Sanzo was the 7th brother. While Nobara, Megami, Sanzo, and Shozo would go after Hikari Kinji, the rest of them were splitting off into different groups. Yuji, Todo, and Nanako were planning to head over to Tokyo Colony 1 and 2 in order to try and scout them out a little bit and figure out which colony would be the best for them to go into. Yuta was planning to head over to the Sendai colony in order to attempt to get points. Kamo and Tanzo would head to the Sakurajima colony where they would meet up with Maki after Maki located the weapons from the Zenin clan in order to add more to her arsenal. Once Nobara, Sanzo, Megami, and Shozo were done, Uiui would teleport them to the Lake Gosho colony while Hikari and Panda would head into Tokyo colony number 2. However, one of the Death Cleanings were thinking something to themselves. How could they help? This brother had taken on a form a lot more similar to that of a slug. This was Shouso, the 9th brother. They did want to go as well, but he felt he was a bit too weak to go with them. He was going to try and train himself up to get stronger, as right now he was barely on the level of semi-grade 1. With what opponents they were going to have to face, he would need to get stronger. As we now return back to the Kamo clan headquarters, with Kenjaku currently sitting down, a hand on his cheek as he had been able to watch the entire battle between Yuji and Yuta. He had left behind a cursed spirit in order to watch the battle as he wanted to see Yuji's progress. He had also watched Yuji during the entire 9 days, having the cursed spirit subtly follow them in order to get an idea of how strong they were. As Kenjaku then said out loud, Yuji's progressed quite a bit. I honestly wasn't expecting him to be that powerful, especially considering his mental state is still hindering him. While he started to use lethal techniques near the end, he chose not to use Flowing Red Scale Burst. How curious. Though Yuta Kotsu has also become a little bit more of a threat. He's now gained access to Naobito's curse technique, which is going to be much more difficult. I will admit, I am a little impressed he managed to turn one of my own weapons against me by using Kurorushi. I must admit, they are doing quite well. So now let's see you take on the next steps. Cause I did add some more precautions in order to help you improve, my boy. All the while, Kenjaku was now preparing himself in order to head over to Tengen. He would need to find them and capture them in order to add them to their arsenal. As now everyone sets forth with a goal in mind, as we now enter into the Culling games. Yuji, Nanako, and Todo would have all arrived to the front of the Tokyo Colony 1 and 2 barrier. However, before the three entered inside, the Kogane appeared in front of Yuji, which caught all three of them off guard. But what was even more surprising to them was the fact that Yuji was revealed to already be a player in the Culling games and the fact that he could get the rules. Even though he didn't think he was a player, he was apparently registered into the Culling games. And the rule they announced was rather simple. Players can now view information of other players such as name, points, number of rules changed, and residing colony. That was until he realized why he could see the rules. Ryomen Sukuna was a player in the Culling games, which by extension would make Yuji a player in the Culling games. A part of Yuji wondered if his siblings were in a similar boat too. It could also be because he was an experiment of Kenjaku, but he wasn't too sure yet, but he was currently leaning closer to being Sukuna. But Yuji and Todo both believe that the most likely result was because of Sukuna. This is when Todo asked the Kogane if they could disclose the information of all players. The Kogane informed them that they could only follow the request of Yuji Itadori, which then led to Yuji telling the Kogane to follow Todo's requests as well. The Kogane displayed everyone's information, including players who were dead as well. While they were scrolling, they saw that one player had 100 points and added a rule to the games, Hajime Kashimo, who was in Tokyo Colony number 2. Todo then asked for them to see all players who had 100 points in total or over 100 points, which showed Higuruma Hiromi, who had 102 points and was in Tokyo Colony number 1, as well as Hajime Kashimo, who had 100 points in Tokyo Colony number 2. Yuji sent this information to everybody, although he knew Yuta Akotsu wasn't going to get this information due to him already being in one of the Culling Games colonies. However, the main person he sent it to was Megami in order to see what he was going to come up with for a new plan. Which Megami was rather quick to come up with a new plan, where Nobara, Shosou, and Sanzo would go to Tokyo Colony number 2 to stay with Akari, while Megami was going to go to Tokyo Colony number 1 to meet up with Yuji, Todo, and Nanako to offer some support. Todo then asked if the Kogane could tell them if there were any players that had the title of the Angel. If they could find one with the title of the Angel, it would save them a lot of time. However, unfortunately for them, the Kogane informed them that they couldn't recognize people off of nicknames, so much for that idea. Though Todo wasn't that quick to give up yet, as he had another realization. Tengen was the one who gave them the information of the fact that the Angel was a player in the Culling Games to begin with, which meant there was a likely chance that Tengen actually knew the Angel's name. Because this left one of two scenarios. Either A, Tengen had an idea of who the player was beyond just the simple fact that they were reincarnated into the games, or the second option, which he didn't really want to think of but he had to admit was now possible, Tengen was working with Kenjaku. After all, unless Tengen had some way to spy on all the Culling Games players, how else would they get the information of who Kenjaku was working with other than potentially working with them in the past to get that person under their control? Todo did also bring this up with Yuji and Nanako, who Yuji and Nanako agreed on that being a possibility as well. Not to mention the weird amount of personal information that Tengen had on Kenjaku. They really did have to be cautious and suspicious about them. But at the same time, they felt that if Tengen was working with Kenjaku, they probably would have just given themselves up at this point. So more likely the former was the reason. But the main way they could potentially confirm it was by asking Tengen themselves if they knew what the Angel's actual name was. If the Tengen did know what the Angel's name was, it did make it less likely that Kenjaku was working with them, and more likely they were just spying. However, if they didn't know who the actual Angel's name was and just sensed them reappear, it became much more suspicious. Though either way, nothing was going to clear Tengen of suspicion yet, at least in their minds. They weren't too sure if they could trust him or not. So Yuji sent a message over to Choso in order to tell Choso to ask Tengen what the name of the Angel was. And it did take a couple of seconds for them to get a name. However, Yuji did get a name, being Hana Kuresu. And when Yuji asked where this player was located, he figured out that this player was located in Tokyo Colony number 1. And while at first Yuji was a little bit on the fence on whether he should go to Tokyo Colony number 2 or Tokyo Colony number 1, considering Tokyo Colony number 2 likely contained the stronger player in Hajime Kashimo since he was actually able to make a rule change and still have 100 points left, the second that they learned that Hana was in Tokyo Colony number 1, that became his priority. Not just Tokyo Colony number 1 contained the Angel, but it also contained someone who could have over 100 points and help them with one of the rules they wanted to introduce. He also sent the name over to Megami as well, which that name did ring a little bit of a bell for Megami, but he wasn't too sure why or who this person was. As Yuji, Todo, and Nanako all entered into the barrier, each of them having two targets in mind, Higuruma Hiromi as well as the Angel. And this led to all three of them being teleported to different parts of the barrier. However, Todo was surprisingly pretty close to Nanako, as Todo was teleported onto the ground while Nanako was flying high in the air, with Todo quickly infusing a rock with curse energy before clapping, then making Nanako swap placing with that rock to make sure she didn't have to land on the ground. Nanako thanked Todo for the quick save, though she was looking around and she was rather confused at where Yuji was. She couldn't spot him anywhere. Meanwhile, on the other side of Tokyo Colony number 1, Yuji was flying high in the air. He was rather fast to create two pairs of blood wings in order to allow himself to fly. Yuji was quite fast to realize that all of them had been separated from each other. He used the Kogane in order to check if both Todo and Nanako were alive, and figuring out they were alive, he did feel a bit of relief. Though he didn't have much time to focus on that, as he suddenly heard the sound of what sounded like a jet rushing towards him. As one of the Culling Games players took advantage of this chance and slammed Yuji through two buildings. And she had to admit he was tough. The fact that Yuji was able to take that with little to no damage was insane. Though Yuji told them that they didn't have much time to focus on that, as suddenly blood wrapped around their entire body. Yuji used this chance to put some of his own blood onto her, before it wrapped around her tightly as Yuji told her, "You're going to tell me everything you know about Higuruma Hiromi." As she was no longer able to fly and release themselves, with Haba coming down in order to try and back them up, but before they could even get the chance, Yuji was rather quick to fly right above them and smack them down on the head, knocking them out with a single blow due to the head being their weak spot, as he made some blood wrap around them as well. Before he then had the Kogane appear and asked the Kogane to scan the both of them for their points, with Kogane informing them that the Jetpack Girl had a total of 26 points and that Haba had a total of 32 points. And Yuji realized very quickly that both of them likely killed civilians in order to get those points. They didn't seem to be all that strong in terms of sorcerer level, and if they were strong sorcerers, their point number would either end in a 0 or a 5, since sorcerers were worth 5 points. And currently right now both of them were being quiet, so Yuji chose to tighten the restraints of the blood around them. However, before this could get really painful for them, another person was able to come up there and told Yuji about that information that he wanted, that person being Amai, also telling them that they recognized Yuji from their hometown since the two of them did go to the same place together, with Yuji remembering his entire nickname from before. He really did not like his old nickname and thought it was super cringy. He was also kind of thankful that he was not the one to come up with it, but he wished people came up with a better nickname for him. Before the blood wings went back into Yuji's back as he began to head into the direction where Higuruma was located in order to face off against him. At the same time, Todo and Nanako met up with a woman named Remy, though Todo was able to play things a lot better than Megumi was able to, with Todo promising that he was going to be her knight, that he was going to put his life on the line for them. And while this did slightly confuse Nanako, at the same time she could see that he was just playing around with them and playing along for now, so she was just going to go along with it too. And now the both of them head off to face off against their respective opponents. Yuji was right now being very cautious with the blood manipulation that he showed off. He wasn't sure who was watching and he wanted to hide as much of his abilities as possible. And when he entered, he saw an odd sight. A man in a suit that was relaxing in a bathtub with the water currently on. And this leads into most of the conversation between Higuruma and Yuji going the exact same, with Higuruma trying to tell Yuji that he has to live a little bit more freer, with Yuji trying to convince him that maybe they should end the Culling games, and Higuruma denying him, which eventually leads into the two of them having to enter into conflict. As Higuruma then asks Yuji, "Have you ever killed someone who's pissed you off? It feels better than you'd think." This in particular ticked off Yuji to no end. After all, a lot of his issues, a lot of his emotions, and a lot of the turmoil that was going through him was because of how willing and how easy Sukuna was when it came to killing people. The fact Sukuna could do it with almost without a second thought, and now he was facing off against somebody else who had that same value, or at least similar value, it annoyed him to no end. So Yuji needed to figure out a way to force him to use those 100 points, no matter what. This was something that he absolutely had to do. As Yuji immediately activated Flowing Red Scale Stack, while focusing his blood towards his fist to activate the blood armor in order to reinforce his blows even further. But he was too late as Higuruma had already managed to activate his domain expansion. Yuji did attempt to try and close the distance in a rather fast burst of speed, so fast that it even impressed Higuruma to try and kick him, but it didn't work. The domain did not allow for any violence between either parties. Yuji was able to very quickly figure out that this was a type of domain which was a non-lethal domain, where in exchange for not being a lethal domain, the rules were much more heavily enforced. These were much more older and traditional type of domains in comparison to the now more modern sure hit domains, where those domains centered around having a sure kill factor similar to that of gojo, as well as leading into Higuruma explaining the rules of how the domain functioned to Yuji Itadori. How the domain is going to give Higuruma one piece of evidence for the case that is going to be displayed, and how Yuji had a total of 3 options: silence, confession, or denial, where he could either fight back against it, be silenced, or he can confess to committing a sin. And that while Judgment Man will know everything about an opponent, he is not going to be able to use that knowledge against them. He is only going to base his conclusion off the evidence presented. With the crime that Itadori Yuji was put under being, Itadori Yuji is under suspicion of entering the pachinko shop Maji Vegas as a customer on July 16, 2017 despite being under the age of 18. And while Yuji did try to lie and say he only went in there to use the washroom, Higuruma was able to pull out evidence that it made Yuji end up being guilty. This led into the domain failing, as Yuji tried to call upon his blood manipulation once more, but it didn't work. This led to Yuji having an opening, as Higuruma took that chance to slam their hammer right into Yuji's face, sending them flying backwards. And when Higuruma tried to go in for a second strike, this time Yuji caught that with only slight pushback, as curse energy flared around Yuji's body while he looked towards Higuruma. It had been a while since Yuji had gotten the opportunity to fight with just curse energy alone. The last time he did that was back during Goodwill against Todo. But from that initial strike, he could feel one thing, as he told Higuruma, "You won't be able to beat me," before he let go of Higuruma's hammer and punched Higuruma hard in the gut. Higuruma was winded from that blow alone, as he realized that Yuji was this strong just off of curse energy reinforcement alone. It was a really good idea to take away Yuji's curse technique, because if he still had that, he would have been demolished by that one punch. Higuruma slammed his hammer into the ground in order to stop himself from skidding that far back. However, that was a mistake, as Yuji rushed towards him and closed distance. As he then did another punch, this one being landed on his face, before grabbing onto Higuruma's shirt and pulling him in for an elbow to the gut. As Yuji asked if he was ready to surrender those points now, or if he was still going to have to fight against him. Higuruma, in a move of defiance, attempted to slam that hammer into Yuji's face, but Yuji was able to jump over that hammer and kick him hard in the face. as Higuruma was pushed backwards before he began to release a rapid swing of his hammer, several rapid swings in order to attempt to land a blow on Yuji, but Yuji was able to dodge each and every single one of them, choreographing them rather well, before it was followed by an uppercut to Higuruma's chin, and finally a hard kick to Higuruma's stomach. As thoughts were racing through Higuruma's head, he was trying to figure out some way that he could turn the tables. Right now, Yuji had a massive advantage of his curse energy reinforcement. But not just that, their body was also incredibly impressive as well. But there was one option that Higuruma could think of right now, and that option was a rather simple one. He was going to call for a retrial. As before Yuji could land another blow on them, suddenly they both teleported away from each other as Higuruma called upon a retrial. If things went successful for him, if things went his way, then he would be able to win this. Though there was something else about Yuji that was odd to him, something that was making him feel a little bit off, more than just his physical power. As Yuji was now being put on crimes for the lives that Sukuna had ended in Shibuya, for all 8,722 lives Sukuna had taken. At least the evidence told Higuruma that it was Sukuna who took those lives and not Yuji. But to Higuruma's surprise, Yuji admitted himself as guilty. Yuji admitted that he had done that, and he still ultimately held himself to blame for all the lives that were taken in Shibuya. While he was going to try and continue to move past that and continue to move even with that guilt on his mind, he still ultimately blamed himself. It was his body, his blood, all of that ended those 8,000 lives. As the executioner's sword fell into Higuruma's hands while his hands shook, Higuruma felt he finally had an advantage. Sure, yes, Yuji was still the physically superior, especially considering he still had access to his curse energy, but he felt if he just landed one hit he could win. It wasn't like he wasn't able to land hits before, it was just Yuji was blocking them. However, there was something in Yuji's eyes that made his very soul shake. As Higuruma then yelled, "All people are flawed and hideous, no matter how noble of a soul you wish to have. You won't find anything more than that. The darkness lying before your eyes is nothing more than darkness. Even if you ignite a light, a brilliant void will once again be sprawled out ahead of you." Though in reality, Higuruma was yelling that to himself rather than Yuji. Higuruma was trying to prove it to himself that all people were bad, that there was no such thing as a noble soul. As Yuji then threw a massive amount of chairs towards Higuruma, using that as cover in order to reach him and punch him in the gut. He then evaded one of the executioner blade slashes in order to land a punch on his face. As Yuji then said, "I might not be a pure soul, but there are still so many out there that need to be saved, that need to be helped, and the longer you fight against this, the more and more people are going to be hurt." Because Yuji did agree, he didn't think of himself as a noble soul, not whatsoever. As Higuruma was thinking why would he admit to himself doing the crime when it wasn't him who did it? No, it was Sukuna who wiped out all of those people. And in Yuji, he saw the eyes of so many people he had tried to protect and failed, all the people who had innocence, who were never responsible for that crime. And yet he was about to try and execute another person who fit that role, as Yuji and Higuruma rushed towards each other, aiming to do one final closing move between the two of them. However, a moment before Yuji could reach Higuruma, he suddenly saw something out the corner of his eyes. Higuruma's blade faded, and Yuji's curse setting returned to him as well, as Higuruma yelled out that "You're not guilty," with Yuji at the last second manipulating his blood to force himself to stop his momentum so he wouldn't land a blow on Higuruma and force himself to jump back. Yuji looked a little bit confused for a second as he tilted his head, asking what was up. However, Higuruma then says, "Penal Code Article 39, Section 1. If a person lacks cognitive ability or capacity of control, they are considered non-compo mentis. You had your body taken over by Sukuna at Shibuya." Yuji blinked, being caught a little bit off guard by the fact that Higuruma even knew about Sukuna. But Higuruma then continued, as he said, "Meaning you had no control over your actions, plus you didn't willingly give up control either, which means you're innocent, you're not at fault." And even with that being the case, Yuji had to say that he didn't agree. "But still, it's my fault. It's because I'm weak. I was created to be a weapon, to be utilized and used as a weapon. A monster created by another monster, and while I'm trying to use that strength to help save people now, it still's my fault. I should have been strong enough to stop myself from losing in Shibuya to Mahito. I should have been strong enough to make sure that Sukuna didn't take control over my body." As Higuruma tapped his chin for a moment before he decided to ask Yuji his first question. "Is that so? Well, let me ask you this question then. Do you have any friends that are sorcerers like you?" Yuji did not, as he explained that he had several friends. His fellow first years like Megami and Nobara, his brothers including his newly founded brother Todo, the second years including the new one that he had recently met named Yuta Akotsu, his two mentors Kamo and Nanami, even Mimiko and Naniko he actually considered his friends as well. As Higuruma then said, "Okay, let's say your friend Megami, let's say he were to be possessed by Sukuna. But he did everything in his power he could to fight back against it. He trained as best as he could. He tried his best to keep his soul as strong as possible. Would you blame him for wiping out that many lives? Would you blame him for anybody who he killed when Sukuna was under control of his body? And Yuji shook his head no, however he felt he could tell where this was going. As Higuruma raised an eyebrow before saying, "Then why don't you feel the same way about yourself?" And Yuji was brought to a silence at that. He had blamed himself for not being strong enough to stop Sukuna from taking control over his body. He had thought of himself as a monster for what Sukuna had done and how he was built. But really, he was seeing it all pretty clear now. He wasn't a monster. He was somebody who just felt a large amount of guilt and was trying to move on. This wasn't his fault. Sure, he wasn't strong enough to stop them, but at the same time, he had done everything he could to stop them. He had done everything in his power to try. As Higuruma asked the most important question of them all, are you willing to forgive yourself for not having enough power to stop something that wasn't under your control whatsoever? As Yuji went silent at that question, in truth he didn't know. There was a still small part of him that emotionally felt he deserved to not forgive himself, but he knew logically he did. All the logic was saying that it wasn't his fault. The only one who was holding him responsible was himself, but he knew he would never hold anybody else responsible. And the more and more he thought about that, the more and more he felt like a weight was finally being removed off of his shoulder, a weight that he was keeping on there that he didn't deserve. As a small smile crept onto Higuruma's face, he was happy to see that Yuji was now returning back to normal, to see that he was able to help just a little bit. Todo and Nanako would enter into the corridors of a building, with Remy following behind them. However, once they entered, they saw that there was already a man standing in front of them, that man being Reggie Star, as he told them that they were duped. As curse energy flared around Todo and he was preparing to fight, with Nanako also taking out her phone at the same time. While Nanako didn't think she could beat Reggie, she was pretty certain that she could beat Remy, but she did have a pretty good amount of faith that Todo was going to be able to handle this guy. However, that was more than a good enough show for Reggie, as he told them that they weren't going to need to fight. After all, he could tell that both of them were more than strong enough in order to join their group. As Reggie told them that they should ally with them. After all, they are strong, and they wanted to know how much they know about the Culling games. Which leads into Todo and Nanako both explaining what they know so far, that it's a ritual that takes advantage of the curse energy belonging to the players inside the barrier, to cause the people of Japan to the other shore, turning them non-human in the process. Though they were very intentionally keeping the fact they knew about Tengen as a secret for now, primarily because they weren't really sure whose side Reggie was on. Which that leads into Reggie explaining what his theory about the purpose of the Culling games was, and the fact that what they just assumed was more than likely a facade from Kenjaku. Either that or that was their secondary or tertiary plan. This is based on 3 points, the first being the number of players, the second being difference in ability of players, and the third being the barrier rule. If approximately 1,000 players were to be distributed evenly among each colony, there would be 100 players per colony. But among the players, there are sorcerers that are exceptionally strong, such as Kashimo and Higuruma. 60 sorcerers have already been called by these two alone. There should be at least one person in each colony that is on a similar level. Which then led to Todo asking the question of how can they be certain that it was sorcerers that were killed and not just ordinary humans? After all, it wasn't like normal people didn't have any points or value in the Culling games, they just were worth 1 point. So for all they knew, these strong sorcerers weren't actually all that strong, and just that each of them had killed a lot of normal humans. Which led to Reggie explaining that while he didn't know much about what Kashimo was doing, he was keeping some eyes on Higuruma. And through that he was able to learn that Higuruma had mainly battled against sorcerers, which had informed Todo of something else, the fact where Reggie completely knew where Higuruma was located, as he internally smirked a little bit, happy that his plan was working so far. With Reggie also adding that if it was normal people that were primarily dying and not sorcerers, then there would be a lot more noticeable noise throughout the barrier, but no, it had primarily been quiet. Which meant the most likely people to be targeted right now were the sorcerers. As things were starting to click in Todo's head, that the actual purpose of the Culling games were to create a deadlock between the strong players. Which Reggie explained that there already had been a deadlock achieved in Tokyo Colony number 1 as well as Tokyo Colony number 2. However, the primary reason that Reggie is certain that they're going after stronger players rather than just having to go for an abundance of players is because of one of the rules, the teleportation rule. Which Reggie figured that the purpose of this rule was in order to stimulate an early secondary awakening in the modern sorcerers, which some have died from this teleportation. If they really want to take advantage of players' curse energy, they'd want as many sorcerers to have long and drawn out battles. The permanence stated in the rules is just a cover to hide their true plan. A plan which will allow Kenjaku to drop a bomb when only the strong players remain. Which led to Todo asking what was the conditions of this alliance between them, since Todo could now tell the purpose of this alliance were to unite strong sorcerers in preparation for this bomb. With Reggie responding that his plan was rather simple. Right now they were going to do one of two things. Either the first thing they were going to do was wait and eventually pick off weak players that were going to join the games in order to take their points, eventually building up for Reggie to have enough points to add in his own rule to the Culling games. to try and make things more advantageous for them as fighters. Either that or try and force Higuruma to add in a rule eventually once they got enough numbers to be confident they could take him on. Once they were going to do that, they were going to force Higuruma to add a rule to allow transference of points between players. Due to the fact that right now they didn't really have a way to add points between the players, and just they had a bunch of players with high amounts of points between them. Or well, high all things considered, since Reggie was the highest one there with a point total of 42. With Toto explaining that things were actually going to work out pretty well for them then, since they had a very similar plan. Right now their other comrade was actually searching for them, one named Yuji Itadori. Right now they were searching for Higuruma in order to force them to add the rules to the Culling games themselves. Reggie was a little bit surprised by that. After all, he wasn't too sure how good this kid would end up doing, though Toto was also pretty strong himself, so maybe if Yuji was just as strong as Toto, they might have a good chance against Higuruma. Which, speak of the devil, the Kogane then appeared and informed all of them that a new rule had been added to the Culling games, one that will allow point transference between players. Reggie's eyes then widened as he realized that Yuji had done it that fast. He might think that there might have been someone else in the Culling game, some random players, but no, it had to be Yuji Itadori. Before Toto then explained that Yuji Itadori was far stronger than even he was. And they already have a pretty massive alliance, so it would be pretty nice if they were to join up with them, plus it would guarantee their safety even further than they already could. However, that will require the compliance for their plan, and for Toto to get their permission to use their points. But in exchange for that, he could offer protection for all of them. With Toto explaining that it would definitely be better to have them on their side, especially considering if they somehow managed to beat Toto and Naniko, which Toto somewhat doubted, if they somehow managed to do that, then that guy was going to come at them with a blood rage and vengeance, telling them that his brother would avenge the both of them. And Reggie thought about that for a couple of moments. Based on this guy's reinforcement, he was honestly unsure if he could beat him. Plus, that other girl with him was still a complete mystery for now, but to also hear there was someone much stronger than the guy he was already uncertain if he could beat, especially with the knowledge that they had managed to beat Higuruma, yeah, Reggie decided that he was going to agree to their terms and conditions, which had prevented quite a lot of blood to be spilled, before Reggie then called Hazunoki to join them. However, while Hazunoki came inside, Reggie's other ally, Hari, did not come inside, which made Reggie and Remy both blink, caught a little bit off guard. Their ally decided not to come with them, as Reggie figured that their ally just decided to run away from them, since they did check to see if they were still alive, and currently they were still alive. Though this did also lead to Toto deciding to ask Reggie another question. Since Reggie was rather knowledgeable, he decided to ask them if they knew where the angel was, or more importantly, which player the angel truly was. After all, if they knew a little bit more about their identity, it might be able to help them. Though Toto did decide to keep secret for now the fact that he did know the angel's name was Hana Kuresu. As Reggie thought about that for a moment before he did explain that he didn't actually know who the angel was. However, he did remember seeing a girl with dove-like wings flying high in the air at some points, which that was going to help for now. As Toto then decided to take out his phone, while he wasn't going to be able to text people outside of the barrier, he might be able to text Yuji still, as he sent Yuji the location for where they could meet up for now. After all, he felt it might be a little bit better to camp things out for a little bit, with Yuji responding that he would be there pretty soon. He wanted to finish talking with Higuruma, and he wanted to spend a little bit longer hunting for the angel. Meanwhile, high up into the air, there was someone who was watching all of these battles happen, that person being the very person they were looking for, the angel, Hana Kuresu. Currently, they were just watching and scouting out things. They weren't sure if they wanted to participate yet, but they did want to at least see who could be around, and Yuji was a rather interesting person due to the fact that they were around the same age. Not to mention, they also had a similar angel aesthetic to them, considering they were wielding blood wings. Still, at least for now, they were going to wait to see how things were going to play out. Then they might end up getting involved. They weren't too sure yet. So for now, they were just going to wait and see. At the same time, at the Zenin clan headquarters, Kenjaku was currently sitting down. Urame was in another room preparing the bath, as Kenjaku had sensed where Yuji had entered. A soft smirk beginning to rise on Kenjaku. After all, he did have cursed spirits all throughout each of the Culling games colonies. But now Kenjaku wanted a real display of what that power that Yuji had access to was now, so he decided he was going to release one of his experiments early, while at the same time having one of the cursed spirits fly off in order to bring Kenjaku a bowl of popcorn. This is going to be quite a show for him, one that he was more than excited to watch through the eyes of one of his curses. 30 years ago, Kenjaku was thinking on how to advance humanity and how to make the ultimate vessel for Ryoma and Sukuna. He had done several experiments such as the death paintings, but he had another idea. The death paintings were always a little bit unstable because they were a lot more natural in the way they were made. So part of him had to wonder if it was possible to implant parts of cursed spirits or the death paintings onto people. Maybe if he could recreate the phenomena that created the death paintings and implant those parts onto people, it would create much more successful hybrids. This led to several test subjects being created, with only some being successful. This would be the building blocks for building the ultimate hybrid to be Ryoma and Sukuna's vessel, that being Yuji Itadori, one that gained the physical strength from Sukuna and the unique blood abilities of the other 9 death paintings, but Yuji was not the only one Kenjaku tried to make a fusion of, with each of those fusions lying in wait for their time to be used in the Culling games. As we now return back to the present day, Yuji was flying around, finishing a call with Aoi Todo, finding out about the brand new allies that they had acquired, which did make Yuji rather happy. Now the next part, which was more difficult, would be finding Hana, the angel. Once he found them, they would just need to convince them, and then they could get them on their side. Though he still ultimately had no idea what they were like as a person, so he was going to need to wait and see on that. However, as Yuji was flying, he noticed something that was rather odd. He entered into a building where in this building he saw what looked like the shadows of several people, but the people themselves weren't there. However, the shadows of people who had fallen over were there. As Yuji wondered for a moment if there was another 10 Shadows user. Kenjaku clearly got people from all across history, so it wouldn't surprise him if there was another 10 Shadows user. And unlike the Six Eyes, there wasn't something special that allowed only one 10 Shadows to exist at a time, or at least he didn't think so. Based on everything that he had heard, there was no reason to assume that. But especially with the knowledge that a 10 Shadows user was able to rival a 6 Eyes Limitless user in the past, this was definitely something to be careful of. He then activated the Kogane, telling the Kogane to show him all the players currently present in Tokyo Colony 1. He wanted to see if there were any players with high amounts of points, as that might be able to tell him who or what he was fighting against. While he was scrolling, he found 2 potential candidates. The first being someone named Jin Manzo, who wielded a total of 54 points. Meanwhile, the second person was Kyoto Hideki, who had 63 points. This did somewhat disappoint Yuji, as that meant both of them had definitely killed civilians, at least 3 in Kyoto's case and at least 4 in Jin's case. Either way, it was something he would have to deal with. Suddenly though, he saw Kyoto's points increase and go from 63 points to 91 points. They had now gained 28 points, which meant they likely got points from another player transferred to them, as Yuji sent Todo a text to ask if any player that was with Reggie had over 25 points. Well, we saw Kyoto's number increase to 96 points. That means they had now killed that sorcerer. That then led into Todo asking Reggie, which made Reggie blink in surprise. This led to Reggie checking with the Kogane in order to confirm his suspicion, with it being confirmed. The sorcerer who had just given away 28 points was a member of their group known as Hari Chizuru. They had 28 points, which matched perfectly with the amount of points that Kyoto had just gained, which meant they gave their points to them and were killed right after. Yuji was now going through his thoughts as well as his plans. He primarily wanted to see what was the most likely possibility. He saw that there were 2 players that had a high point count, with Kyoto in particular being rather close to being able to add a rule into the Culling games. While it was possible, he didn't think it was too likely that Kyoto and Jin were working together. After all, if they were working together, wouldn't one of them have transferred the points to the other by this point, considering they were pretty close to being able to add a rule? And they'd definitely be aware of the fact that Yuji added that rule in for point transfer. After all, Kogane announced it, which in Yuji's mind decreased the likely chance that the 2 of them were actually working together, which meant it was more likely in his mind that the 2 were neutral or the 2 were working against each other. Judging from the amount of bodies here, he believed it was likely that one of those 2 had a darkness-based curse technique. If he had to guess, it was likely Kyoto who had it due to the high amounts of points that they had. Though of course there was also the third possibility and scenario that these bodies had nothing to do with either of the 2 players. This ultimately led Yuji to realizing that he needed to find them and quickly. Especially Kyoto. He needed to find them and force them to use their points. If he could do that, then they could add the other rules in that they wanted to add, which would allow the others to not have to risk themselves that much in the Culling games. Though Yuji then picked up some smoke in the air, as the room began to light up brighter and brighter. The smell of smoke was getting more and more potent, as Yuji hopped backwards, allowing him to avoid a stream of blue flames coming towards him. A thought entered into Yuji's head if this was one of the disaster curses or not, but he was able to tell that it definitely wasn't. This felt more human. However, despite being more human, it also still partially felt like a curse as well, which is weird. However, as Yuji was jumping backwards, 2 hands that were made out of shadow rushed towards him in order to attempt to grab him. The both of them were going right for Yuji's leg. Both of them were trying to grab onto Yuji's leg in order to drag him in. He barely noticed it on time at the corner of his eye, which resulted in Yuji creating a supernova in order to launch himself backwards even faster, barely allowing him to move out of the way from the shadow hands grabbing him. Once Yuji properly landed though, he saw 2 opponents in front of him. The first was a man who looked to be completely made out of shadows with blue eyes. They were humanoid. The second was a man whose body looked to be made out of metal with fire contained within it. Though upon closer look, Yuji realized something else. These 2 weren't human nor curses. They felt like neither. No, that was inaccurate. They felt like both, similar to himself in the other death paintings. Both of them did also notice the same feeling from Yuji, which caused them to completely stop fighting and all of them to stop. As the Shadow Man said, "Interesting. You're like us, aren't you? Were you experimented on by a girl with stitches?" His voice sounded otherworldly, like he was possessed by several spirits at once. Yuji nodded, although he was a little bit surprised by the mention of it being a girl. Though he did know Kenjaku could hop bodies, so them being in a female body at the time did make sense. He then began to ask himself if these guys would also be considered his siblings, since they were experiments from Kenjaku. Should they also be his siblings? He then said, "I'm Yuji Itadori. Are you guys Jin Manzo and Kyoto Hideki?" As he looked between the 2 of them, as he was curious to see which one was which. They both nodded, with the Furnace Man explaining that he was Jin and that the Shadow Man was Kyoto, with Jin then asking, "Speaking of, mind if I ask, are you the guy who forced Higuruma to make a rule? We can tell you're strong." He'd say as he crossed his arms while he walked towards Yuji, resulting in him confirming that he did. Yuji then followed up by asking what they needed those points for. As Kyoto then said, simple, we have 2 rules we wanted to add and we are racing to see who can add it first. One rule we want to add is one that will allow us free passageway between the barriers. And after we're done that, we want to add in another rule that will allow us to track down players with high amounts of points in exchange for points. Though that's merely the first step of our plan. If all goes well, we can have absolute control over this place and basically make it into our own world. And the first rule Yuji was actually kind of okay with. After all, free passageway through the barrier was something they were definitely eventually going to need once they did accomplish all the rules they wanted. Then the second part, and especially the third part of using the Culling games to have absolute control and domination, that was when he had to draw the line. They wanted to become gods in the barriers. That was something Yuji couldn't accept due to the risks that would come from that and all of the people who would need to die for that to happen. Yuji then said, I need your points in order to make a new rule. I want to be able to allow people to exit from the Culling games for a friend. Both of them would have blinked upon hearing that. That was not what they were expecting and they were rather surprised. But this was also against what they wanted to do since they wanted to make the Culling games a world they could dominate. As Jin asked, why would you want that? If we get enough points and make enough rules, we can make that friend be protected and become gods. Jin would say as he leaned closer. It was pretty clear they didn't want to fight Yuji directly. Since he was an experiment of Kenjaku just as they were a bit more willing to accept him. However, hearing that put some doubt in Yuji's mind for a moment as Yuji said, You see how many people are dying, right? How many people need to die to even continue this ritual for your power? How many people need to die for you to get the rules you want? Yuji would say as he looked at the two of them. He also didn't want to enter combat if it wasn't necessary. Maybe, just maybe, they could just talk about this. As Jin responded, yeah, and go back to the world where we have to hide our sorcery instead of a world where we can become gods? Yeah, no. You get to pass because you look like a human. We don't. Like, look at me. I'm a furnace, and my brother here is made out of shadows. It was clear to Yuji what their goal was now. They wanted to make a world of Jujutsu sorcery where they could do what they wanted and were accepted. It honestly did partially remind him of Choso since Choso had a similar goal. However, that also granted Yuji some understanding of where both of them were coming from. You can get the world you want without needing to cause death. I have that world. Please don't make me fight you both. Yuji's final attempt to try and make a peaceful resolution to this. He didn't want to hurt them at all, but the more and more they continued to talk, the more and more it felt inevitable. And that was when Hideki decided he was going to try and de-escalate the situation a little bit. How about this? If you beat us both, we will give you our points. But if we beat you, you are going to have to help us get enough points to add 2 rules. Deal? Hideki would say as he raised an eyebrow while looking at Yuji. He could see they were going to enter a standstill and where fighting was going to be the only option, so he figured this would be the best way to make sure they wouldn't have to kill each other through fighting. Yuji accepted this deal as it was the only way he could be certain they would get the points. Maybe, just maybe, through this fight he could change their minds. This has happened before, so maybe it could happen again, especially with people like this as the marks appeared around his eyes, the marks of flowing red scale stack. Outside of the building that Yuji, Jin, and Kyoto were located, a girl was flying outside. The girl was Hana, the angel. She wanted to see what would happen, but as she was listening, she became more and more curious about Yuji. After all, most Culling game players weren't coming here with a positive goal and intention like Yuji was. Maybe Yuji could be an ally for them that could help them with taking out Sukuna. She was going to let this fight be the test of that. Yuji lifted up both of his hands, as around his arms blood began to flow and surround them, reinforcing those arms and turning them to a dark red color. A glare formed on Yuji as he rushed towards both opponents, curse energy surrounding his fists as well, aiming to get some early damage in close quarters right off the bat. Both Jin and Kyoto were bewildered by that speed. Kyoto just barely on time was able to jump out the way of the blow, while Jin lifted up their arms in a cross formation to block the blow. Once Kyoto took the blow though, he was sent skidding backwards as he groaned a bit. Even with it being a blocked hit, it hurts? What is this kid? Yuji then pulled his fist back as he was preparing to attempt to punch Jin again. However, a moment before he could, 2 hands made out of shadows attempted to reach and push Yuji back. Yuji was able to avoid this attack by jumping backwards as out from his sleeves, he launched 2 supernovas. One onto each of the shadow hands to have them explode and cover them with blood. However, once Yuji landed, he saw several of the shadows of the bodies begin to shift in shape, to launch several more fists made out of shadows towards him. Kyoto was going for an omnidirectional attack to make it much harder for Yuji to dodge, but Yuji was not out of options as he clapped his hands together and fired a piercing blood at the ceiling and jumped out, narrowly avoiding the shadow hands in the process. Then Yuji began to smell ash, and out from the corner of his eyes he saw a large wave of blue flame coming right towards him, melting through several of the walls while it was coming towards him. Yuji then jumped out from the building as his wings flapped to keep him in the air. Flames then began to center around Jin's fist, coating them completely in the blue flame, as he lifted up both of his hands in the air and began to release a rapid barrage of blue fireballs, each the same size as Jin's body, to send them rocketing towards Yuji. Kyoto also took this chance to sink into one of the shadows and prepare their next move. Yuji blinked a little bit in surprise from this attack. Right now, Jin had only been using streams of fire, so he wasn't expecting him to be able to launch out fire blasts like this. As he then opened up both of his hands, causing 2 blades made out of blood to rise out, 2 blood edges. Yuji started to fly around the large bursts of fire, dodging a majority of them and using the blood edges to cut through one of the larger fire blasts that were coming towards him. Even though he had managed to cut through it, he felt the small burns from the heat of this attack. While Yuji was dodging, he was pumping more and more blood into the blood edges in order to make them bigger and bigger. He was doing this until both of the blood edges reached a size even bigger than his own body, as he then threw both of them into the air and punched them with curse energy surrounding his fist, sending them rocketing towards Jin like a railgun. Jin sensed the blood edges coming towards him, so he focused both of his hands to the ground and fired a large burst of flames underneath himself to launch himself through the ceiling. Jin's eyes locked onto Yuji as he said, "Even when trying to hold back and not go to kill, you're a lethal fighter. Not bad, but it's going to take a lot more than that to beat someone like me." Yuji wouldn't have responded. Unlike Jin, he wasn't enjoying the fight that much, at least not right now, as Yuji's wings then grew in size for a moment before he flapped them, releasing a large cascade of hardened blood arrows towards Jin's direction as the wings grew back to their original size. A smirk rose onto Jin as his body began to glow brighter and brighter. He was generating more heat, but he wasn't preparing to counter the blood arrows coming towards him. Instead, he was preparing to use a large burst of fire that would be even stronger. This did confuse Yuji though at why he wasn't trying to counter that until he heard the noise of the ground breaking and cracking. Out from the ground, a large dragon made out of shadows rose out and shielded Jin from the arrows. The dragon was a Shikigami with Kyoto riding on top of it as he said, "Apologies for making us to hold out for so long. I had to charge this up. Allow me to tag in for a bit, brother," he'd say as he looked towards Yuji with his arms crossed. Yuji thought to himself, so Jin is able to make fire attacks while Kyoto is able to make creatures out of shadows, similar to Fushiguro, but it seems he can only do it purely out of shadows. As he saw the dragon coming towards him, where most would likely try and move out the way, Yuji flew right on its path before doing a quick dive to fly underneath the dragon. Right as Yuji was about to clap his hands to fire piercing blood, out from the Shadow Dragon's underbelly, several hands made out of shadows rushed towards Yuji's direction, each of them intended to try and grab him or land a blow on him, forcing Yuji to have to focus on dodging with the initial one getting rather close, making Yuji have to deflect it rather than dodge it. Kyoto then placed a hand onto the Shadow Dragon, causing his form to shift and go through the Shadow Dragon, before he then rose out through one of the shadow hands that Kyoto had made in order to try and grab Yuji, while focusing curse energy towards his fist and punching Yuji hard in the face. However, to Kyoto's surprise, Yuji wasn't sent flying backwards from that strike. He actually wasn't sent backwards at all, as Yuji felt the pain from it on his cheek. He had to admit, in terms of reinforcement, Kyoto wasn't half bad. Yuji then grabbed Kyoto's fist and pulled him into a hard punch right on Kyoto's gut. This punch sent a ripple not just through Kyoto, but through the Shadow Dragon itself, causing the Shadow Dragon to shake as Kyoto and the Shadow Dragon were launched backwards. Yuji realized he missed something upon continuing his analysis. Yuji then rushed towards Kyoto, preparing to continue his barrage of blows on him. However, right before Yuji could reach him, Kyoto's body vanished and shrunk back into the Shadow Dragon. As the Shadow Dragon began to shrink in size, Kyoto then rose out on the top of the Shadow Dragon's head as he kept the Shadow Dragon a pretty big distance away from Yuji. Kyoto thought to himself, "Alright, don't go for big things against Yuji, change of plans." But then both Yuji and Kyoto suddenly felt a heat increase as they looked over to Jin. Kyoto took this chance to tag out as he said, "Good luck," before flying over to one of the shadows and going inside of it. Once they looked over to Jin, they would see that Jin's entire body was glowing blue, with a blue sphere of flames growing around their body. As Jin then clapped his hands together and focused the flames towards his hands, before releasing a massive cascade of flames sent right towards Yuji's direction. And Yuji thought about dodging it for a second, but he had a different plan in mind. As out from his back, an additional pair of blood wings began to grow. He now had a total of 6 blood wings. What he had planned was definitely going to hurt, but at the same time he knew it would definitely work. As Jin, Kyoto, and even Hana, who was pretty far in the distance, were all able to hear the sudden increase of a heartbeat. It sounded like a drum echoing throughout the area, as Yuji flew full speed right into the massive fireball, using his RCT to heal the burns he was flying through. With the additional pair of wings that he had added, he had been able to increase his speed even further, as Jin was realizing just how insane Yuji was. But there was no way that Jin was just going to back down that easy either, as he pushed his flames to the maximum, pushing it to its max limits. But even with him increasing the heat, it wasn't enough, as Yuji flew right through the flames, appearing in front of Jin's face, steam coming off of his body as a result of Yuji using reverse curse technique. But now that he was right in front of Jin, Jin could hear that heartbeat. It was terrifying to hear it up close, as Yuji landed an overhead punch, sending Jin rocketing towards the ground, using the flowing red scale burst in the process. The blow knocked Jin out cold, as well as caused quite a big crater to rise in the ground. Hana's eyes widened from that blow. She wasn't expecting someone to have this much physical strength. Kyoto was also caught completely off guard. Of course he knew by this point that Yuji was strong, but this was something completely different. Kyoto knew that if he wanted to win, he was going to need to play this smart. Letting Yuji get close to him was a death sentence. However, from what he could tell so far, if he were to keep his range, he should be able to at least somewhat manage Yuji. However, going for that Shadow Dragon he had created earlier was definitely not the right move. As curse energy began to bubble off of Kyoto, he was focusing all of his negative emotions and worry into getting more curse energy. As out from Kyoto's body, tens of shadow hands began to erupt, each of them flying towards Yuji and each of them growing to be the same size as Yuji's body. And with Yuji's new 6 wings he had created, he was able to fly around each of them with relative ease. Yuji was primarily focusing on sensing curse energy to see which one was coming at him, as some of his were trying to go for Yuji from behind, but Yuji had to cover himself using curse energy to sense. But even with this massive number of arms, Yuji was still able to avoid most of them. However, one of them was able to land a punch on his side, and that punch did do minimal damage. However, another one was very quick to follow the first one. He was trying to do death by 1,000 cuts. Furthermore, with all of these arms around, it made it much harder for Yuji to be able to find a way to penetrate through this fortress, as Yuji flapped all 6 of his wings, using it to launch himself high into the air. Flowing red scale burst was definitely not going to be an option against him, as he then had an idea, remembering one of Choso's tactics, before Yuji began to make a large amount of blood, sending it all down towards the hands. And the hands were able to swipe away most of it. The ones that were covered in blood were quickly replaced with normal ones, as they all continued to rocket right towards Yuji. However, as Yuji was dodging, he was now dodging a little bit more sloppily, because he had to focus on 2 tasks at once. On one side he was focused on making sure the blood was going to reach Kyoto, and the other side he was focused on controlling the wings in order to dodge. However, if it was just pain, it wasn't going to stop Yuji Itadori, as several of the blows were able to land on him, but it didn't stop him, as the blood eventually sneaked its way around and found Kyoto, when several shadow hands were repeatedly landing blow after blow on Yuji, until suddenly they were all brought to a halt, as the blood landed repeated blows on Kyoto's body while at the same time beginning to suffocate him. And through the combination of both of these maneuvers, he was able to knock Kyoto out, catching him before he landed on and bringing himself as well as Kyoto over to Jin. He was going to just stay by them and wait for them to recover. He was contemplating if he should bring them over to the camp, but he didn't think he should right now. He didn't know what state they were going to be in when they woke up, and he didn't know if they were going to keep their word. So until he was more certain, he was going to stay with them and stay with them alone for now. However, as he was waiting, suddenly somebody landed in front of them, and they told him that they were the angel and that they wanted to talk with him. And seeing that this was the angel caught Yuji completely off guard, but at the same time, since the angel had willingly revealed themselves, he decided he might as well. However, the angel did tell him they knew a bit more of a comfortable place for them to talk and for them to follow her. Yuji, Itadori, and Hana Karesu would enter into an abandoned hotel room, with Yuji placing the knocked out Jin and Kyoto in beds respectively in order for them to rest for now. He needed to talk with them after, but for now that could wait. After all, they still had to recover from the battle that had just happened against Yuji. He then walked out the room and walked back over to Hana, asking her, "What did you want to talk to me about?" while he took a seat down at the couch. Yuji admittedly was still caught off guard by the fact that the angel was the same age as him, something he could tell right off the bat. At the same time, he had seen more surprising things by this point, so he was already kinda used to this. Now he did want to know why she was in the Culling games and what her plan was, and most importantly, why did she go out of her way to talk to him? With Hana responding, "Before I do answer your questions, I have a couple questions of my own that I want you to answer, and after that I promise I will answer any question that you have." Yuji nodded in agreement. After all, he did want Hana and the angel to be his allies, so he wanted to make sure he was as hospitable as possible. "That's good. My first question is, were you the one to defeat Higuruma Hiromi and force him to include that rule in the games?" Yuji simply nodded at that question as he said, "Yes, I was the one to defeat Higuruma and force him to include that rule so people could transfer points without having to kill each other." Which made a soft stare come out from Hana, or at least what looked like Hana, until they saw a mouth appear on Hana's cheek. And Yuji in that moment realized that Hana was just like him. As the mouth then said, "Why did you add in that rule? It's rather rare to see actual good people as strong sorcerers, and from what I can tell you are somewhat of a good person, so I want to know why." And Yuji explained, "My goal is rather simple. I want to prevent as much death as possible. And the best way to do that was to allow universal point sharing, because now we can transfer our points between others and prevent as much death as possible. As long as some people have points, technical removal won't come, which will prevent quite a bit of people from dying. At least according to my friend Toto and Megami's guesses." And while the name Toto didn't get any reaction from either of them, the name Megami got an immediate reaction from the girl, as Hana herself asked, "Megami? What is his last name if you mind me asking?" With Yuji responding, "Oh, Fushiguro." And that made Hana have an immediate realization that Yuji was friends with Megami Fushiguro, the same boy that she had met so long ago, resulting in her asking quite hastily if Megami was here. Yuji shook his head no, however he did explain that he was on his way pretty soon. Hana took a proper moment to recollect herself, after all she felt quite embarrassed by that. However, both of them heard a voice say, "Seems like somebody here has a crush." That person was Kyoto, the Shadow Man. It seems that he had recovered enough to at least properly get up. before he then summoned the Kogane and transferred over 91 points over to Yuji. He wanted to keep 5 additional points just to make sure that the curse sneak removal rule wouldn't get to him. Yuji was thankful that Kyoto did hold up his end of the deal, and it did confirm that they were likely going to be on their side, or at least weren't going to get in the way of things. This then led to them continuing on the conversation, with the angel asking Yuji why were they looking for her. Yuji in turn explained that they needed access to the angel's curse technique to be able to extinguish curse techniques. They needed their help to assist their friend Satoru Gojo, who was recently trapped in the prison realm, with Yuji also mentioning that they would be a very, very good ally for whatever their goal was. Upon hearing that, they were more inclined to agree, especially considering that if Yuji was considering someone a strong ally considering what she saw Yuji do, then they definitely were going to be worthy. This did cause Kyoto's eyes to widen as he recognized that name instantly. Satoru Gojo, the strongest of the modern era, the one that was responsible for cursed spirits becoming as strong as they were today. Every single cursed spirit, sorcerer, and curse user had heard of him. Despite how much Kyoto kept to himself, even he had heard of Satoru Gojo. So hearing that Yuji was allies with Satoru Gojo suddenly made a lot of things make more sense for why Yuji was as strong as he was. And once the angel heard Yuji's goal, Angel decided she was going to make a deal with him. Originally, the angel had come here to separate all of the reincarnated players, due to the fact that all of the reincarnated players were subconsciously submerging everybody's souls here, forcefully taking over their bodies. Some of them were unintentional and some of them were very intentional, but either way they deserved their lives back. Though the angel wasn't going to ask Yuji to help them separate every single life, but one in particular. However, the angel did explain that there was a small chance that the vessels would be able to survive once separated, though it would be rather rare. However, once Yuji heard that, it did make a thought enter into his head, a realization of something. All 9 of his brothers had taken over the lives of somebody else. He hadn't really thought about it before until now, mainly because he didn't think it was possible to be reversed, but with the angel's existence, it was possible. However, he was thinking about that now. There was a pretty high likely chance that if his brothers were separated from those people, they would likely die, but at the same time, those people deserve their lives back. Now, he knew it wasn't his brother's fault. It was Mahito's fault as Mahito had forced it upon those people, but at the same time, it was rather difficult for him. Maybe if Yuji did enough research on the soul, he might be able to figure out a way to separate them, though he honestly wasn't too sure. He needed to find a way around this. He didn't want to have to kill his brothers after all. But at the same time, he couldn't help but feel that those people also deserved their lives back. But until he figured out a way, unfortunately, they were going to have to wait. However, he was interrupted as the angel continued. The angel saying, "I will help you free Gojo on one condition. I need you to help me execute the Fallen. A Culling Games player who is going to be an issue for everybody considering how powerful he was in the past, and he's definitely reincarnated in this era." However, a moment before they could continue their conversation, Yuji was brought into another realm, or at least mentally was brought into another realm, but one that was all too familiar to him, Ryomen Sukuna's innate world. As he saw Ryomen Sukuna currently sitting upon his bone throne. Before he then said, "I'll keep things brief. I am the Fallen." Before he then released Yuji from the innate world, not letting Yuji ask any questions about what he got that title from or how, just giving him that piece of information. And Yuji considered just for a moment if he should tell Hana this or not, if he should tell the angel this or not, but he ultimately decided not to. Mainly because he didn't want to jump the gun with Sukuna's execution yet. Sukuna still had 5 fingers somewhere out there, so he wanted to find those first. Yuji was more than resolved enough to take his own life to make sure Sukuna wouldn't be able to rise again, so he was more than fine with that deal. This is when Jin got up from his bed and joined them in the room as well, sending over all but 5 of his points over to Yuji Itadori for the same reason Kyoto did, with both Jin and Kyoto agreeing that they were going to help out Yuji, at least for now, which did cause all of them to smile for a bit, as they all had quite a good group of allies with them. Now they just had to meet up with the other group. Though this has put a small issue in Yuji's head, after all he did know that Reggie's group was reincarnated sorcerers, or at least he knew the leader Reggie Star was. He didn't really know much about the other members of that group, though that might cause some conflict of interest to rise with Hana. However, they were pretty certain, at least for now, that they would work as allies, or at least he was hoping that. If they weren't, then he would have to deal with that when they came to that issue. But then to all 4 of their surprise, they suddenly heard what sounded like a knock on the door. And once they sensed the curse energy, it felt potent, incredibly powerful. Yuji activated Flowing Red skill stack. Jin, Kyoto, and Hana were all on guard for combat. They didn't know what this monster, this demon was, but it was something far more powerful than any of them had ever sensed in the past. Or at least, it was for a moment, until it went back down to a normal curse energy level, as they all couldn't help but wonder what was that curse energy. But seeing it go back to normal levels like that made them even more terrified. Before they then heard a voice say, "Your pizza's here," and that voice seemed to lack all hostility, which made all 4 of them blink in confusion as they looked towards each other. And while the curse energy was certainly strong, there was no bloodlust or feeling of bloodlust that came from it beforehand when it was that powerful. This must have been some Heian-era sorcerer's type of humor. "I know people are in there, so I don't want your pizza to get cold." Before they then suddenly saw the door unlock as a man walked in, the comedian, Takaba Fumiko. However, he wasn't carrying a box of pizza, as he walked over to Jin, put his hand into Jin's chest, and took it out, showing a tray of pizza. putting it down on the kitchen table. As Jin looked down to his chest before looking to that pizza, looking down to his chest again. What in the hell just what? What? Jin looked genuinely traumatized right now, as now way too many questions were going through his head. How was there a pizza inside of him? How did he pull that out? How did he not notice there was a pizza? What was this man? Yuji, Hana, and Kyoto were all on guard now, but at the same time they were just confused, though two of them were able to figure this out rather fast. The first being Ryoma and Sukuna, and the second being the Angel, though they were both rather confused, as Sukuna thought to himself, never in my 1,000 years of life would I expect to see something like this. As Takaba then said, I want to join up with you guys too, by the way. I can tell you guys are good people, and I can kinda hear your conversation. This left all four of them even more confused. Why would this man want to join up with them? Though at the same time, they were a little bit more willing to let them join with them after seeing what he had just done. Primarily because they would much rather have that as an ally than as an enemy. So all four of them shared a look with each other before nodding, as Yuji said, welcome to the group. Though Jin still seemed rather traumatized, so Yuji went over to him and tried to comfort him a little bit. At the same time, Kyoto went into one of the rooms and pulled out a bathrobe, throwing it into Takaba and telling him to put it on. Primarily because Takaba's other half of his suit was just not there and completely missing, so didn't want to flash people. But now things seem to be going well in the Tokyo colony. So, let's go over to the Sendai colony. The situation inside the Sendai colony was a lot more chaotic, as they had already reached a four-way deadlock and a peak of curse energy. Four primary players that were in the barrier of Sendai ruling it. With no alliances, the four sides eventually reached a deadlock. This was a result of every single one of their abilities countering one another, leading to them being forced to coexist with another, not one of them making a move in order to change the deadlock. Druvlak a Shinigami wielder with two types of Shinigami, each of them rather massive and having their own sure hit type of abilities, a man capable of controlling the archipelago during the Civil War of Wa. Ryu Ishigori, a man who boasts the highest curse energy output among the Culling game players, wielding the ability to shoot curse energy like a cannon, resulting in him having the title the Living Cannon. Uro Takako, the former captain of the Sun, Moon, and Stars Squad, a woman who wielded the curse technique that allowed her to manipulate the skies itself. And finally, Kotake Rina, a modified cursed spirit human hybrid created by Kenjaku, and while older than Yuji Itadori, they were younger than Jin and Kyoto. They were made using the cursed spirit of the sea before Kenjaku executed it in order for Dagon to spawn. Her curse technique allowed her to create large amounts of water, and through curse energy manipulation she was able to control that water. While her face did appear to be human, most of her body wasn't. She had gills on her neck as well as her arms and legs both being blue. But still, ultimately a four-way deadlock had spawned between the four opponents. However, that four-way deadlock was going to be interrupted. Yuta Akotsu, the second strongest sorcerer behind Satoru Gojo, had now executed Druv. And all three players immediately noticed the disruption in the deadlock. And they knew where Yuta was located. Yuta right now was escorting a bunch of people into an arena, a bunch of normal civilians who didn't have combat capabilities. Yuta had so far gained a total of 40 points, executing a total of 8 sorcerers. So of course the players were more than aware of Yuta entering, but now with Yuta actually executing Druv, they were considering Yuta much more of a threat. Kotake decided that she was going to test out Yuta. She wanted to see what he was capable of because she didn't see that much of him fighting. All she could really tell was that he had high amounts of curse energy reserves. Though more importantly, she also wanted to know why he was going out of his way to save this many people, considering how many points he could easily get if he killed them. Now she wasn't going to try and kill them mainly because she didn't want the points that badly, but at the same time she was curious. She then placed down an orb that had several carvings into it, one that was made out of wood that she used as a spirit medium to make Shikigami, before water focused into it and began to take shape, making a Shikigami completely out of water with the core as its center. And while it was based in humanoid structure, it didn't have legs. Instead, its legs looked like there was a whirlpool of water, as it then sent it towards Yuta's direction. This was also likely going to give Uro and Ryu an advantage as well, but she knew they weren't likely going to go out of their way to test it, at least right now. Plus, they were already aware of this being one of her abilities, so she wasn't really sacrificing that much. But she was hoping to be able to push Yuta to use some stronger abilities. After all, Yuta never directly fought Druv's Shikigami, instead they immediately went right for the user. So this would definitely be a much better test of Yuta's capabilities. While Yuta Akotsu was bringing in another group to the stadium, suddenly the water Shikigami landed right in front of the group. Due to the immense weight of the water Shikigami, it did end up shattering parts of the ground. Yuta looked towards the Shikigami and unsheathed his blade, telling all of them to head towards that stadium. He wasn't going to be able to join them immediately, but he would be able to join up with them soon. And as Yuta unsheathed the blade, the water Shikigami began to speak. as they asked Yuta why he was choosing to help them. Why are you trying to help and save these civilians when you could very easily kill them for points? What is the reason he joined the Culling games, and why is he going out of his way to save these people? This led to Yuta explain that he refused to cause meaningless death in order to achieve his goal, and every single one of those civilians dying would be a meaningless death. Yuta Akotsu's goal was rather simple: achieve 400 points completely on his own and then eliminate Kenjaku so Satoru Gojo wouldn't have to kill his best friend again. Though the Water Shikigami then said, "You know you're going to need to kill people to get points. Do you deem the death of these sorcerers as necessary? Or is it that you're just hoping that somebody's going to go out of their way to murder someone and then you're going to see those deaths as necessary?" Yuta couldn't make his plan clear, but he was hoping that he didn't have to kill them either. He was hoping that one of them could introduce a rule, or that maybe he could introduce a rule that would allow point transfer. So he pretended to be silent and not have a response. The Water Shikigami could see they weren't going to be able to get any more conversation from Yuta, so they decided they might as well end this conversation and go on the offense. Yuta was a bit curious how they were going to fight. After all, they had a very similar curse ending to Yuji, where Yuji was able to manipulate blood, this one was able to manipulate water. Plus he had seen the recordings of how Dagon fought as well back in Shibuya, so he felt like he was a little bit experienced and prepared to deal with this, especially after his battle against Yuji recently. Though he wasn't too sure how effective physical attacks were going to be. After all, this thing seemed to be completely made out of water. But he didn't want to reveal more than necessary, at least right now. Yuta did have one idea on how to disrupt the control, but that was the last resort. It would reveal he both had the ability to use reverse curse technique and the ability to output the reverse curse technique, so that was going to be put in the back of his mind for now, but a last case scenario in case he needed it. So Yuta took the offense, taking out his blade and attempting to rush towards them. He felt like they had to have some weakness. They likely weren't just completely made out of water, but he just needed to figure out what it was. The Water Shikigami then lifted up both of their hands and immediately began to rapid fire a large barrage of water towards them, compressed water moving rather fast. Upon seeing those bursts of water, Yuta immediately began to jump backwards and try and avoid each of them. He was successfully avoiding multiple of them until one of them got rather close to him and he sliced it in half with his katana. And while that slice did end up stopping the momentum, the water very quickly attached to his arm, and it started to compress rather hard on his arm, forcing Yuta to get hit by another burst of water and another. The water was now clinging to different parts of Yuta's body, making him go slower while forcing him to take the brunt of the damage, before the water began to coil around Yuta, holding him into the ground. Even after the water was far away from the Shikigami's body, they were still able to control it. And this led to the Shikigami then clapping both of their hands together and firing a large wave of water right towards Yuta's direction, using the water already around Yuta's body to force him to take the blow. This blow did release Yuta from the water's grip, but at the same time it sent him rocketing through one of the buildings, as he walked out from the wall that had just broken, dusting himself off in the process, and while that did hurt, it wasn't truly lethal damage. Still, this was most definitely a dangerous curse technique. However, as Yuta looked back to the Shikigami, he could see all of the water that the Shikigami fires go back towards its body, infusing back into it. This told Yuta something. The Shikigami likely couldn't control water all around them, and instead had a bunch of water infused into them and needed to use that as attacks. At first, Yuta was wondering if it was possible for him to just wear down the Shikigami by dodging enough of its attacks, but he didn't think that was likely. More than likely, it would send the water back towards itself when it was starting to run low. But he did feel that it would more than likely reveal one of its own weaknesses if it had fired enough attacks. After all, it did need to use parts of its own body, which meant that less and less water was being attached to it to cover whatever their likely core was. Yuta Akotsu could see it now, the path to victory. He was rather quick and tactical minded. But at the same time, while a plan was a plan, it was going to be much harder to put that plan into action. So the only way that he could really see if it would work was to try it out. Curse energy then erupted off of Yuta's body as he rushed towards the Water Shikigami, beginning his offense once more and going for a straight line type of offense. The Water Shikigami decided to swap tactics, as it began to change the shape of its arms, making it more like tentacles, as they launched the tentacles towards Yuta, attempting to slam them into him. However, Yuta was able to dodge each of them. The Shikigami then sent its arms back towards itself, as out from its chest several of those same water bursts from before began to launch at Yuta, creating an even wider bullet hell, making it much harder for Yuta to dodge. But Yuta knew now that he had to primarily dodge them. Trying to defend against them was meaningless. So as he was dodging, he was using the buildings to his advantage, jumping off from each of the buildings and now starting to run around the Shikigami. Each of the water bursts that were fired were strong enough to go through some of the walls, as well as break some of the windows, and while it was getting rather close to Yuta, he was still able to dodge it. However, as Yuta was dodging, he finally saw it, the opening that he had been looking for. He could see the core in his chest just for a brief moment before water began to fly back towards the Shikigami in order for it to repair itself. And seeing that water was beginning to fly back towards the Shikigami, now was his chance, as he jumped off the building and rushed down towards that core. The Shikigami focused a large amount of water into its arms, as it then attempted to punch Yuta out of the way. However, Yuta at the last moment threw his sword, pulling it at full force and full throttle right towards the Shikigami's core, though he was definitely forced to take the blow as he was launched away. But as the sword was sent flying towards the Shikigami's core, the Shikigami moved the core slightly out the way, resulting in the core dodging the blow of the sword, showing Yuta that that was definitely the right move. But at the same time, now the Shikigami had the sword within its body. Yuta then focused a massive amount of curse energy right towards his arm, so massive that Uro, Ryo, and Kotoke couldn't help but notice that size, and had to admit they were impressed. As Yuta then punched the ground, causing a large amount of it to crack and shatter, and several amounts of rubble to fly up in the way of the Shikigami's face. Though that core also did reveal something to Yuta as he rushed towards the Shikigami, going at full throttle and full speed, as he moved his hand into the water and released a large amount of RCT as a burst, resulting in the core falling to the ground as well as the water all around the Shikigami, losing complete control over the water. The water was not a creation of the Shikigami, but rather the Shikigami's core manipulating the water around it. Due to that, if he used a large amount of RCT, he'd be able to neutralize the curse energy that was manipulating it. However, doing that certainly took its toll, and it gave all three of them quite a bit of information on Yuta that he was capable of using reverse curse technique, as Yuta then picked up his blade and stabbed it right into the Shikigami's core, eliminating it in one blow. In truth, he saw that as the more optimal option. He wasn't sure if he'd be able to actually stab it into the core with it showing the ability to move its core around. So this was going to be the more optimal path, and he was certain that he was going to need to use RCT eventually, so he might as well get that done now. But seeing that reveal, he suddenly got a whisper in his voice. "You're capable of using reverse curse technique," as he was hit head-on by a Fin icebreaker right to the chest. Uro Takako had now joined the battle. The four-way Sendai clash will now begin. Uro would slowly begin to get up from the building that he was just launched into. Uro had used Sky Manipulation Fin Icebreaker on Yuta while he was caught off guard, as Yuta asked himself what was that attack. However, Yuta didn't have much moment to focus or think about that, as Uro appeared right in front of him and punched him in the head. But right as Yuta was going for a punch on her side, Uro used the sky to redirect away his punch, making him unable to hit her. As Yuta looked towards his own arm, realizing it had been deformed, but he realized a little bit too late, as Uro elbowed him straight in the face, using Fin Icebreaker in that elbow, sending Yuta flying backwards and reforming his body back to normal. As Yuta Kotu thought to himself, "My arm is back to normal. There's nothing weird about it. It doesn't seem to hurt either. Is this the same person who had that water ability from earlier? No, I doubt it. I think they're separate people. She has a technique that allows her to manipulate space, though she can't directly harm people with it, or at least I don't think so, though she did have that really strong move from earlier." Uro then explained, "My technique is known as sky manipulation. It allows me to turn the sky into a surface like this," as she yanked down on the sky, pulling it down almost like it was a curtain. And while Yuta was beginning to start to analyze her curse technique, Uro told him to hurry up and attack her already. Kosuke was listening as well. She was rather curious to see what she could learn. However, Yuta responded by saying, "Let me ask you a question first. You wouldn't complain if you got killed, right? I understand why the powerless would risk their lives to join in a fight, but someone strong like you should be able to get points whatever you want. So why would you actively involve yourself in a fight like this one?" This resulted in a look of anger beginning to fill Uro's face. "What, you modern sorcerers think incarnating is so easy? To us, it's like coming back from hell. The Culling games is merely the first step in our second chance at life, but since Kenjaku is the one running the games, it's best to get as many points as possible for whatever may happen." However, even that confused and perplexed Yuta, as he asked her if she had any friends or a lover. The reason was because he couldn't understand somebody going this far just for themselves. Yuta just couldn't understand Uro, as he said, "Just because you have regrets after hundreds or thousands of years, you still won't hesitate to kill people." This ticked Uro off to an unbelievable extent, as she put in the question of if he was a Fujiwara. Though this did also answer Kosuke's question of why Yuta was doing this. She wasn't sure who Yuta's friends were, but at the same time she could tell that Yuta was trying to save them, that he was trying to help them. However, her thoughts were interrupted as all three of them sensed a granite blast being fired right towards them, a massive beam of curse energy rocketing towards them. Uro was quick to react by manipulating the sky to shield herself. However, Yuta Kotsu was not so lucky, as the building, as well as the building behind them, was completely shattered, with Yuta Kotsu stuck standing in the middle, being forced to take that attack. Seeing Ishigori stand in front of them, Yuta Kotsu immediately decided that his target would be Ryu first. After all, with that level of power in that attack range, no matter what happened, if any stray beams went anywhere close to the arena, it would cause casualties. However, Uro had to plan things out a little bit more. Kosuke was the perfect counter to her with her water abilities. It allowed her to have a massive range of abilities that could attack from multiple angles at once, the worst counter to her capabilities. Though at the same time, she had a better idea. She had a feeling that if she went to directly fight against Ryu, Kotake would come out in order to fight her and take advantage of that chance. And she was near certain that Ryu at least would be a better counter for them, and she had a pretty good chance against them. Worst case scenario, she would just have to fly away. Yuta began his rush right towards Ryu as Ryu fired several blasts of curse energy, each of them rocketing towards Yuta. Yuta used one of the railways in order to spin out the way and dodge the first one, until a couple more got close to him and appeared to hit him. And when Ryu was looking at the rubble of the street, he couldn't see Yuta. This made a bit of confusion enter onto his face before he realized there was a hole that Yuta entered into. However, he didn't have much time to focus on that. As in this instance, Kotake took out a bow, firing out several arrows completely made out of water towards both Uro and Ryu. Ryu lifted up his hand, firing out several bursts of curse energy in order to counter it, each one landing and clashing against one of the arrows. But the curse energy from the blast was more than hot enough to be able to evaporate each of the water. Uro wasn't as lucky as she began to manipulate the sky, trying to send the arrows away, particularly to Ryu's direction. And while some of them did begin to rocket towards Ryu, two of them were manipulated by Kotake to go back towards Uro, forcing Uro to have to focus on redirection for now. And as Ryu fired more blasts to counter the ones that Uro redirected towards him, Yuta came out to the surface and landed a punch on Ryu's side. However, despite the fact that Yuta had landed a clean fight, Ryu didn't actually look to be that hurt. Instead, he had a smile rise on his face. He requested Yuta to stay this close to him in this fight. He wanted a short-range fight. And when Yuta looked at Ryu with a face of confusion, Ryu began to explain why he wanted this. As Ryu said, "In my first life, I always ate in moderation. I fought staunch new. I've met good women. To be honest, if someone had asked me if I had my regrets, I might have said no. To have this kind of vague hunger is a nuisance, Akotsu. Everyone looked at me with what's there for you to be unsatisfied with written on their faces, like this cigarette. After smoking it for a while, there's a touch of sweetness to it, but in my entire life, there was no dessert." Before Ryu closed distance and him and Yuta began to exchange blows. And despite Yuta blocking the first blow with his arm, he could feel how hard that punch was. Yuta then moved to block one of Ryu's blows while at the same time going for a palm strike on Ryu's gut. However, Ryu was able to redirect that blow. As Yuta thought to himself, he's got high offensive power and explosive cursed energy. His reactions are fast. If I don't keep my guard up, even I will get hurt by his blows. His blows are stronger than Yuji's was. On the other side of the battlefield, Kotsuke was currently focused on Uro. However, seeing that Ryu and Yuta were now fighting against each other, she thought that now was her chance. So she took out another one of those orbs and created another Shikigami made out of water, sending it off to go fight against Uro while she was going to go join in the battle against Ryu and Yuta. As Yuta and Ryu rushed towards each other, Yuta aiming to do a punch, but Ryu redirected that punch and was now behind Yuta. Curse energy focused around Ryu's hand before he landed a hard punch right on Yuta's back, sending him flying. However, while Yuta was midair, suddenly both Yuta and Ryu were hit by a large water arrow each, sending the two of them rocketing away from each other. As Ryu looked to the direction, seeing where the water arrow came from, seeing Kotake standing there with several more water arrows prepared. And as she prepared to draw back her bow and arrow, suddenly she saw several volleys of curse energy rapidly launched towards her. Tens of blasts at once, causing her to lose focus on the water arrows she was firing and begin to jump backwards, avoiding each of the curse energy blasts that were causing small craters to form in the ground. But while she was jumping, Yuta took advantage of this chance, rushing behind her and punching her hard in the back, causing Kotake to cough up a little bit of blood, but she was quick to rearrange herself as she quickly turned around and landed a hard kick on Yuta's face, though that blow did succeed in forcing her to drop her bow. Though when she did land that kick, she only slightly managed to move Yuta's face, as she realized just how much curse energy this guy had. This led to Yuta taking the offensive, attempting to go for a punch on her chest, but she was quick to deflect it and redirect it, using that chance to land a palm strike on Yuta's gut. And when the palm strike did hit him, Yuta was quick to grab onto her hand and use it to pull her into a headbutt to the face, causing Kotsuke to take even greater damage, but Yuta wasn't done yet, as he continued his onslaught towards her, releasing a rapid flurry of blows as Kotsuke began to focus, manipulating several streaks of water in order to defend herself from the blows, using the water to redirect the blows away from her, but even with the water blocking it, those blows definitely had hard impacts, causing quite a bit of splashes. However, while Kotsuke was deflecting, Yuta began to try and talk with her. As Yuta asked, "Are you a modern era sorcerer or are you from the past? I can't really tell." And that one did catch Kotsuke a little bit off guard, as she jumped backwards, having the water follow behind her before she said, "I'm from the modern era, but what does that really matter?" Before she then focused the water around her fists, using it in order to amplify her physical power as she rushed towards Yuta. "We're all just enemies anyways, and you're right now just the one getting in my way." Before Yuta, Kotsu, and her own fists clash, causing a shockwave to echo through the building, but at the same time her water to be overpowered as Kotsuke was launched backwards a bit. However, while Kotsuke was being launched backwards, she took the chance to pick up her bow. She could tell right now that if she were to continue being in hand-to-hand clashes with Yuta, she was going to lose this battle. And as Kotsuke was preparing to fire out another arrow while Yuta was preparing to continue on the frontward assault, suddenly the both of them heard something. The sound of curse energy charging, as the both of them looked and saw someone jump towards them, Ryu Ishigori. However, mid-jump, Ryu suddenly fired off a massive granite blast. Yuta was his meal, not anyone else's, and he was not going to let anyone else get in the way of that. Kotsuke then pointed her finger upwards as out from one of the streets a massive pillar of water rose out, focusing water from several pipes in different buildings in order to try and hold off Ryu's beam just for a bit. However, it wasn't going to work that long, which was why both Kotsuke and Yuta were quick to jump out of the way, using this chance to their advantage. However, Kotsuke wasn't so lucky, as suddenly they felt a palm land on their back, before hearing the words, "Fin Icebreaker." While Kotsuke was definitely a good matchup against Uro, even with that in mind, no way was a simple Shikigami going to hold her back. And thanks to the battle against Yuta Kotsuke had lost focus on Uro, allowing Uro to catch her off guard like this. The Fin Icebreaker sending Kotsuke through one of the buildings, causing one of the walls to break. As a wide smile rose onto Uro's face, now with the main counter to her out of the way, she had a good chance at winning this. Ryu, getting even more frustrated and another person joining into the fight, quickly chose to fire off another granite blast, this time at Uro. However, Uro was quick to redirect it, sending it right back towards Ryu's body and sending his own attack at him. And while the attack did do some damage to Ryu, it didn't do that noticeable damage. He was still standing pretty fine, and he had to admit he didn't expect himself to pack such a punch. It honestly made him feel a little bit bad for everybody that he had hit in the pass of a granite blast. Not fully bad enough to stop, but just bad. Inside of the building, Kotsuke quickly began to use reverse curse technique to heal herself. She didn't take too heavy damage, but she still did take some damage. As she looked towards her bow and arrow, she was going to need to find a better place to position herself. There was no way she was going to risk staying in close range combat. But more than that, there was something else on her mind. She was questioning why. Why was Yuta trying to make dialogue with everybody? Was Yuta really her enemy right now or not? After all, Yuta didn't seem to start attacking until after she landed her own attacks. She shook that off for now. She felt like it was more likely that Yuta was just trying to get a sense of her trust so she could be backstabbed later. But still. Yuta had also just been acting weird. After all, nobody here had tried to save all of these civilians. However, as all three of them were preparing to get back up to continue to fight, all three of them at once felt a creepy wave of curse energy. One filled to the brim with power. Yuta Akotsu had now gotten back up, his curse energy supplies being fully refilled, as he put on the ring of Rika Orimoto, calling upon her full power right here and now. And in that moment, all three of them became aware of the threat in front of them, the special grade Yuta Akotsu, second strongest sorcerer behind Satoru Gojo. Ryu honestly was quite impressed. How? How was Yuta able to refill his curse energy so well? After all, using reverse cursing was clearly draining for him, but at the same time, now he was able to recover. Kotsuke's eyes focused on Rika and Yuta, the immense amount of curse energy and power that was coming from that beast. Uro remained floating in the sky. Currently out of the three of them, she was the closest towards them, which allowed her to feel the power much more directly. Rika then handed Yuta a gauntlet that he placed around his left arm. Only when Yuta is connected to Rika through the ring can he use curse techniques, fully manifest Rika, and obtain Rika's curse energy form Stealth, and this state will last for 5 minutes. As Rika began her rush towards Uro didn't seem to be too worried though. No matter how powerful something was, it didn't matter, she could always just redirect it. Although at least that was her initial thought until suddenly she felt a hard punch land on her back. And when she looked back towards where Yuta was, she couldn't spot him anymore. Yuta had now used projection sorcery to move behind her, as Uro was launched right into a punch from Rika, but Uro didn't have much time to react, as Yuta continued to rush forward, continuing a bombardment of attacks at this high level of speed. It almost looked like he was teleporting all over the place, repeatedly landing blow after blow on Uro. Not to mention Rika was also there in order to add to the combination. For every time Rika landed 1 blow, Yuta landed 4. Uro was repeatedly coughing up blood. This was way too fast for her to handle. Not to mention she couldn't even block Rika's hits. She was stuck in a bombardment of them. However, that was when Ryu saw his chance, as he fired a beam right out from his head, aiming it towards Yuta, but instead Rika blocked it while Yuta continued his bombardment. And despite Rika blocking that hit with her hand, that still burnt her hand and hurt. And Ryu had to admit he was impressed that he could even palm it. After all, that attack was just as strong as the one he used on Akotsu earlier, but it was still able to block it. As Rika rushed towards Ryu, landing a punch straight on his cheek and sending him flying. And right as Rika was going in to follow that up with a second punch, Ryu was able to counter and punch her in the cheek, sending her flying right back towards Yuta's direction. Kosuke, on the other hand, took this chance to get to a building quite far away from them, but at the same time she still was able to see how the battle was going. She had seen Yuta's speed head on, so trying to stay close to that while those three were battling was going to be a death sentence for her. She was using the two's battles against each other as a distraction for now as she began to focus water all around her, creating several arrows before launching each of them into the air, sending them high into the clouds for now. Now that Yuta and Uro were in a 1v1, it was a little bit easier to follow their movements. Sure, Yuta was still a lot faster than her, but Uro was still not able to track his movements now, until finally she figured out how to pick up and read them, manipulating the sky around Yuta to direct him away from herself. Just give Uro a little bit of a moment to breathe and properly think. However, she then saw Yuta pluck out 4 pieces of his own hair, and each of them manifested into smaller heads of Rika with wings. Uro at first thought that those were simply just normal Shikigami to use alongside Yuta. However, even though she was able to successfully redirect away the Shikigami, they were still able to land a hit on her, which confirmed something for her. Yuta's technique went beyond whatever he was doing now to amplify his own speed and control those Shikigami. No, his curse technique was mimicry. As Yuta rushed towards Uro with the gauntlet, aiming to punch her, but at the same time Uro blocked using the Fin Icebreaker. But nearby both Uro and Yuta, they'd see Ryu get knocked towards them by Rika. But while Rika was about to try and rush at Ryu once more, Yuta noticed something. There was someone missing, as he sent a mental order over to Rika, telling her to find Kosuke and defeat her, but not to kill her. Yuta was relatively confident that he would be able to handle these two from here on out. As Yuta then said to Uro, "I don't know what my ancestors may have done to you, but if you live only for yourself, there will always come a day where you can't go on." And that made rage echo onto Uro's face, a rage and anger that boiled deeper than it ever had before, as she yelled at Yuta to shut up. But right before she could continue on with the rest of her monologue, Ryu said, "I couldn't agree more," as he began to beat on his chest. The sound of him beating on his chest and his curse energy echoing all throughout the area, as well as the feeling of his curse energy, as both Uro and Yuta realized exactly what was about to happen next. A clash of 3 souls, 3 domains spawned. And once the 3 barriers began to clash with each other, Kosuke saw this as her chance. If she could shatter all 3 barriers at once from the outside, all 3 of them would be on curse technique burnout. As she moved both of her arms down hard, causing a large torrent of arrows made out of water to come down from the sky, all of them aimed towards the barrier of the domain. But suddenly, as the arrows were coming rocketing down, she felt 2 massive fists rocket down towards her head, launching Kosuke through the building and knocking her out. Rika had to hold back a little bit because if she didn't, with that off-guard attack, that likely would have killed Kosuke. But Rika, due to seeing Yuta's life in danger from being stuck inside those domains, couldn't allow that to happen, as a gear began to shift inside of her, Rika's power output achieving a brand new level while she began to rocket towards that area. All the while, the water arrows came rocketing down towards the domain. Not just that, but the innate nature of a freeway domain clash was already going to be incredibly unstable. Yuta, Ryu, and Uro all began to focus curse energy around their body in order to protect themselves more properly from the water arrows. And while Yuta and Ryu were able to take several of the water arrows quite fine, Uro was unfortunately not, as Uro had taken the most damage out of everyone so far. Furthermore, in a fast and almost animalistic quick burst of speed, Rika came in and finished them off, biting off Uro's left hand before punching them hard into the ground, knocking them out, leaving Ryu and Yuta to battle one-on-one. But Yuta Kosu's curse technique had not properly recovered yet, as both Yuta and Ryu began to charge up a burst of curse energy. Yuta realized in that moment he could have fired it off first, he could have, but yet in that gaze of Ryu, the gaze of someone who had been seeking out battle for 400 years in that final desert, he couldn't help but feel his heart melt. Yuta Kosu was someone who was never going to see the purpose in battle, but this one time, just this once, he'd enjoy it. Just this once, he'd give in to the thrill of combat. As Rika fired the love beam, sending it rocketing towards Ryu, Ryu opening up his palm in order to block the beam. But Yuta took advantage of this chance, rushing Ryu head-on, before Ryu fired the Granite Blast head-on right towards Yuta's direction. However, Yuta's technique had recovered, as he used sky manipulation to launch Ryu's curse technique up into the air, before the last moment using the projection sorcery to move as fast as he possibly could, in order to move a hand onto Ryu and pause his movements. The 5-minute connection had faded, but Rika was quick to follow up by landing a punch straight on Ryu's head, which forced Ryu to have to take extra damage, as Yuta and Ryu began to enter into a clash of hand-to-hand combat. Despite all the damage Ryu had taken, he was still able to fight, until Yuta suddenly grabbed onto Ryu, forced him still, in order to force him to take his Granite Blast head-on, as Ryu thanked Yuta, feeling more than satisfied now. Kosuke would slowly begin to wake up, as when she woke up she immediately saw Yuta Kotsu next to her, sitting down. Kosuke was immediately on guard as a result of that, however Yuta told them, "Relax, I'm not going to kill you. If I wanted you dead, I would have killed you already. I want to talk to you about some things." And that was a good point, as Kosuke moved their hand onto their head. After all, their head still felt a little bit of a sting from what Rika did. Though when she looked over to her hand, she noticed something. Her glove was off, which means her blue arms were showing. And that was when Yuta continued to talk. As they said, "Was one of your parents someone who happened to have stitches across their head, if you mind me asking?" with Kotake nodding as she said, "Yes, my mom did." How did you know that though? For a minute, Kotake had to wonder if Yuta was like her in that regard, though no, it didn't make sense. He didn't seem like he was part cursed spirit. Which led to Yuta explaining about Kenjaku, about how they were the ones that made them, and the reason why they knew this is because they had someone they knew that was actually rather similar to Kotake in that regard. Or well, not one person, but really 10 people, the death paintings as well as Yuji Itadori, all of them were part cursed spirit, just like Kotake was. And that the person who was their parent was a body hopper known as Kenjaku, the one who was completely responsible for manipulating the games. Kotake did also remember Uro talking a bit about Kenjaku as well. Upon hearing all this information, it brought Kotake to a pause for a moment, an understandable one too, considering everything that she had just learned. Well, this led to Yuta explaining why she joined the Culling games. She wants to be able to alter society to fit her needs. Sure, she could always just cover her arms and her legs, but she didn't really like doing that. Those were part of who she was. Even though she was half cursed, she still felt human. She still acted like a human. At least she hoped she did. She had seen several cursed spirits in her time, and she didn't want to be anything like them, but at the same time she was always rejected by human society. Which then led her to asking Yuta if she were to join up with them, if she were to join their group, would this be a society that would accept her? And led to a small joke from Yuta saying, you know, with them being 10 brothers, it was a surprise for me so long there wasn't a sister there. But Yuta did nod, telling her that she would definitely be accepted with this group. But now they were just stuck in this barrier, waiting for a rule to allow them to leave the Culling games, or for them to at least to be able to go in between barriers. As Yuta then placed a hand onto her head before using reverse curse technique to start to heal her head. After all, her head was still stinging a bit, so this would be able to help a bit. But then Toke told them they didn't have to, as she began to use reverse curse technique on her own body to finish healing herself. I might not be some RCT specialist or guru like you are, but I can use it myself pretty well, I think. And that was going to be rather helpful for them. Reverse cursing users were already rare, so having another one on their side was certainly going to be useful. And with that, the two of them headed back towards the stadium in order to get some rest for now. Yuta Kotsu had won the 4-way deadlock and met an unlikely ally in the process. We now head over to the Sakurajima colony. Kamo, Tanzo, and Maki were all waiting outside, preparing to enter. However, as they were preparing, they were each able to notice something quite odd about Maki. Or more so, they had noticed it the entire time they were traveling. Maki felt off, cold in a way. Now, of course, they weren't expecting Maki to be the exact same. After all, she just finished wiping out the Zenin clan entirely, and doing so completely on her own. While they did at first agree with Maki to go inside to get the weapons, Maki instead told them to meet with them at Sakurajima, which resulted in Maki taking even longer and them learning why. Maki had finished executing the Zenin clan as well as executing all remaining members in that clan, including those who were away. But even still, they didn't know what to expect. They had both spent this time going over their abilities and practicing a bit. And while Tanzo had been practicing hard, it was Kamo in particular who was practicing much harder. Almost as if he was putting his life on the line to train. But Tanzo was certain that Kamo was now a completely different beast in comparison to what he was before. They had also taken this time to get a haircut on the way here. A surprise to Kamo was that Tanzo was a natural barber. Maybe he could use that as an actual job later on once they got out of here. This is when Maki passed over Dragon Bone to Tanzo. As Maki then explained, I figured with your blood mist ability it would be better to have access to a sword. A smile was on Tanzo as he bowed. After all, this is the first time he had ever been given anything in his life. Now granted, he had only been able to walk and talk for about a month now, but still, he was thankful for it. Of course he knew it was basically a hand-me-down, but at the same time, he was going to be thankful either way. As all three of them entered into the colony, preparing to get as much points as possible for them to achieve their goals. Out of all the colonies in the Culling game, Sakurajima was by far the one filled with the most cursed spirits. While there were some sorcerers present in Sakurajima, it was mostly filled with cursed spirits. However, 3 people were about to enter Sakurajima colony and shake up the entire colony. Tanzo, the 6th death painting. Kamo Noritoshi, the rejected heir of the Kamo clan. And finally, Maki Zenin, the woman who had freed herself from the chains of cursed energy. After Maki gave Tanzo Dragon Bone, the 3 of them approached the barrier to enter inside. However, once they entered, something odd happened. Tanzo and Kamo both teleported to different parts of the barrier, however Maki could just walk right through like nothing had happened, now being at the edge of the barrier. That did put a slight worry in Maki before that changed to indifference. She knew she could trust the both of them to survive. However, Maki's entry into the colony didn't go unnoticed, as in front of Maki she could see a total of 8 different types of cursed spirits. 2 of them under normal circumstances would have been classified as a grade 1 curse. But this many cursed spirits was nothing for the ghost of the Zenin to handle, because in a moment before they could even truly move to begin their rush on Maki, Maki was already on their other side, and each of them were sliced in half, executed in one easy move. Meanwhile, at a different part of the colony, Tanzo had landed on his feet. To everything and everyone around him, he appeared to just be some type of weird blood mist, some weird red mist with a face in the center of it. Tanzo was slightly caught off guard by the fact he was teleported away from Maki and Kamo, and at the same time he was more than confident he'd be able to find the both of them. He just had a really large city to search through, which is going to be a pain, but he'd have to find a way to do it either way. But in front of Tanzo he would hear something land. This was a cursed spirit that was similar in shape to that of a spider, with 2 of its legs on the ground, the other 6 of its legs raised up and prepared to fight. This wasn't too surprising to Tanzo, as he did remember something that Yuji had described to him earlier, which was a cursed spirit that he had fought similar to that of a grasshopper. So of course one being based on spiders wasn't too much of a surprise. Though unlike Yuji, he wasn't going to brute force this fight. He had no intention of physically fighting in a hand-to-hand brawl, which led to the steam around Tanzo's body rapidly expanding to such a point that this entire street was covered in that red steam. And even existing inside of the red steam caused small burns to rise in the cursed spirit. Nothing too lethal, but it was still small amounts of damage. As the cursed spirit began to look around, trying to find where Tanzo was located with no luck, until suddenly he felt a slash land on his left side. This slash in particular was rather hard, due to it being amplified by the power of the cursed tool Dragon Bone, leaving a small mark formed on the cursed spirit. The person turned around and it tried to swipe that way, however when it did swipe it ended up hitting nothing, as it saw glowing red eyes out the corner of its eyes, but before it could even finish reacting, suddenly 2 of its arms were sliced off. You could see Tanzo just for a brief moment out the corner of its eyes, or at least Tanzo's 2 eyes, but figuring out Tanzo's exact shape was near impossible, which led the cursed spirit to opening its mouth and firing a large wave of webs right towards Tanzo. However, Tanzo was able to easily sidestep out of the way, dodging the wave of webs, and disappearing right back into the burning steam. Before Tanzo then said, "Apologies, it sounds to be so painful. If you just make yourself open, I can end this fight much quicker." And hearing that pissed off the cursed spirit to no end. How dare he mock him like this? How dare he treat him like this that he can take him out with relative ease? As the cursed spirit then lifted up all 4 of its remaining arms and began to spin around rapidly, turning itself into a bladed tornado. And that caused a small sigh to exit out from Tanzo. He was hoping the cursed spirit would be more understanding of its position, but at the same time, what was he expecting from a cursed spirit? Granted, he himself was also half cursed spirit, so he was just hoping that maybe he would be smarter than that. But most cursed spirits are dumb on average, so he didn't know what he was expecting. And at first, for a couple of seconds, nothing was happening, but the spider just continued to spin, until suddenly a street sign was thrown right at the cursed spirit, causing the cursed spirit to be forced to have to block and no longer spin, using all 4 of its arms at once to block against the street sign. But that was exactly what Tanzo had wanted, as Tanzo had taken this chance to sneak behind the cursed spirit and stab it right through the chest, before lifting up the blade upwards and doing several more cuts, finishing that cursed spirit off right then and there. Before the steam then began to fade away, other than the steam that normally surrounded Tanzo's body. Meanwhile, Kamo no Hitoshi landed down on the ground, being surrounded by a large wave of weakened cursed spirits. And as they were all about to rush at Kamo, suddenly out from Kamo's quiver, several arrows rose out, each of these arrows being dipped in small amounts of blood. But in spite of that, they had a surprisingly large amount of cursed energy flowing off of them, and they were each sent rocketing towards one of the cursed spirits, tunneling through each of them and killing them each in one blow, before each of the arrows flew back towards him. 10 were fired out. They would have higher amounts of power if fired out from a bow and arrow, but now Kamo had been able to amplify his blood control so heavily as well as curse energy amount to the point where he didn't need to actively fire them out from a bow. At least when it came to weaker end cursed spirits like grade 2s and lower. But they weren't done yet. They had more cursed spirits they were going to need to execute. All 3 of them were now on a mission. As Kamo looked down to the necklace curse tool that he had brought with him, he was hoping that he wouldn't have to use it. Until suddenly in the distance he heard what sounded like a car horn. Something had just broken into a car, and Kamo decided he was going to investigate that. Best case scenario, this might end up being a potential ally they can recruit. Worst case scenario, this is a player they have to kill to get more points. Either way, Kamo knew he had to approach this, and more importantly, approach it subtly. So he cloaked his cursed energy and began to approach that area. And when he did saw that area, he saw something that kinda caught him off guard. Up first, there was a red ghost that seemed to be wearing an Oni mask. Or at least they looked like a red ghost, but at the same time, they were more than likely just a curse. Alongside that, there were 2 eels made of what looked like a red liquid. Wait, no, he could feel it more closely. That was blood. 2 massive eels that were big enough to trample over cars, made completely out of blood. And when Kamo tried to sense the cursed energy of the cursed spirit more directly, he sensed something oddly familiar about it. As for a moment he had to question if this was really who he thought it was. He didn't think it at first, but no, it had to be. Kenjaku was a bit more cruel in his execution for Kamo's father in particular. He didn't need to kill him in his sleep, but he did so for one purpose and one purpose alone: to turn him into a vengeful cursed spirit. Now, it was never Kenjaku's true intention to make Kamo fight against this cursed spirit, but it seemed fate just had a funny way of making things play out. But Kamo himself didn't mind. It just meant that he was going to have to put down his own father himself. Though those Shikigami were rather new, he wanted to see what they were capable of doing. As Kamo then took out 3 of his arrows, each of them glowing with a blue flame of cursed energy, before he fired all 3 of them, aiming 2 towards the Shikigami and 1 right for the ghost's head. Both the Shikigami ended up being launched right through one of the buildings. However, the cursed spirit was able to counter, causing a small blood explosion to rise out from one of its hands as a way to deflect the arrow away from itself. As the cursed spirit then said, "Is that you, Narutoshi?" leading to the cursed spirit slowly turning around, facing the same direction where the arrows had came from, and that confirmed all doubts in Kamo's mind. This was definitely his father. As Kamo then activated Flowing Red Scale, before taking it up a notch and activating Flowing Red Scale Stack. After his battle against Toji and Shibuya, he was able to figure out how to use Flowing Red Scale Stack properly, and he had been using the days he had to practice Flowing Red Scale Stack. The vengeful cursed spirit of Kamo's father made the first move, as they rushed right towards Kamo and attempted to land a punch on his face. And its speed was surprising even to that of Kamo. After all, Kamo did know how strong his father was. His father was a special grade 1 sorcerer. But while his speed was certainly impressive, it wasn't the fastest thing he had to go up against. After all, he was already used to having to adjust to fast speeds from Toji, and this was nothing in comparison to him. Which led to Kamo redirecting the blow, and instead landing a punch right on its chest. Though he was forced to let go of his bow and arrow for a second. However, even though he was forced to let go of it, it was surprisingly still staying floating in the air. One of the preparations that he had made was dipping his bow itself in blood as well. By doing this, he'd be able to keep it floating and keep it nearby him even when he wouldn't be able to use it in hand-to-hand combat. A small change would be able to make a minor amount of time be gained, so he wouldn't have to put his bow and arrow away. But even in battles against high-end grade 1 sorcery, small times could make the difference. Because of this, Kamo was able to use this time and fire 3 arrows at close range. The cursed spirit barely had any time to get out of the way. But as the arrows were flying towards him, Kamo began to chant. A chant of 3 words: blood, pulse, tailwind, enhancing the blood that he was using to control his arrows, thus increasing its speed even further, causing the cursed spirit to take even further damage and be knocked back into one of the walls, until it made 3 blood explosions rise from its body, using that to make the arrows fly away from it. Thanks to being a cursed spirit, he'd be able to take advantage of his regeneration and use it to create even more blood for him to manipulate, leading to the cursed spirit changing the shape of the blood they had made from that explosion, creating tens of spears they had all launched at Kamo. Kamo then quickly jumped backwards and started to move up the wall, moving up towards one of the roofs, dodging each of the blood spears coming towards him as he took out 3 more arrows and fired them right down towards the cursed spirit. However, this time one of the eel Shikigami were able to move in the way, blocking the arrow coming towards them. And while it did do some damage towards the eel, it wasn't anything lethal. But Kamo realized that there was only one of the eels there, as the second eel came out from underneath the building Kamo was standing on, and slammed right into him, slamming him through one of the buildings. As the cursed spirit then said, "Don't tell me your mother's blood really made you that much of a disappointment." And hearing that caused Kamo's blood to boil, before Kamo began to chant, this time this chant being different. Blood, vein, body. As he grabbed onto the eel with a surprising amount of physical force, and began to spin, throwing it right through one of the buildings and right towards the cursed spirit's direction. The chant he performed was a rather simple one. It was for Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack, temporarily increasing the power for one physical movement. It wasn't quite at the level if he could use Flowing Red Scale Burst, but it was still a noticeable amp. The cursed spirit blinked in surprise as it looked towards the building destroyed. He had to admit he wasn't expecting that level of physical strength. Before he then focused blood towards his hands, clapping his hands together and firing out a piercing blood right at Kamo's direction. Kamo at the same time also focused his own blood, creating his own piercing blood and countering with his own, the 2 piercing bloods pushing up against each other. Though even though they were able to clash, Kamo could feel himself starting to get a little bit overpowered by his father. However, with the clash, he was able to significantly slow down the piercing blood, which caused Kamo to let go of his own and instead jump high into the air, avoiding the piercing blood of his father. And while he was in the air, he began to rapid fire several of his arrows, firing out 10 in rapid succession. The vengeful curse then jumped right onto the eel, using it to launch himself into the air, before he then rapidly increased his amount of blood, creating tons of slicing exorcism shurikens, before each of them were thrown right at Kamo, as Kamo looked down towards the necklace that he had brought with him and squeezed it, causing him to fall right through the roof he was standing on, phasing through it, allowing him to dodge the blood shurikens. The curse tool that Kamo wielded had a very simple curse technique. It allowed him to phase through objects so long as it had no curse energy infused into it. So he couldn't directly dodge the attacks, but he could at least move himself into a new floor. This ended up catching the cursed spirit completely off guard. As it called back the other eel towards itself, both of the eels now cycling around the cursed spirit. Kamo was thinking on what his next move should be. He needed to take a moment to calm himself down. He was angry at the curse, angry at his father for what they had done to his mother, angry at the clan for letting someone like Kenjaku take back control over the clan just because of heritage, despite everything that he had done to the world. But he focused and remembered how his student Yuji acted under rage. He didn't suppress it, he just turned it into power. Kamo had been studying everything that he could get his hands on when it came to blood manipulation. That's how he was able to learn so many of these chants. As a focus and determination entered into his eyes, that rage was slowly being taken under control by Kamo to be honed and used as a weapon to take down his father. Before he decided now was a good time to try out that move. During his time studying, he found one of the extension techniques that were attempted to be made, but never reached completion. That was because they never had enough blood to be able to create such a structure like this. In the past, a Kamo clan member had studied the tale of the strongest sorcerer in history, Ryomen Sukuna. They had been trying to figure out what made Sukuna so powerful, and if it was possible for someone to replicate as a normal human. Now, of course, creating a stomach mouth to allow for constant chanting was impossible for anybody. However, creating additional arms that would be able to constantly chant, that would be possible. The issue was no one was able to carry that much blood on them to be able to create arms like that. But Kamo began to focusing some of the blood packets that he had brought with him to shape them into arms similar to his. But he also remembered back to some advice he got from Shoso, to make them have a hollow interior, that way you're wasting a lot less blood. The blood arms were a slight bit smaller than Kamo's actual arms, but that was intentional. They were not made to fight, leading them to close to Kamo's stomach and start to make hand signs. In specific, he was making hand signs he had designed to use alongside Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale stack, before he then rushed out from the building, rushing right for his father. Upon the cursed spirits spotting Kamo, they lifted up their hands, sending both of the eels right towards Kamo's direction. At the same time, he clapped his own hands together, firing out a piercing blood aimed right towards Kamo. Kamo then created a small amount of blood underneath his feet, making a small platform for him to launch himself up into the air, allowing him to dodge both of the eels as well as the piercing blood, before he created another platform underneath his foot, using it to launch himself right towards his father. The two eel Shikigami attempted to rush at Kamo, trying to prevent him from reaching it. However, Kamo then opened up both of his hands, creating two slicing exorcisms in the shape of shurikens, before throwing at both the Shikigami while continuing his rush, cutting deep into Shikigami, deep enough to be able to halt their movements a little bit for Kamo to be able to reach his father. And the moment that he closed the distance, he landed a punch right on his father's face. This punch in particular hitting rather hard thanks to the constant hand signs that the blood arms were making. But Kamo wasn't done yet. He wasn't going to let him get a distance from him. He had to be relentless like his student. As his father tried to counter, but Kamo was able to redirect one of his hands away, while at the same time landing a punch on his father's gut, before following that up with an elbow to the face and finally a kick on his side, as he then called the blood back from the slicing exorcism, having them both go towards his hands. At the same time, he changed what the blood arms were doing as hand signs, changing amp to a different move, and the cursed spirit glared at Kamo, trying to focus itself, as it then focused blood around its hands, turning those into claws. As the cursed spirit attempted to stab Kamo, but Kamo ducked underneath it, avoiding both of the claws, before clapping his hands together and firing a piercing blood right through the cursed spirit's chest. The piercing blood going right through the cursed spirit's heart, finishing off the vengeful cursed spirit, as the other two eels slowly began to fade away, dropping their talisman on the ground, while the cursed spirit looked towards their son, looking towards Kamo with a lot of anger in their eyes. Though that anger slowly did begin to fade, turning more into acceptance and proud. After all, Kamo had surpassed him in power. He was certain that Noritoshi was going to lead the clan and make it incredibly strong, but Noritoshi told him in his final moments that he wasn't going to lead the clan. The Kamo clan was going to die with his father, and was going to die with Kenjaku the moment he killed him, taking out a bow and arrow and firing it right at his father's head, using that final move to finish him off once and for all. Kamo then picked up the two talismans that his father was using. Maybe he'd be able to use those Shikigami even better than his father could. As Kamo then began to return the blood back to the blood bags, he was holding it in for the two extra blood arms he had made, calling upon all of the blood that he had launched out as attacks as well. Though another thought then came into his head. After this, he was near certain that the Jujutsu world would be different forever. The Kamo clan was now gone and disbanded, the Zenin clan was completely massacred by Maki Zenin, and the only true representative of the Gojo clan would be Gojo Satoru himself. Most of the higher-ups were likely going to be dead or exiled for their choices. As a thought was coming into him of what was the world really going to be like after all this was done, how different was the world of Jujutsu sorcery about to be? Before that slowly turned into a faint smile. After all, he remembered all the people that were working towards making a better world, and he was near certain that no matter what, this was going to become a better world than it was today. Maybe this could become a new home for his family to return to, the real side of his family he actually cared about. Not the side of his family that just wanted him for his power and his curse technique. After their initial battles, a day would have passed, where they were mostly taking out low-end sorcerers as well as low-end curses, and it took a lot amount of time for them all to be able to meet up with each other again. Maki, Tanzo, and Kamo were all reunited with each other. Kamo updating the both of them of what he just went through, having to fight against his father after he was turned into a vengeful cursed spirit. Though for a moment that did put a thought into Maki's head. One of slight worry due to the way that she killed Nalia. But she knew not everyone was guaranteed to come back as a vengeful cursed spirit. Still, either way, she did bring it up in the conversation. Kamo and Tanzo both agreed that they were going to deal with that cursed spirit if it ever became an issue. Of course, all three of them together alongside all of their other allies. But right now, focusing on that wasn't an issue. After all, it wasn't like it was an immediate threat to them. Before suddenly in front of all three of them, the Kogane had appeared. As they announced that player Higuruma Hiromi had created a brand new rule in the Culling games, which will allow point transfer between other players. Tanzo then raised his arms up into the air and said, "Hell yeah, that's my brother! Let's go! Let's go!" with Maki crossing her arms, telling him that it could be very possible that was Yuta Kotsu instead. Kamo, though, was kind of leaning to the same side as Tanzo as well. That was slight bias because Yuji was his student and Tanzo was his brother, but at the same time, Maki was also biased for Yuta, so it was kind of fair. But then all three of them noticed something and turned to Culling Game's barrier, something that looked a lot like a worm, as Maki asked Tanzo if they had any more siblings that they didn't know about. Tanzo told them no, or at least he didn't think so, which led to Maki confirming that this was most certainly a cursed spirit. Though something about this cursed spirit felt oddly familiar to her, something that she didn't like. In a sudden burst of speed, Maki was knocked right into a wall. Both Kamo and Tanzo were barely able to see what had happened, as in front of Maki was the vengeful cursed spirit of Naoya. As Maki attempted to punch Naoya again, but before she could even land the punch, Naoya was able to move out of the way and vanish in her line of sight. Maki then lifted up both forearms to block, as cursed Naoya pressed Maki against the wall, before Naoya's face began to rise out, mainly to taunt Maki. At the same time, Maki was starting to question it. How was Naoya able to come back before she realized that the likely reason was because she landed the blow on it with just normal punches? She couldn't put down a sorcerer without them turning to a vengeful cursed spirit. Which made her also realize that it was likely the entire Zenin clan might have ended up coming back, or at least a lot of them, because a bunch of them she didn't kill with her sword. Our Naoya then spoke and told her that the reason he came back wasn't because of Maki, but because he left it up to Maki's mother to kill him. Unknowingly, of course, but because Maki's mother chose to steal her kill, he ended up coming back to life as a vengeful cursed spirit, in this accursed but much stronger body, coming back with a total of one mission, and that mission was to execute Maki Zenin himself. However, suddenly 3 arrows hit Naoya, each of them catching him off guard. Now in terms of speed, he was still faster than the arrows because he was so focused on Maki he didn't even pay attention to them. However, they were faster than what he was expecting. Kamo had been taking this time to chant, using it to upgrade the speed and force the arrows were launched at, allowing Maki to jump away from Naoya. And when Naoya looked over, he suddenly saw like a massive wave of red smoke. Kamo was now cloaking his cursed energy, just to make sure it would be harder for him to be tracked. Maki and Tanzo were near impossible to track in this wave, Maki due to having no cursed energy, and Tanzo because of the fact that this was his cursed energy as a wave. All the blood in this team was his cursed energy, making it feel like Tanzo was everywhere. As Naoya then said, "Ah, 2 blood manipulation users, though one of you are a mutant, just like those 2 I fought earlier. Especially that brat vessel of Sukuna. Your older brother wouldn't happen to be here. I'm still pissed off at him for that loss." And that made a bit of a smirk rise on Tanzo, as he told him that Choso sadly wasn't here to beat his ass a second time. But not just was Choso alive, but Yuji was alive as well. And upon hearing that noise, a massive smile began to rise on cursed Naoya, as he flew right towards the direction of the blood mist. And while he did feel small burns across his body, he didn't care too much for them. He was intent on hitting Tanzo with that blow. But when he arrived, he didn't make contact with anybody, but instead he felt several slashes land on his body. While most of them were from Maki, one of them was from Tanzo. As both Maki and Tanzo were both caught a little bit off guard by that, they weren't expecting him to be that easy to take out. But they didn't drop their guard yet, as they could hear Naoya being surprised at the fact that cursed spirits were able to feel pain, even making a joke of apologizing to all the cursed spirits he caused that pain. Though if he was being honest, he couldn't give less of a damn, as his body began to heal. No, wait, it wasn't healing, it was trying to make a cocoon. But during this time, Kamo was making his next chance and hand sign. He had recalled the blood arms once more, as he fired out a piercing blood, hitting Naoya right inside of the cocoon that he was making. They needed to put Naoya down and fast. He was already rather powerful, so if he became a full-on cursed spirit rather than what he was right now, they would become much greater of a threat. And while they fought and maybe believed that they had acted fast enough, they could see they had not. Though all 3 of them were able to see they had done some notable damage to Naoya, as Kamo activated Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack. He had managed to activate it just in time, as cursed Naoya closed the distance between himself and Kamo. As Naoya attempted to land a punch right on Kamo's face, but Kamo was able to move out of the way, just barely dodging it. He knew he was going to have to play defensive for a bit. After all, Naoya was quick to react, as right after he attempted to land that first punch, he landed a second, but this time Kamo had blocked it. However, even with Kamo blocking that punch, he was launched through several of the trees. As Naoya then said, "Trash, read the room, will you?" During this time, Maki had also told Tanzo to hide away. Tanzo would not be that good against someone like cursed Naoya. The best that Tanzo could do was continuing to make steam, which Tanzo agreed with. Kamo had to admit he was impressed by how fast cursed Naoya was. He wouldn't have a second to relax. He was going to need to keep blood around him in order to defend himself from those blows. Of course, he was confident he could take some of those blows normally, but he wasn't confident about how many of them. As the focus burned through Kamo's eyes, he needed to fight this man with everything he had. Before Maki landed next to him, the 2 of them being prepared for Naoya's next charge. Though fortunately for them, they did have a little bit of time for them to stall. After all, Naoya did have to find his way through the steam. But that gave Kamo just enough time to swap over what his hand signs were for, making the hand signs directed to Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale Stack in order to amplify them even further. He was going to need to push his reaction time far beyond the limit. But they only had a couple seconds before Naoya did find them as he began his next rush. As Kamo and Maki both managed to move out of the way, Kamo at the same time activating Crimson Binding right on Naoya. Curse Naoya was quick to spin it off, but Kamo and Maki were both quick to react sooner. As Kamo fired out a piercing blade going right through their side, while at the same time Maki took the chance to attempt to land a slash on Naoya. And while Curse Naoya was able to avoid Maki's blow due to him underestimating Kamo, he did allow that blow to hit him. Curse Naoya considered Maki the much greater threat right now, especially with that sword that belonged to Toji. Both Kamo and Maki were quickly able to realize that he was using the curse technique of Naobito Zenin. He was still able to use projection sorcery, but now he was using it at a much greater extent than he ever had before. As suddenly both Kamo and Maki saw 16 panels in the air start to freeze. All 16 of them were right in front of Maki. Curse Naoya then punched the air, causing several explosions to rise in the air through projection sorcery, forcing both Kamo and Maki to lift up their arms in order to block, but also giving Curse Naoya a chance to run away. Or at least they thought he was running away until he began to turn around. Tanzo then enhanced the steam even further, telling them they needed to move out of the way and now. Thanks to Tanzo, Naoya wasn't going to get as clear as sight, as both Maki and Kamo moved separate directions away from each other, making it so Curse Naoya was going to be forced to have to pick one of their targets, as they saw the Curse Spirit begin to spin around in the air rapidly like a tornado, before attempting to slam hard into the ground, trying to slam right into Maki, and while he did hit part of her, he didn't get the full slam on her. However, he was able to disperse some of the steam. Still, even the blow that he did end up landing did some damage to Maki. Naoya was near certain that if he did that again, it would do lethal damage to her. But that death painting was going to prove itself to be an annoyance. However, right before Naoya was about to land a second attack, suddenly something rammed right into him. A giant eel Shikigami that appears to be made out of blood. As the second one then landed, Kamo was now using the Shikigami talisman that he got from his father after defeating him in order to summon Shikigami, as Kamo landed next to Maki, telling her that he was going to hold off Naoya, trying to get away from Maki to get out of here. He was going to put his life on the line to try and kill Curse Naoya. He felt that him and Tanzo would stand a pretty good chance, but he couldn't risk Maki, especially right now. However, Maki told him that she would be fine, she just needed 2 minutes to heal. 2 minutes sounded more than enough. Him and Tanzo should be able to stall for that long. Kamo was glad that he packed an extra amount of blood and did as much studying as he did. He felt he was going to have to put everything on the line in order to test his ability against Curse Naoya, as Tanzo began to increase the amount of steam all around them, while at the same time allowing Maki to jump away and start to recover. And when Curse Naoya looked up, he saw the 2 eels staring in front of him, with Kamo standing on top of one of them. He was looking around for Maki and able to see that she was gone. But Maki was near impossible to sense, as Kamo disappeared into the steam alongside of the 2 eels. Naoya's speed is immense. Other than that man in Shibuya, Sukuna, Gojo, and maybe Yuji Itadori, I don't think I've ever fought anyone this fast before. And even then, I'm not too sure about Yuji and that man in Shibuya. His durability also seems to be a lot higher than Hanami's, though I don't think he's more durable than Mahito when Yuji fought him. Still, I think I have a pretty good chance at this. He was thinking more and more, leading to him realizing that the form that Naoya went into in order to retract himself and gain as much speed as possible was when he was at his fastest and most durable. Right now, since Naoya wasn't trying to build up speed, he wasn't all that durable. As Naoya then rushed in the direction, he saw Kamo disappear into the steam in. But while he rushed to the steam, he noticed it was starting to get hotter and hotter. Kamo himself had a higher heat resistance than an average sorcerer. This was mainly because of Falling Red Scale and Falling Red Scale stack, the heat in the body ended up increasing dramatically. And with Maki no longer in the steam, Tanzo knew that he could increase the heat quite a bit. A plan that Kamo and Tanzo had agreed to before they had entered into the colony. That pain from the heat was slightly causing Naoya to be distracted, not fully, but just slightly. And Kamo knew he was going to take every advantage that he could get right now. As Naoya eventually spotted Kamo and attempted to slam his tentacle right into Kamo's face. But Kamo was able to react to it, his blood arms had never stopped making those hand signs for Flowing Red Scale and Flowing Red Scale stack. As he was barely able to deflect it before following it up with a punch towards Naoya's arm. But even while he was deflecting it, he could feel the immense amount of power behind Curse Naoya's blows. But Kamo wasn't done yet, as he opened up his hands and sent some of his blood right into Curse Naoya's body, using both of his eel Shikigami as a distraction to have them both slam into Curse Naoya, trying to distract him from the blood maneuver that he had just done. However, while they were strong, it wasn't strong enough to handle Curse Naoya, as Curse Naoya spun, slapping both of the eels away from himself. However, when he looked back to Kamo, he saw something different. Behind Kamo was glowing red eyes, as Tanzo had now placed his hands onto Kamo's, making Kamo be completely surrounded by that steam. At the same time, the hand signs began to change from the blood arms, before Kamo then fired out a piercing blood, amped up to 120% of the hand signs and chants. Furthermore, it also had a steam surrounding it, as Tanzo spent time heating up the blood in order to try and cauterize whatever wound they were going to land on Curse Naoya. This combination move they called Piercing Plasma. This combination move hit Naoya dead on, sending him flying through several of the trees, and putting him in quite an immense state of pain. However, Curse Naoya wasn't done yet, as he was fueled by this immense amount of rage, before rushing right towards Kamo as well as Tanzo, punching the both of them and launching them flying towards one of the buildings, before Curse Naoya threw both of the eels as well. And right before Kamo and Tanzo could hit a building, Kamo activated the phasing ability of the Curse tool, phasing through the building for the both of them to land on their feet. As Kamo then unsummoned the eels and summoned them right next to himself, but they were now no longer in the steam. Kursnalia was also starting to pant a little bit. He could feel the poison inside of him starting to take effect. But more importantly, something else unexpected happened, as two other people entered into the battle, Daido and Mio. Kamo and Tanzo had accidentally landed pretty close to where they were, as Kursnalia began to fly down towards their direction. They heard the scream of one man yelling sumo, as well as another person saying katana. And right as Kursnalia was about to try and slash at them again, suddenly that arm was cut off. Maki was now fully healed. But suddenly Maki was caught off guard, as her sword removed herself from her grip, going right towards Daido. Before all five of them were paralyzed for a brief moment, paralyzed by the sheer amount of lethality that Daido wielded, an unparalleled nameless swordsman. Filled to the brim with sheer lethality, focused completely on Kursnalia. Before in a single slash he managed to slice Kursnalia completely in half, sending him flying right towards a wall. While Kursnalia was partially blaming it on the poison, he was also blaming it on that sword, but for some reason it was different in the hands of this man in comparison to Maki. And that was the same that Maki was thinking as well. As Daido looked at the sword confused for a moment. After all, from what he could tell, the sword had chosen him, and yet it seemed to be reacting in a different way now. What was wrong with this sword? Before he asked Maki if he'd hit something which confused all three of them, after all, they realized now that this man wasn't actually able to see Kursnalia. And Daido explained he can see everything else, so it doesn't matter if he can't see it normally, he might as well be able to see it. And Maki was realizing there was something different between herself and Toji, as she was then trying to remember how Kamo and Megumi both described their experience fighting him, and they could only put it into a few words, as if that man was fighting completely on instinct. This then led into Mio activating Simple Domain, trying to give Maki a space to think against her. As Mio said, "You're too tense, girl, it's taking away your edge." As Maki told Kamo that she needs to blow off some steam, she has been thinking a bit too much, and she'd been relying on the two of them to do well. With Tanzo and Kamo agreeing, they were going to give Maki some time, as they joined Daido in the fight. Tanzo then created a massive wave of steam once more. Though midway as he was making it, Naoya suddenly rushed right towards him. Naoya was so done with this blood steam. But right as he was about to close the distance, suddenly he felt the blood eel land right on top of him. Kamo smirked a bit, thanking Megumi for that tactic, before passing his cursed tool over to Tanzo, allowing him now to phase through buildings. And Tanzo understood the message as he phased through the ground before heading towards one of the buildings and starting to make steam all over the place. As now he then pushed a Shikigami off of his body. But right as he did, he felt 3 arrows land on his side, then a few arrows landing on Naoya's back right after. The advantage Kamo had of his cursed energy arrows was that he could manipulate and control them, making it hard to track his direction, which led to Kursnalia deciding to swap tactics, freezing several frames in the air and starting to explode the air all around him, trying to create an AoE attack, which did scatter some of the steam and showed that Kamo had disappeared. However, once the explosions were done, someone else rushed right towards him and sliced it in half again. That was Daido. And right as Kursnalia was about to continue his counterattack, suddenly the simple domain shattered, with Kamo landing next to Daido as they saw Maki walk out from it, and she was completely different from how she was a minute ago. Thanks to Mio's assistance, she was able to realize what she was missing fully. Maki was determined to finish this right here and now. Kamo could see it. After having direct experience against Toji himself, he could feel it now. Maki was now equal to that of the demon, Toji Zenin. As Kursnalia began to release a barrage of attacks on Maki, repeatedly trying to hit her, but each time he tried, he failed. Maki could now feel it. She could feel the atmosphere, she could feel the changes in the wind, and with all that, it was almost like she could see into the future, allowing her to dodge each of Kursnalia's blows. And Kamo saw his chance. He looked towards Tanzo and the both of them nodded, the two of them preparing to fire off another piercing plasma. As Maki then rose over Kursnalia and punched him hard into the ground, making a crater, leading to a headbutt from Mio landing on Kursnalia. Something he'd normally be able to dodge thanks to the damage from Maki as well as the poison Kamo had landed, he had no chance, followed by an even deeper slash being landed by Daido on him. And finally, Maki landing a kick right on Kursnalia's head. They were then able to see half of Kursnalia's form start to rise out from his body. He was about to cast his domain expansion, but Kamo and Tanzo were not going to let that happen, as the piercing plasma shot right through his hands, burning both of them off and not allowing them to make the hand sign for a domain expansion, leading to one final move from Maki Zenin, taking back the sword from Daido and cutting Naoya's head clean off, eliminating the vengeful cursed spirit of Naoya in one final blow. The battle against cursed Naoya had just finished. Tanzo and Kamo were currently sitting down recovering. Daido and Mio were also there present with them. Maki meanwhile was holding her sword as she thanked it for what they were able to show them, though in reality she wasn't thanking the sword, she was thanking the spirit inside of the sword, Mai Zenin. Without Mai, she was never able to see what she was missing. As Maki took a seat herself and she looked over to Tanzo, she could see that Tanzo's steam was starting to fade a little bit. Tanzo was trying to recover fully, so he needed to deactivate his technique, or at least lower the passive amount that was constantly active. Tanzo was humanoid in shape. He was wearing a cloak, though he did have a few differences. He had claw-like hands as well as a wasp-like head. and his skin was rather dark with the glowing red eyes that he had. Up to this point, Maki had never really seen Tanzo before. She had to blink in surprise. She was actually a little surprised that he looked like this. She didn't know what she was expecting, but not that. Still, she told Tanzo that he did an amazing job. Tanzo was far out of his league in terms of power here, but he was still able to offer support. Without Tanzo, Maki would have definitely taken much more damage against Cursed Nelia. She might have even gone close to death. Tanzo gave her a thumbs up, but at the same time he told her that next time he was going to be able to get strong enough so he could support them in combat. He didn't want to just stay as a smoke machine after all. And when Kamo heard that, he decided to say, maybe I might be able to help you with that in hindsight. While you don't have access to the full levels of blood manipulation, you do have access to the part of our abilities that allow us to heat up our blood, and you're able to heat it up to levels far beyond what I've ever seen in the past. The only people I've seen and able to equal what you do is Yuji himself. So maybe while we have time to experiment, I might actually be able to help you on how to improve your technique. And upon hearing that, a smile formed on Tanzo as well as Kamo. Kamo was more than fine with continuing to take on the teacher role. Now he just had to take it on for another one of Yuji's brothers rather than just Yuji himself. And at that same time, Daido also spoke. I can tell you're rather inexperienced with your blade, but you have abilities that could end up surpassing mine if tutored right. So how about I also teach you how to wield that blade of yours proper? And a look of excitement rose onto Tanzo upon hearing that. After all, this might end up making him the second strongest death painting. He already knew there was not a chance he was going to reach the level of his younger brother, but he couldn't be happier about that. But maybe there's a chance he might be able to catch up to Choso, who knows. Though Mio was feeling a little bit sad because he had really nothing that he could add on to this. After all, not any of these guys seemed like sumo wrestlers. Though watching this all happen made a smile rise on Tamaki's face. However, she did tell him that she was planning to leave the colony soon after she recovered. She had the ability to bypass barriers, so she could easily act as communication for everybody. Kamo and Tanzo both knew that was part of the plan, so they both gave her a thumbs up and wished her the best of luck on her travels. Maki then ended up narrowing her brows. She told them, I'm not leaving yet, don't rush me off so fast. Before her expression lightened and all of them laughed together. From their respective battles, they were able to become much closer friends and much closer allies, and even getting a total of 2 new allies they were going to get with them, though Daido and Mio did tell them they weren't planning to come with them and they just wanted to continue to explore the colonies for now, which Tanzo and Kamo were more than okay with. And after a few more hours of recovery and rest, Maki would bid everybody a farewell as she left the colony and headed out in order to continue doing communication between the others. Kamo at the same time though was contemplating about something. Contemplating about if he should finally go to see his mom after all of this is done, before he came to the answer that yes, he should go see her. We then return back to Tokyo Colony 1, where Yuji, Jin, Kyoto, and Hana were all returning back to the area Toto was at, as they were met at the entrance by Reggie, Toto, and Nanako. Hazunoki and Remy were pretty nearby, with Reggie commenting on the fact that they had got them 3 brand new allies, including the Angel, and had to admit this kid was impressive. As Reggie then asked, any luck on finding Hari by the way? As Kyoto rubbed the back of his head a bit and said, apologies, I killed him, and took his points. And where Kyoto was genuinely preparing himself to have to fight just in case, Reggie actually began to laugh a bit at that. As he said, nah, don't worry, guy was a loose cannon and kinda weak. Plus in exchange we got 3 brand new strong as hell allies. Now under normal circumstances, Reggie might be a little bit more annoyed at this, but at the same time, they got 3 incredibly powerful allies. Sure, they weren't as strong as Yuji, but they were pretty confident that both Kyoto and Jin would be able to do well, if not maybe even beat Toto on their own. Though this is only based off sensory right now, he wasn't too sure. He felt like both of them were kinda hiding their power. As Toto walked towards them and asked the 2 of them who they were, with Jin and Kyoto both saying their names, and Yuji telling them that both of them were experiments of Kenjaku. As Toto blinked and said, wait a minute, wouldn't that make these 2 also your brothers? As Yuji, Jin, and Kyoto all looked at each other and realized they were all technically brothers since they were made from the same person. Sure, Kenjaku had body hop, but they were still brothers. Before all 3 of them then saw stars start to rise in Toto's eyes, because that meant Toto had 2 brand new brothers. As Jin looked towards Yuji and asked, is that normal form or no? With both Yuji and Nanako nodding at the same time, showing, yeah, that was actually just Toto's normal. Before Toto approached them and asked them both a simple question. What type of woman was their type? Now this caught both Jin and Kyoto completely off guard, especially Jin, who was still recovering from a man pulling a pizza out of his oven. Man, that sounds weird out of context. And now they had to deal with this clearly insane person, but at the same time at least they were a better type of insanity than Takaba was. As Jin and Kyoto nodded to each other before both of them at the same time said, a tall woman with a big... However, before both of them could complete that sentence, suddenly they heard somebody yell at them. A man who was standing on top of a rooftop, wearing a bathrobe as well as half of a jester outfit. Wait, hold on, there are kids watching, think of the kids, man. As Kyoto then narrowed his eyes and said, okay, if you care so much about the kids watching, why did you show up half naked? However, Toto seemed to get the message. He returned their attention back to him, and Toto told them that they all were going to be great brothers. After all, Yuji had the same type as well. Nanako was looking on with an unamused face, though she was kinda used to it by this point as well. Still, he had a feeling that all of them were going to be pretty good friends. Though Toto then had a second question to ask, which was how strong were these 2? And Yuji responded that they were definitely going to be very strong allies. They were definitely stronger than Choso. though if he were to compare them, he would say they were a little bit weaker than he was at the start of the Shibuya incident, which Shoto had to admit he was definitely impressed by. Kyoto and Jin weren't too sure whether to take that as a compliment or an insult. Either way, Toto offered them both some time to spar. He wanted to see how strong they were. Jin and Kyoto did both give thumbs up, though Kyoto wasn't really in that much of a mood to fight. Jin definitely was. Jin was feeling a bit more fired up now. As Hannah looked around the group around them, she had to admit this was an interesting group, but at the same time they'd definitely be able to help her to achieve her goal. Now she just needed to prepare herself to meet Megami again. But now we would turn our attention over to Megami and his group before the Culling games had even started. Megami was currently waiting outside of an abandoned building, alongside one of the death paintings, that death painting being Sanzo. A death painting that had a very cocoon-like body, but was using small wings of blood in order to keep themselves up in the air. Meanwhile, on the inside, Shoso and Nobara were currently present. Shoso stood out like a sore thumb. After all, he was an entire gargoyle. But considering this was a Jujutsu Sorcery Fight Club, someone like Shoso wasn't really a surprise. But what was even more surprising was a girl that was currently fighting inside of the arena, that girl being Nobara Kugasaki. They were facing off against Panda. During this battle, they exchanged information, such as Kirara being a dangerous opponent, and how Akari was aware of who Panda was and being cautious to avoid them. Also exchanging information that the Gargoyle Man was one of their allies. Finally, Nobara was keeping secret that she was an actual student at Jujutsu High. She had to change her outfit entirely for this, but she was more than fine with that. Still, I needed to create a plan in order to get close to Akari in order to talk with him properly. After the match was done, Panda had left the arena in order to go meet up with Megami and Sanzo. And at the same time Kirara was exiting the room, Shoso and Nobara decided to enter inside. And while Megami, Panda, and Sanzo were all handling the security outside, a conversation began between Nobara, Hikari, and Shoso. Hikari was a bit intrigued. Nobara seemed to be a pretty normal person, but there was the other person who was more intriguing, the one who looked like a gargoyle. However, Hikari was also able to sense that out of the two of them, Nobara was surprisingly the stronger person despite her normal human looks. She seemed to be in that mid to high-end grade 1 range. However, Akari didn't really start them out with an introduction. Instead, he said this: "You get a monthly income of 1 million yen by working for 1 hour a day. Would you believe me if I told you that?" Shoso and Nobara both looked over to each other a little bit confused, as Shoso's eyes had to give away the question to Nobara of, "Are all of you Jujutsu High students this weird?" But that did lead Nobara to answering the question, as she said, "Depends on what type of work it would be." Sure, Nobara might have been from the country, but she knew better than just accept a deal like that without knowing the conditions. Which led to Akari saying, "In order to know what that work is, you're gonna have to pay me 200,000 yen. Leading to Nobara's eyes lowering as she said, "That's a scam." And Akari gave finger guns as he said, "That is completely right. It's a very common scamming method, and it's how scammers get rich." Which ends up making them look even more credible because they actually have the money to back it up. And then more people decide to buy their course, make them look more rich, and bam, it is a whole cycle. Now, if you're not an idiot, it's pretty easy to see through, but at the same time, most people end up falling for it. Do you know why? It's all because of the fever. Shoso and Nobara both looked towards each other with another look of confusion. After all, they had no idea what he meant by that. As Akari then said, "Both the scammer and the scammed have fever. I'm going to change my life." People get carried away with their fever, and they end up making rash decisions. But without fever, people can't even fall in love. I adore people's fever. A more direct exchange of fever, you know what that is? And Nobara, without any hesitation, was able to answer gambling. And Hikari gave finger guns again, as a way to tell them that they were right. Before he continued on with his speech, as he said, "Life is a gamble. There's a mountain of women that dump me because they despise gambling, but they got it all wrong. The ones who can't bet big and the ones who don't know when to call it quits, they're the one that gets cast aside from our society. There's not a person on earth who doesn't gamble. What they hate isn't gambling, it's a loss and ruin. But me, see, I love fever. Fever is gambling, and gambling is life, and love is control. With my fight club, I eventually want to control this country's fever. And with what happened in Shibuya, now is the perfect time to do so. Since everybody knows about the existence of cursed spirits, and Jujutsu headquarters is now barely functional, now is the perfect time for me to expand. I'll crush all obstacles and force them to publicly accept my fight club in the upcoming revisions to Jujutsu regulations. But that's for the future. Kugasaki, Shoso, do you both want to help me with that? You're strong enough to do quite well in this world." Before suddenly all three of them started to hear a phone ring in the corner. As Akari said, "Yo Gargoyle, are you able to drink? I've been trying to figure this out for the past few minutes. Are you an actual sorcerer or are you a Shikigami? Cause you could really pass as both." With Shoso confirming that he was a sorcerer, and that he had never drunk before. With Nobara also saying that she wasn't really in the mood to drink alcohol right now. Which led to Akari saying, "Did you guys know that Satoru Gojo also can't handle liquor that well?" With Nobara responding, "Really? The guy who's completely immortal and untouchable can't handle liquor? Huh. I felt that it would be used to kill him by now." Now, internally saying that made Nobara gag a bit because she had to compliment Gojo in such a way, and that just didn't make her feel right, but at the same time, it was the best way to make them actually not be suspected. As Hikari then leaned closer and said, "Anyway, what do you people want? That phone signal is a signal about an emergency, by the way, and the only reason I'm not attacking you guys yet is because I can tell you guys want something." And hearing that caused Nobara and Shoso to both immediately be on guard, but Nobara decided to drop her guard, as she walked right towards him and told him that they needed their help. They were up against the higher-ups right now, and they needed to free Satoru Gojo from his prison. Satoru Gojo had been sealed away during the Shibuya incident, and while they were able to defeat several of the curses that were responsible for it, the main person who was responsible, Suguru Geto, or well Kenjaku, now possessing the body of Suguru Geto, was their main enemy. But they weren't on the side of the higher-ups either. The higher-ups had already been sending people to try and kill them after all. The only reason they hadn't done so is because of Yuta and Kotsu making the higher-ups believe that they were dead. After this was done, they were likely going to end up having to deal with the higher-ups. But of course first came the Culling Games. They needed to eliminate that before any of their plans could come to fruition. Furthermore, they also had another bargaining chip. Our friend Megumi Fushiguro is now the leader of the Zenin clan. If they join us, you can get their support with whatever you want to achieve. And hearing all this information, Hikari decided to agree. On the outside, Megumi, Sanzo, and Panda had finished defeating Kirara, getting them on their side as well. And that led to all of them uniting with each other in order to continue to discuss their plans. Honestly, things are going pretty well for Hikari right now. He got the Zenin clan handed to him on a silver platter. Little did he know the Zenin clan was about to die completely, but that's beside the point. But while they were discussing and preparing to head off to go to one of the barriers, Megumi then got a message from Yuji. Which that message ended up getting a little bit of a change of plans from Megumi, as then they could see which colonies did have players. Originally they were planning to just evenly split their party among the colonies in order to get as much points as possible, but now they could see through Yuji, at least temporarily, they were all going to focus a bit more on Tokyo Colony 1 and 2. That was because the original colony they were planning to go to didn't actually have that many players of high value points, so them just sticking to Tokyo Colony 1 and 2 would be good. Nobara, Sanzo, and Shoso were all going to go with Hikari and Kirara, and Megumi was going to go into Tokyo Colony number 1 in order to find Yuji and back him up. They didn't already have full faith in Yuji to be able to handle it, but with Yuji having the biggest opportunity for points, Megumi thought it'd be best for him to go there. Meanwhile, the 5 sorcerers were planning to head over to Tokyo Colony number 2. They were also planning out some new moves they could potentially do together, which might end up giving them even more advantages. Panda was also going to go with them as well, as Megumi left them in order to head over to Tokyo Colony number 1, while the rest of them were preparing their equipment to head over to Tokyo Colony number 2. Nobara, Hikari, Panda, Sanzo, and Shoso would all arrive to Tokyo Colony number 2. The colony teleporting them all across the barriers, with Hikari facing off against Charles. Panda landing on the roof of a building. Sanzo and Shoso both landed on different parts of the colony as well. However, they were close enough by each other. They were able to see each other when they landed and they waved towards them. However, when they all landed, they noticed that the colony was oddly quiet. They were expecting the colonies to be much more war-torn and much more battle-filled, but this one was so silent. However, at the same time, the feeling of bloodlust riddled through the air. In particular, it was most thick around the docks, as Kashimo had just finished murdering another opponent. Meanwhile, Nobara Kugasaki had landed 40 feet away from Kashimo, and upon sensing that curse energy, she immediately cloaked hers, something that she learned during the time that she was spending with Yuji and the others. After all, they were being hunted down by sorcerers previously, so they didn't know when they would need to cloak their cursed energy. But now that she sensed that power, she especially knew she didn't want to mess with it. As Nobara was taking out several nails, she didn't want to fight it directly, she knew she had to set some traps. But unfortunately for her, things wouldn't go that easy. After all, Kashimo heard her land, though he wasn't too sure if that was a person landing or not. So far, there hadn't been a single interesting challenge in this colony, so he slowly began to walk towards that direction. He wasn't in too much of a rush. However, this was a perfect opportunity for Nobara to lay out some traps. She could feel it from the bloodlust emanating from this man. If he discovered where she was, she would be dead. And once Kashimo arrived to where Nobara had landed, all he saw was a couple of nails on the ground. That caused Kashimo to tilt his head a little bit, though he figured that was more likely just some animal managed to get in to one of the crates and scattered a bunch of things. But it was weird that it was only nails, until suddenly they all exploded in a massive burst of cursed energy, before it took the shape of several cursed energy like nails that overshadowed even Kashimo in height. However, Kashimo was able to avoid each of them. But this did cause a little bit of a smirk to rise on him. After all, just off that attack alone, he could tell that this opponent was at least going to be smarter than all of the opponents he had fought so far. However, this wasn't going to be a fight. No, this was a game of cat and mouse. He was pretty certain about that. The fact that they were not trying to confront them more directly meant that he was more than likely significantly stronger than them. Still, either way, this was going to be fun. Annoying, but fun. As out the corner of his eyes, he saw 3 more nails rocketing right towards him. Before they could even reach, he heard the snap of the fingers, causing each of them to activate Hairpin, but Kashimo was able to move out the way again. Now that he was aware of what Nobara's moveset was, he was going to be careful. Though part of him did wonder if it was limited to nails or if she could do it on any type of object. Either way, though, he just had to be prepared. As Kashimo then said, Whoever you are, do you know anything about Ryoma Sukuna? I want to fight him. I can already tell you're stronger than everybody else I've fought. Tell me what, if you tell me everything you know about Sukuna, I might end up sparing your life after we're done fighting. And hearing that slightly annoyed Nobara. After all, everybody had always been after Yuji for Sukuna. Part of her was pissed off because of how much of a burden was always placed on Yuji just because he consumed one of Sukuna's fingers in hopes of helping people. She didn't feel like Yuji deserved that at all. However, there was also one other part of her. Part of her that was pissed off that the attention was always on Yuji. Still, either way, she had no intention whatsoever to tell this man anything about Sukuna, which led to no response coming from Nobara. As Kashimo smirked a bit and said, "Fine, be that way," before he tore off a piece of one of the shipping containers. And then he threw it, having it spin, making a massive propeller blade. The speed and power he was able to throw it with was incredible. After all, he was able to slice through several of the shipping containers all at once, and Nobara could hear them being sliced through, and by a hair's breadth she was able to jump out of the way and avoid it. Nobara could see that this game of stalling and traps was not going to last her too long. She was going to need to go on the offense. As Nobara then took out a total of 10 nails, before jumping high into the air and smacking all of them with her hammer. And that let Kashimo get his first sight of who he was fighting. And he had to admit he was surprised. After all, he wasn't going to see somebody that young doing that well against him. Now granted, she wasn't doing too well, but she was doing better than most of the other people who had immediately ran at him and died. But still, she had to be a teenager, something like that. Before that caused a smirk to rise on Kashimo as he began to laugh a bit and said, "Are so many of the sorcerers of your modern era so pathetic that a child can overcome them?" After all, even though he hadn't got hit directly by any of those attacks, he could just feel it based off the curse energy alone that they were stronger than any of the sorcerers he had fought inside of his barrier. As Kashimo began to spin around his lightning rod rather fast, using it to deflect each of the nails coming towards him. And while Nobara was tempted to respond to Kashimo, she knew she couldn't risk that for now, as Nobara pointed her finger upwards, causing each of the nails to turn around and to face Kashimo even after they were deflected. And that caused a hint of surprise to echo across Kashimo's face. After all, he didn't expect Nobara to be able to change the direction of those nails around mid-air. Still, Kashimo punched the ground underneath himself, launching himself high into the air in order to avoid each of the hairpins coming towards him. But that was exactly what Nobara had wanted. As Nobara jumped in the air in order to meet him, knowing that Kashimo couldn't dodge mid-air, she quickly slammed her hammer against one of her nails, launching it right towards Kashimo, before launching another and another, trying to make enough constant pressure with him mid-air because she knew that he wouldn't be able to deflect all of these. But she drastically underestimated the Thunder God's speed, as Kashimo was able to deflect each of the nails coming towards him other than one that grazed past his cheek as hairpin was activated, landing a small cut on his cheek. Before Nobara landed on the ground first and immediately smacked her hammer, launching 3 more nails right towards Kashimo's direction. As Kashimo ducked underneath all 3 of them before lunging himself right towards Nobara, closing the distance much faster than Nobara had even expected, before Kashimo landed a punch right on her gut. But this punch was a little bit different. For some reason, Nobara felt like she couldn't move. She felt stunned, like electricity was coursing through her body, the passive effect of Kashimo's curse energy. But she didn't have much time to focus on it because more importantly, that blow hurt like hell, and completely winded her. However, Kashimo wasn't done yet, as he quickly moved to kick her in the back of the head, launching Nobara right through one of the shipping containers, as Nobara coughed up a bit of blood before Kashimo closed the distance again, and right when he was about to land a punch on her, suddenly Nobara launched out one of her nails right towards Kashimo. As Kashimo used one hand to catch the nail, having the nail pierce a little bit into his hand, but at the same time he landed a punch right on Nobara's stomach. A smirk rising on Kashimo, he had to admit he was impressed, as he lifted Nobara up by the hair and asked her, "Hey, do you know anything about Ryoma Sukuna? Last chance to tell me, or else I'll kill you." And Nobara felt a little bit of blood dripping down her cheek, before she then said, "Crucifix." As several, no, tens of small spikes began to pierce right in Kashimo's body. It felt like he was being stabbed all over his entire body. Crucifix was a more advanced version of hairpin in resonance, one that covered the entire body rather than just where she hit, making it so any blow she landed had the potential to be lethal, and forcing Kashimo to drop Nobara for a second. And right as Nobara was about to try and move away, Kashimo was quick to grab onto her leg, and throw her right into one of the shipping containers. Kashimo had to admit that that hurt. If she had about 3 or 4 more years of experience, she might have actually been a good fighter against him. She might have even forced him to use that lightning bolt. But right now, she just wasn't strong enough. Nobara also felt pain coursing through her entire body. She knew she didn't have much time left. Still, she was sorry to everybody that she had met, sorry that she couldn't do that much more. As Nobara could feel her eyes closing and she was about to fade, she opened her eyes wide. She was not going to go down like that easy. She was going to go out fighting. And once Kashimo saw that look in her eyes, it made him smile a bit wider. After all, he had recognized it before, the look of a sorcerer that was determined to make sure they went out with a bang. Even though Nobara was physically exhausted and taken a lot of damage, Nobara was still determined to make sure she went out fighting. As Nobara took out 4 more nails, overcharged them to the max amount that she could, and Kashimo rushed towards it, dodging the first 3 nails, before he used his bow staff to deflect the last one. But even deflecting this one was notably much more difficult. But mid-deflection, Nobara activated Hairpin once again, trying to get one last stab on Kashimo, but before it could land, Kashimo ducked underneath, dodging it just barely. Still yet to admit, he was impressed. She was certainly the strongest person that he had fought in this Culling game so far. But now was her time to die, as he closed the distance between them again and landed a punch right on Nobara's gut, one so hard it winded her completely and knocked her out. But a few seconds before she was knocked out, she heard something weird. A weird love song. As Akari and Jackpot had arrived right on time, landing a kick on Kashimo's jaw and sending him flying. Once Nobara woke up again, she was leaned against somebody. Someone familiar. Panda. Shoso and Sanzo had also arrived, and were keeping watch over Nobara, because there was somebody else there that was present with them. That person, of course, being Kashimo Hajime. Even though he already had told them that he wasn't planning to kill Nobara, they were still not really that trusting of him. Granted, Kashimo also knew, and they also knew, if he really wanted to kill Nobara, there wasn't really anything they could do to stop him. Granted, that wasn't exactly fully true, considering the fact that Kashimo was completely drained of curse energy. A part of him was still slightly annoyed at the fact that he got outsmarted the way he did by Hikari, but at the same time, he was more than fine with it. That was the way that sorcery battle went. While Nobara was knocked out and unconscious, a battle between Hikari and Kashimo went, going the exact same as canon, with Kashimo allowing Hikari to use his remaining 100 points. But seeing that Nobara was now awake, Kashimo walked over to them and told them, "Good job. You managed to impress me, and other than Hikari, most of the dirtbags from your generation haven't really done that well. Keep getting stronger and we might have a rematch eventually. Of course, unless I battle Sukuna first." And that caused a faint smirk to rise on Nobara as she told them that next time she was going to be the one who won. And all of them were rather happy. After all, this colony had also been a massive success for them. Before they then all saw Momo land in front of them in order to pass them a message. She told them they had successfully been able to allow the first rule that they wanted to add, to allow players to transfer points between each other to prevent the curse technique removal. She then told them the other 3 rules they were preparing to add. A rule to allow players to withdraw from the Culling game border by using 100 points to let a substitute take their place. One that would disable the jamming of electrical signals in order to allow communication across colonies. And one that would allow free entry and exit of colonies. And most of all, the more important news was they had more than enough points to add quite a lot of the rules they wanted as well. Though Momo also told them that they didn't need to have rule 3 in immediately. After all, they did have someone that could do communications, being Maki. And that led to some confusion among them. After all, shouldn't Maki also have the same problem of not being able to go through the colony barriers? Though Momo then explained that Maki had now become something completely different in comparison to what she was before. A monster. Still, that was rather important for them to know. Momo recommended for now for them to all just stay put and wait for the signal to allow them to exit the colony, and to see if there were any new allies that they could potentially gain while here. About a day later after all these events took place, Megumi Fushiguro would land inside Tokyo Colony No. 1. Up next, Megumi was going to have to find Yuji Itadori. But locating him was going to be a lot easier said than done. After all, the entirety of the Tokyo Colony to search through. At the same time, at the base that Yuji and his allies had created, they had noticed that someone else had entered into the Culling game's barrier, and when they checked, they saw that person was Megumi Fushiguro. Now, of course, Yuji knew he had to go no matter what. He needed to go make sure Megumi was okay, but he was debating on who he should bring with them, if anyone at all. Which led to Kyoto volunteering. After all, Kyoto was a shadow person as well, so he was kind of curious what the 10 Shadows wielder was going to be like. And while Hana debated on volunteering for a second, she decided not to. After all, she still didn't feel she was ready to meet Megumi yet. As Yuji and Kyoto took off in order to greet Megumi and bring him into the rest of the Alliance. After they did that, they'd be able to discuss from there what their next steps in their plan should be. As they met up, at first Megumi was caught a little bit off guard by the appearance of a full-on Shadow Man, but at the same time Yuji told them they were an ally, and they were actually surprisingly human. At first Megumi was slightly questioning it until he remembered the existence of the death paintings, and that kinda answered it for him in his head. Still, he was rather happy to have a strong ally on their side. Before Yuji then told them they had more than one ally. They actually had a couple that they had recently gained, one that was just as strong as Kyoto. And the others that, while aren't as strong, definitely are smart, at least in Regi's case. One of them also had access to RCT, so they are probably useful. He had no idea about Remy though. Remy didn't seem that intelligent. Still, Megumi was rather happy to see things had gone well. After all, he knew if he was in their position, he probably would not have been able to make diplomacy. If anything, he might have ended up trying to kill them. After all, he was still in a little bit of a rush. He wanted to make sure Sumiki could be free as fast as possible. But they managed to succeed in everything. They got all the points necessary in order to add those rules. If Megumi was being honest, a small part of him was feeling useless right now. After all, everyone else already did their parts. The only thing that Megumi really did was get Yuji back into the fight and bring Akari in. And even then, judging by how everything went here, he didn't really think Akari was necessary to have brought in. Yuji was already able to deal with his mindset on his own and gone back on the right track, and now he looks to be mentally better and healthier than ever. But Megumi shook that off. What did it matter that he wasn't able to accomplish much? In the end, he was going to get his sister back. In the end, he was going to get Gojo free and everything could go back to normal. That was all he wanted. No, that was all he needed. Everything to go back to normal. Maybe even after this he might end up quitting being a Jujutsu sorcerer once and for all. But that he'd have to wait and see. As y'all landed at the hotel, they had made their temporary base of operations, before a certain person walked behind Megami and tapped him on the shoulder, as they then said, "You know, I feel like we should have met earlier." That person, of course, being Takaba. As Megami then blinked a bit in confusion and looked over at Takaba, questioning who this man was. This was Takaba, their comedian, though they had no idea what they were saying. And Megami was able to tell just by sensing them who was the strong person here, that being Jin, the man who looks like a furnace. Alongside Kyoto and Yuji, of course. Though I looked over to the blonde girl and felt there was something odd about her, almost as if there was something that looked familiar. That was something Megami would have to ask about later. After all, they weren't coming out of their way to introduce themselves, as they all headed inside in order to begin to plan for what their next move should be. They by this point had more than enough points to begin their plan, but for now they were just waiting for a little bit longer. They needed to wait until they could get Tsumiki. But during this time, the group decided they were going to do something else. They had time to train, so they might as well use it, especially considering Toto was already planning to spar against both Kyoto and Jin in order to test his strength against them, so they thought now was the perfect time to do so. They weren't expecting to make too many gains, but any gains would be more than having nothing at all. At best, they would end up keeping themselves sharp. However, not all could be peaceful, as 5 days later an invader would come to Tengen's palace, to the Tomb of the Star, that person being Kenjaku, the man responsible for Shibuya and sealing away Satoru Gojo. Now up next, I do want to spend some time talking about the sponsor to the channel, Fan Dominion, an old friend of the channel that has a ton of cool anime merch, especially on the JJK side of things, but cool merch overall. And if you're looking for something that looks stylish, something that you can wear out in public and not be called a weeb for, but at the same time be recognized by your friends for wearing something really cool, they have good things in store for you. Or are you looking for something to complete your cosplay with? Well, Fan Dominion has you covered, and don't worry, they aren't expensive at all. And on top of that, if you use my code both in the description as well as on screen now, you can get a 10% discount. Yep, that's right, a 10% discount. However, now I'm going to spend some time showing off their beautiful catalog. And if you like any of this merch and any of this merch looks awesome to you, remember our code EF10 and you'll be able to get a 10% discount. Anyways, I'm going to see y'all later.